Hey everyone, welcome to our channel, and thank you for your support. If there's a favorite novel on the channel and you want the next part, you're just one step away. Become a Patreon member and I can make it depending on your tier. Thank you for your attention.
Hey, Ward, long time no see. George smiled and came forward to say hello. A guy named Ward didn't like women, which caused him to suffer bullying in the military camp, and he was even more miserable when his legs were blown off in a battle. But this guy showed up at the veterans bar in full today and couldn't help but cause an uproar. Many disabled soldiers had the same idea as George, and wanted to get information from Ward so that they could become able-bodied people again. Hehe, isn't this George? Ward is a fair-looking young man with blonde hair. His muscular arms are slightly arched and his orchid fingers are raised. Long time no see, you have to buy me a drink. So George took Ward to the bar counter. For information, George and Ted reluctantly ordered several glasses of expensive drinks to entertain Ward. This guy took an exaggerated sip of wine, then stuck out his tongue and licked the corner of his mouth. I know you want to ask me how I recovered, right? George smiled and nodded, indicating that they both wanted to recover. Well, here's the thing. Ward began to tell his story. After the war, Ward lost his legs and was disheartened. After a hangover, the unlucky Ward lost his retirement pay in a motel. Until one time, Ward entertained a customer. The customer learned about Ward's past story and immediately revealed his identity. The other party was the nephew of a high-ranking general in the army, and he expressed his ability to restore Ward to health. That's using army super serum. This serum has been produced in batches, but since the super soldiers on Lie Island were easily wiped out by Japanese demons, the army's top brass began to change direction. They preferred to cultivate mutants and extract mutant genes to create mutant serum. To put it simply, the top management believes that the super serum cannot save the United States and mutants are the future. Therefore, the entire warehouse of super serum was stored in a certain warehouse as a reward for the military to motivate soldiers. For example, only by killing as many people as possible on the battlefield and being loyal to the army would they be eligible to be injected with the super serum and become superhuman. The Eagle Army is so dirty that it can shoot down the officials sent by the president to investigate with missiles without any evidence. Therefore, these serums have naturally become a tool for some people to make money. Ordinary people naturally don't have that much money to inject serum. The wealthy people know that there is a risk of failure in injecting the serum, so they naturally choose to refuse because they care about their lives. After all, no one wants to run around the world looking like the Red Skull. Therefore, this group of people set their sights on people like Ward, intending to make a huge profit from them. If they join the army, they are not afraid of death, they have retirement pay, and their buffs are full. They like to cooperate with such people. After all, they will not be responsible even if they die. So, in the end, Ward underwent surgery and was left hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. But the unlucky Ward didn't have a penny on him. He had no choice but to say that he would introduce more customers to the other party and take a commission from them to repay the debt. That's why Ward is here. You mean, super serum? George and the two were surprised. They didn't expect Ward to be transformed by the super serum. Ward smiled. Yes, it's the super serum. They can restore your health. That's why he's here. The US Army has a group of super soldier debt collection teams. If he dares not to pay back the money, Ward will lose his life and his body will be used again. George and Ted looked at each other, a little embarrassed. But, we don't have that much money to buy the super serum. No money. Ward immediately changed his face and stood up with a sneer. If you don't have money, what nonsense are you talking about? Come to me when you have money. After saying that, Ward stood up and walked towards another veteran, introducing the benefits of the super serum to him. It seems that as long as you are injected with the super serum, you will be the next Geno Wilson, flying to the sky and escaping to the earth, with beauty, wealth, power, everything you want. George withdrew his gaze and looked at Ted, who had a gloomy face. What should we do? The atmosphere was a little dull for a while. The good news is that there is a serum that can restore them to normal people and gain powerful strength and a strong body. The bad news is, they have no money. Ted gritted his teeth and stared at George. George, we once lived and died together on the battlefield. Can I trust you? George frowned and nodded without hesitation. Of course, you saved my life. Okay, I have a plan here. Ted clenched his fists and said his plan. We sold everything of value in the house that could be sold, and then mortgaged our property to the bank in exchange for part of the loan. George hesitated and knocked on the table, but this is not enough money for us to buy the serum. Ted shook his head and looked at George meaningfully. The money is indeed not enough for the two of us, but it is still enough to buy one for you. Then we will borrow some from other comrades. George was a little surprised, but then moved, he frowned, and said, No, Ted, you need these serums more than me? I just broke an arm. No, listen to me. I will collect money for you and we can buy this serum. Ted's attitude was firm. He patted George on the shoulder. My brother, you need these serums far more than I do. Looking at Ted with a sincere face, George secretly vowed that he must let his good brothers also use the super soldier serum. Soon, the two began to take action. After hard work, the two finally scraped together enough money to buy the super serum and approached Ward. And the other party did not disappoint them, and soon took George to an underground base somewhere in Washington. George lay down in the instrument, and after a burst of sparks and lightning, a changed George appeared again. He has a strong body, perfect 8-pack ABS, and a regenerated left arm. George closed his eyes and felt the new arm, and couldn't help but exclaimed, "Wow, I feel full of power." After gaining a strong body and even being able to lift a car with his bare hands, George did not immediately enjoy the power he had gained, but ran to find his friend Ted. At this moment, in a dilapidated motel, George couldn't help shouting excitedly, "Ted, are you in there? I succeeded, I gained great power." Ted's voice soon came from inside the room, but his voice sounded a little tired. "Yeah, George, I'm happy for you. But it's time for you to move on to a better life." "What do you mean?" George couldn't help but frown, and quickly kicked open the wooden door of the hotel, only to see Ted lying in the bathtub, his hands wet with water, intending to plug in the power supply and send him to his death. "Stop it, Ted." George jumped up and grabbed Ted's wrist, staring into his friend's eyes. "Listen to me, buddy. I will definitely make you a normal person and let you also be injected with super serum. Believe me." While George was thinking hard about how to make money to buy the super soldier serum for Ted, Gino, who was far away at the Tianjian bureau, also received good news. Zola knocked on the office door with excitement on her face. After receiving Gino's permission, the other party pushed up his glasses and reported the good news as if he was taking credit. "Admiral Gino, the new super soldier serum has been produced. Thanks to Dr. Erskine's help, we cracked the formula for Compound 5 in just one night and neutralized it with the super soldier serum to create a more powerful serum." In the original comics, Compound No was also created by scientists from a mustache country during World War II, so the ingredient list of this thing cannot be any rare material. With the cooperation of two scientific research experts, Erskine and Dr. Zola, it took only one day to transform the new version of the serum. "By the way, Sir Gino, this serum needs a new name." Dr. Zola handed over the serum with flattering hands. The new serum has a dark purple hue. Gino took the serum and placed it in the sun. The serum shone like an amethyst. "Well, let's call it the Hope Serum. It will bring us hope as humans." Gino returned the serum to Zola, stood up and looked down at the traffic outside the window with his hands behind his back. Zola put away the serum and asked hesitantly, "So is it possible to conduct human experiments?" To be honest, he also wanted to see how much change this serum could bring to users. "Experimenter," Gino murmured, and then a familiar figure flashed through his mind. Gino laughed in his heart and turned to look at Dr. Zola. "Dr. Zola, regarding the experimenter, I have a suitable candidate. First of all, this person must be upright, brave, kind, fearless, righteous, and willing to fight for the American people." Zola's black face asked, "Well, is there such a person in the world?" As a scientist, Zola believes more in the theory of evolution, survival of the fittest, and survival of the fittest. Human beings are the best among them. Especially after following the Red Skull for so many years, Zola does not believe that such a person exists in the world. "Of course, my friend, he once underwent a super serum experiment with me." Gino smiled and patted Zola on the shoulder, revealing the mystery. "That person is our Steve." Because of the reason why Gino was born, Steve didn't take on the name of Captain America, so it's normal for Zora not to recognize Steve. As for where Steve is now, after the war apparently ended, Bucky seemed to disappear from the world. There was no other way. Steve returned to New York in despair and was fighting crime in Brooklyn. So Dr. Zola, choosing Steve will not only make us happy, but I believe Dr. Erskine will also be very happy. Zola nodded in agreement. Gino was the boss. He was right. As a wage earner, he did not dare to contradict Gino. So, the plan was finalized. The new batch of experimenters is none other than Handsome Steve. "Okay, Dr. Zola, go tell Dr. Erskine to prepare for the experiment. I'll go find our big butt boy." In fact, Gino had darker thoughts that he didn't tell Dr. Zola. After all, as long as it is an experiment, there are risks, so let the upright Steve try the reagent first. If it works, let my two younger brothers and sisters be injected with the serum. Moreover, Gino is confident that Steve will not reject his proposal. As long as Bucky is brought out, Steve will definitely accept the experimental plan. Gino smiled and pushed open the window. His cloak drove his body like a big bird to fly out of the window. Immediately, Gino raised his fists and accelerated violently. His fists broke through the airwaves and wind, and flew towards distant Brooklyn. Gino quickly arrived in Brooklyn, New York. It is located on the east side of Manhattan, across a river from Long Island. It was a famous industrial area during World War II. Many tall chimneys spewed thick smoke outwards. If future generations of environmentally friendly girls saw this scene, they would not help but shout, "How brave, how dare you." Gino still remembers that when he first came here, he was a poor orphan, but now, he has become a national of the motherland that attracts worldwide attention. Take back your mind. Gino looked around the Brooklyn neighborhood below and soon found Steve in a dark alley. At this moment, Steve is fighting a group of gangsters. He held up his shield and kept running, rushing towards the gangsters. As if attracted by some mysterious force, the group of people fired at the shield that Steve blocked in front of them. The bullet hit the strong shield, making a clanging sound. Steve quickly approached the crowd, knocked down one person with the shield, and then knocked down another person with a beautiful uppercut. But the noise created by a group of people soon attracted a large number of gangsters. Enemies came from all directions to surround Steve. Just when the little leader ordered to fire, a figure fell from the sky and landed in front of Steve. Many people recognized the highly identifiable battle uniform. The dark-toned vibranium armor is paired with a dark red cloak that looks like it's printed with blood, and his signature sunny and cheerful smile. These murderous gangsters suddenly looked like pheasants with their necks strangled, screaming at the top of their lungs, "It's Superman! Motherlander!" They never expected that the god on Earth would suddenly appear here. Everyone is just selling fans to make some money, so there is no need to attract people from the motherland, right? In the dark alley at this moment, ignoring the trembling gangsters who were trembling with fear, the visitor had a sunny and cheerful smile. Zileshu put his arm around Steve's shoulders and said with a smile, "Looks like I'm not too late, Steve." Gino suddenly appeared, which surprised Steve a little. "Gino, why are you here? I have something to ask you about, but now is not the time to talk about it." Gino let go of Steve, put his hands behind his back, took a step forward expressionlessly, and locked his eyes on the gang leader. "Gentlemen, I'll give you 10 seconds to put down your weapons, then line up and go to the police station to surrender. Do you have any opinions?" The gangsters looked at each other. "Have any objections? Who dares to have an opinion?" Therefore, Gino's order was like the sound of heaven. The gangsters immediately threw away their weapons, lined up like primary school students and walked towards the police station. Looking at this ridiculous scene, Steve picked up the shield on the ground with bitterness on his face. It feels like this every time. Things that he has worked so hard to accomplish seem to be easy in Gino's eyes. The other party doesn't even need to take action, just a few simple words can make the gangsters line up to surrender. Gino looked at the depressed Steve and frowned secretly. A negative attitude was not conducive to the experiment. He had to find a way to cheer Steve up. So, Gino hooked Steve's neck again, smiled and snapped his fingers. "Come on, Steve, let's go get a drink." End of this chapter. A bar in Brooklyn. Some vintage wine tables have wine stain marks. The air smelled of alcohol mixed with vomit. The old record player in the corner of the bar plays a melodious melody, and combined with the warm-colored lighting, creates an ambiguous atmosphere. In a noisy environment, men and women sat down here and exchanged cups with each other. In the box, two sturdy figures sat opposite each other. The man on the left kept drinking heavily, as if this could numb all worries and worries. Pressing the peaked cap on his head, Gino looked at Steve, who was holding a glass of vodka and drinking heavily. However, judging from the metabolic speed of a super soldier, there was no difference between high-alcohol wine and water. Gino took a sip of vodka and asked lightly, "You look like you're in a bad mood, Steve. Is it because of Bucky?" Steve smiled bitterly, put down the wine glass in his hand, and shook his head. "I really can't hide anything from you, Gino." He was indeed a little worried about Bucky's whereabouts. Now that the Red Skull was dead, Bucky was missing, which made Steve worried. Gino smiled lightly and pointed at Steve's bitter face. "Your thoughts are written on your face, Steve." "Yeah, I'm worried about Bucky. He has become so strong and doesn't seem to recognize me anymore." Steve's eyes dimmed. "Gino, you know, I envy you very much. Since we were injected with the super soldier serum at the same time, the difference between you and me is huge." Steve lamented endlessly. If he and Gino were compared as students, then Gino would be a super prodigy who was proficient in everything and could even build rockets with his bare hands, while he was just an ordinary student and not taken seriously at all. Also injected with the super soldier serum, Gino can fly easily, and neither bullets, cannons, nor even energy weapons can hurt him. His eyes can fire terrifying heat vision destructive weapons, easily tearing apart any enemy. At the same time, Gino has a handsome appearance and a perfect body. He is like the perfect god in the legend. It is no wonder that the American people call Gino the god on Earth. Looking back at myself, it seems that I have been Gino's foil from the beginning. No, not even a foil, just a dispensable existence. Like a clown who plays an inconspicuous supporting role in a beautiful stage play, or a cleaner who climbs onto the stage to clean up after the audience has dispersed. "Steve, I won't allow you to demean yourself like that." Gino interrupted Steve's self-deprecation. The young man is young. What emotion does he feel playing here? You know, even the dung-pushing bugs have their own effect. Gino is not going to let Steve give up on himself. It's not a bad idea to be a serum guinea pig for yourself. Maybe he can become stronger again and regain the idiot Bucky. However, in order to make Steve willing to cooperate, Gino decided to fool Steve and make a big deal for the young man. While thinking about it, Gino stood up and walked to Steve, patted Steve on the shoulder, and said seriously, "Steve, I'm just an ordinary person who has acquired extraordinary abilities." Steve black question mark face, ordinary person, can ordinary people kill people with hot eyes? But Gino ignored Steve's weird expression and said with a cheerful smile, "This war was won by thousands of ordinary people. So, Steve, I'm not a hero." Gino patted Steve on the shoulder and nodded slowly towards him with a smile. "It's the countless soldiers like you who are fighting on the front line who are the real heroes." Then, Gino put his arms around Steve's neck again, and said with a serious face, "Also, I came to you this time, and not to reminisce, but the free people of America need your strength again, Steve. The remnants of the evil empire of Hydra are still here to stay." Sure enough, when he heard the two keywords people and Hydra, Steve, who was originally depressed, immediately became energetic. As we all know, Steve has three loves in his life, Hydra, the people, and his gay friend Bucky. Steve stood up and stared at Gino with firm eyes. Stop talking, Gino. Is there anything you need my help with? I won't refuse. Gino smiled. This was the Steve he wanted to see. He was very good and energetic. So, Gino lowered his voice and told Steve his purpose. Steve, do you want to become stronger? Accept the Hope Serum experiment, and you may become as powerful as me. Gino only half said, not mentioning the possible risks of the experiment at all, but instead exaggerating the benefits of the experiment. Listening to Gino's words, Steve's expression paused, and he nodded almost without thinking. Of course, I am willing to become stronger. In fact, if Gino hadn't appeared, Steve might be satisfied with who he is now. He got rid of his thin physique and became handsome. He can also pull a helicopter and jump 3 meters high. Not only does she have 8-pack abs, but she also has an American-style butt that suits both men and women. But as there is an old saying in the East, people are more irritating than others. Compared with Gino, the abilities he possesses are simply not enough. So when Steve heard Gino tell him that he could become stronger, Steve agreed without hesitation. No matter what, he will not give up on Bucky, even if he has to find Bucky even to the end of the world. He wants to become stronger so that he can have the strength to travel around the world to find his friend Bucky. After receiving a positive reply, Gino nodded with satisfaction. Great, then come with me, Steve, and we'll start the experiment tonight. Gino led Steve out of the bar, and then Gino tore off his clothes, revealing his vibranium armor, and carried Steve into the sky, tearing through the night and turning into a stream of light flying towards Washington. The lights in Washington are brightly lit at night, and at this moment, many agents of the Tianjian Bureau have already gone home from get-off work to rest. As a good boss, Gino never forces his employees to enjoy benefits and strictly abides by the 8-hour work system. However, at this time, the door of Tianjian Bureau was already filled with a bunch of scientists in white coats. These creatures called scientists are usually obsessed with experimental research in underground bases. But tonight, perhaps everyone will witness history under the leadership of Gino. Therefore, a group of scientific researchers followed the two bosses Erskine and Dr. Zola and quietly waited for Gino's return. A sonic boom sounded in the night sky not far away. Everyone looked up and saw an afterimage passing by in the night sky, flying towards them. It's appeared? That stream of light is Colonel Gino. The next second, Gino dropped from the sky carrying Steve and appeared in everyone's sight. Admiral Gino, you are back. Dr. Zola hurried forward. Gino turned to look at Steve, who was chatting with Dr. Erskine, and then asked, Dr. Zola, are the experimental equipment ready? End of this chapter. Tianjian Bureau Underground Base. A light blue oval-shaped instrument filled with precise circuits lay quietly in the center of the room. There is a transparent glass on it to observe the user's facial expressions. Gino smiled and patted Steve on the shoulder. Steve, are you ready? Steve took a deep breath and nodded slowly. Of course, I'm ready. With that said, the boy with the perky butt pulled off his shirt, took off his clothes, and strode into the instrument. Lying inside the familiar instrument again, Steve's thoughts were swirling in his mind. Soon an experimental assistant came forward to hold down Steve's limbs, and used vibranium sleeves to imprison Steve's limbs to prevent him from hurting himself due to violent struggle during the experiment. As the hatch closed and the circuit connected, the oval-shaped cabin enveloping Steve erupted in pale blue light. Gino took the Hope Serum from Zola and inserted it into the instrument. The lavender serum slowly flowed into the instrument, and a row of cold metal syringes penetrated Steve's skin. As the serum was slowly injected into the blood vessels, dyeing most of Steve's body purple, Steve could only feel that every cell in his body was wailing and screaming. What? Steve's face was ferocious, his eyes were wide open, and the muscles all over his body seemed to be torn and reorganized under the transformation of the serum. The strong muscles caused the body to tremble violently, and his beautiful blue eyes rolled. Steve's survival instinct made him unable to help but struggle, but the vibranium locks firmly restrained his limbs to prevent him from hurting himself. Gino put his hands on the glass to observe Steve, who was grinning and twitching all over. He couldn't help but think of the scene where Wolf Warrior was electrocuted. All I can say is, it's so similar. Time passed slowly, and the originally twitching body adapted to the Hope Serum, and the No compound in the serum began to take effect. Through his clairvoyance ability, Gino could clearly see a ball of hot yellow light gradually gathering under Steve's chest muscles. As Steve breathed rapidly, this light is getting stronger, and it will explode and bury everyone at any time. Everyone, leave here immediately. Gino gave the order without changing his face. Ordinary people simply cannot withstand such a powerful energy explosion. Gino does not want Erskine and Zora to die here. These two are good treasures of the Sword Bureau. Dr. Zola and Erskine also saw the dazzling yellow light on Steve's chest and quickly called the experimenters to retreat. After everyone left, Gino stared at the mutating Steve with interest, his hands behind his back. What? As if it was the critical point of energy gathering, Steve roared, and then the hot orange energy beam in his chest suddenly exploded. The violent explosion overturned the cabin door, and the solid cement pillar was also blown into rubble in the explosion. Is this what Steve is capable of? Shooting lasers from his chest. Gino raised his hand and slapped it against his cabin door. Looking through the white mist, Steve had already jumped out of the hatch. His strong chest muscles were undulating violently. Steve even felt guilty and touched his chest, as if he suspected that the beam of light just now was really made by himself. Arrived? Gino clapped his hands gently, raising wind waves to disperse the white mist, and walked towards Steve with a smile. Congratulations, Steve, the experiment was successful. Steve had a puzzled expression on his face, his big eyes staring at his chest. I seemed to have a new ability just now. Gino smiled and nodded, and then pointed to a concrete wall. Try your new ability, Steve. Steve hesitated and touched his nose. This is not good, after all, it is a public facility. Gino shrugged. Anyway, this laboratory has been destroyed by your bombing. It's no problem to blow up another cement wall. Will it damage base facilities? Gino just got a large sum of money from Congress, and the money he spent was not his own, so he didn't feel bad at all. Steve was persuaded by Gino, and he actually wanted to understand his new ability deep down in his heart, so Steve took a deep breath and slowly mobilized the energy in his body to gather in his chest. Next second, Steve's chest sprayed thick orange energy rays, shattering the concrete wall the moment it hit it. The energy of the light beam did not stop until it melted dozens of laboratories before being extinguished. After releasing the energy ray, Steve suddenly turned pale, and it could be seen that the move just now consumed a lot of energy. Gino smiled with satisfaction. That's great, Steve. Congratulations on taking your first step as a superhero. As the old saying goes, the poor rely on mutation, and the rich rely on technology. How can one become a superhero and a trendsetter of the times without superpowers? Steve looked at Gino gratefully and said sincerely, "Thank you, Gino. Without you, I would not have awakened such a powerful superpower." At this moment, Steve already regards Gino as his best friend besides Bucky. Gino is a really good person. He thinks of him immediately when he has good things. He really makes me cry to death. Gino didn't respond to Steve's thanks. He couldn't tell Steve, "You're just here to test the medicine." So, Gino changed the subject, smiled and hugged Steve's neck. "Steve, we are friends. There is no need to be so polite. Now, you need to think of a code name." Code name. Steve tilted his head and stared at Gino in confusion. Gino pointed at himself. "For example, for me, people call me Superman, and they also call me a native of the motherland. This is my codename recognized by the public, or it can be called a title. In short, it is a symbol of your status as a superhero. And every superhero needs a codename when debuting. This is a rule on the road." Gino mysteriously told Steve about the importance of codenames. And the codename must be impressive and remembered as soon as you hear it. For example, Spider-Man cannot be called Bugman, and Iron Man cannot be called Iron Can. In fact, in Gino's view, many masked heroes have more or less a mental illness. After putting on the mask, they show another personality. When they take off the mask, they return to their original personality. Fortunately, Gino doesn't have such worries. He is who he is, and his fists are strong enough, so he doesn't need to hide his true identity. And, when it comes to Gino's plan, he needs Steve to have a resounding title. Steve hesitated and shook his head. "I don't know what title I need." In Steve's view, the title is not important. What is important is whether a person's behavior and words and deeds in becoming a superhero are consistent. Gino raised his eyebrows, and suddenly he had a bad taste. He narrowed his eyes and smiled and said, "I don't know what code name to think of. It's easy. How about I pick one for you? You are a soldier, you identify with your identity, and your ideal is to defend justice and ordinary people." Gino smiled and talked about Steve's character traits, causing the boy with the pert butt to nod his head. "So based on these characteristics, I gave you a very appropriate title. Just call you Shock Boy, Shock Kid." Steve tilted his head and whispered the codename Gino had given him. He couldn't help but his eyes lit up and he said in surprise, "This title is very good. The Electric Shock Boy represents swiftness and speed." Steve was very happy with this. Gino took Steve out of the laboratory, looked at Steve thoughtfully, and said calmly, "Want to test how strong you are now, Steve?" Steve raised his head and looked at Gino. "What do you mean?" "Fight with me, Steve, and show me the power of the Hope Serum." With a smile on his face, Gino led Steve to the training ground. He was actually quite curious about Steve's strength after the transformation. After all, this is Steve's second transformation, and it's not known whether Steve's strength and speed have increased except for the superpower of shooting lasers from his chest. Want to know more about these questions? It's very simple, just have a fight and you will know. Steve couldn't help but feel a little moved by Gino's proposal. To be honest, he also wants to see how strong he is now, but most people simply can't let themselves go all out. If they want to know their full strength, they can only discuss it with Gino. As a result, the two finally reached a consensus and had a polite discussion and exchange. Soon, Gino and Steve passed through dozens of rooms and finally walked into an empty training ground. Because they have money, this training base occupies a huge area, the size of a football field, so they don't have to worry about being unable to display their abilities due to the small space. The surrounding walls were replaced with cement walls, making the training room look gray and slightly depressing. The two distanced themselves. "Let's get started." Gino snapped his fingers lightly and walked out of the vibranium suit. Wearing a white shirt, he nodded to Steve with his hands behind his back, gesturing for him to take action. Okay." Standing on the concrete floor, Steve took a deep breath. The next second, Steve's legs exerted force, and he immediately rushed towards Gino with a wave of air, and then clenched his fist and slammed Gino's cheek. Facing the incoming fist, Gino turned his head slightly and easily dodged it while commenting leisurely. The speed is significantly improved, but not fast enough. Steve didn't stop. After a failed attack, he changed tactics again and raised his knee to hit Gino's abdomen. Gino just raised his legs and collided with each other. Feeling a lot of force coming from his thigh, Gino raised his eyebrows and smiled. The strength has also been significantly enhanced. On the other hand, Steve frowned, feeling a burning pain in his thigh, and he couldn't help but sigh at Gino's abnormal defense. Boom. The two exchanged fists again, and the huge impact made Steve unable to stop himself from retreating. Steve looked deeply at Gino, who was standing there, and couldn't help but smile bitterly. This is still the case when you hold back your strength, Jay. Promise. Gino didn't answer, just shrugged and smiled. If he used all his strength, maybe the entire underground base would be buried. Okay, Steve, use your strongest killing move, don't worry about hurting me, Gino shouted to Steve. Hearing this, Steve nodded slowly, straightened his chest, and his strong chest slowly lit up with a dazzling yellow light. Buzz. After the laser energy was briefly charged, it turned into a beam of light that reached the sky and hit Gino with a boom. Gino did not dodge, his eyes also glowed red, and his red heat vision suddenly shot towards the yellow laser. The two energies intertwined with each other and exploded after a brief intersection, setting off a violent storm centered on the energy explosion point. Gino turned off his heat vision, and the violent wind hit him, but he couldn't shake him at all. On the other side, Steve took out his shield and struggled to withstand the energy storm. The violent energy swept over the two of them and gradually extinguished. When the storm subsided, Steve slowly raised his head and caught a glimpse of the center of the training ground. The originally flat concrete roadside had now turned into a huge pit. Ho. Steve was breathing violently. Gino slowly walked towards Steve and patted Steve on the shoulder. Well done, Steve. At least you lasted 2 seconds. Steve looked bitter and followed Gino out of the training ground. Good performance. From Gino's point of view, does fighting with him seem like a joke? The two walked into the elevator. As the elevator started slowly, Gino turned to ask Steve, what are your plans next? Are you looking for Bucky? Steve nodded. Gino smiled slightly. It was okay. He used Steve to find Bucky for him, and followed the clues to detect Kang's traces. It is undeniable that Steve and Bucky are like a magnet. If you let Steve find Bucky, he will always find him. The elevator reached the first floor. As soon as Gino and Steve stepped out of the elevator, Erskine and Zora surrounded them. Admiral Gino, how was the experiment? What superpower has Steve awakened? Gino smiled and pressed his hands to signal everyone to calm down, and then said slowly, the experiment was a success, everyone. As for Steve's superpowers, let him tell you personally. With that said, Gino got rid of the fanatical scientists and returned to the office on the 8th floor alone. In the office at the moment, Natasha and Peggy were working on documents. Cough cough. Gino coughed slightly, interrupting the two of them. Uncle Gino is here. Natasha immediately threw away the documents in her hand, and Little Green Tea smiled and hugged Gino's arm, causing the cold female agent on the side to roll her eyes. Speak the truth. Gino threw his body into the chair and sat on his lap with Natasha in his arms. Rubbing the beautiful girl's smooth chin, Gino said slowly, Steve's experiment was successful. This means that I have allowed the hope serum developed by Erskine and the others to be officially put into use. Peggy also put down her pen and said in surprise, did the experiment succeed? Steve really awakened his superpower. Yes, he can emit laser energy from his chest, and the power is pretty good. Gino nodded indifferently. So, let me ask you, are you willing to be injected with the hope serum to awaken your superpowers? The two women were stunned by Gino's words. They couldn't help but recall Gino's abilities, flying, heat vision, supervision, almost omnipotent. Natasha was the first to react. Her little face became excited. She hugged Gino's neck and kissed her sweetly. Of course, who would refuse to become a super soldier? Moreover, by becoming a super soldier, his lifespan can also be extended, and then he will be able to spend more time with Gino. Peggy didn't care about being reserved, and hurriedly walked to Gino, sat on Gino's other thigh, glanced at Natasha, and said with a smile, is it really okay? I won't cause any trouble to you, right? Natasha secretly cursed. Damn it, Peggy won again this time. She was just acting coquettishly, but the other party could consider the problem from Gino's point of view. Damn it. Gino shook his head subconsciously and replied casually, of course there won't be any trouble. I plan to set up several companies in New York, and it's time to launch a superhero project. Gino had already started planning a superhero plan. Facing Natasha's puzzled look, Gino smiled and said, the so-called superhero plan is. End of this chapter. Superhero project. This is something Gino has been thinking about since he obtained Compound No. There will only be more and more enemies in the future, and they will become more powerful, and Gino plans to increase his power and attract more superheroes to join his ranks. Ordinary people naturally have a yearning for superheroes, and if done properly, superheroes can also debut as idols. At that time, these superheroes will be divided into CBAS levels, and each time they advance to a level, they will be given generous rewards, as well as the attention of ordinary people, firmly binding them to themselves. For example, C-level heroes are only slightly stronger than ordinary people, and in terms of benefits, they only have a code name and a meager salary. B-level heroes must have strong strength and speed, and in terms of benefits, they will receive a fixed salary and tasks assigned by the company. A-level heroes are at least strong enough to withstand Gino's punch. In terms of benefits, they will be eligible to star in TV series and movies, their salary will be higher than that of B-level heroes, and they will be able to get their own exclusive uniforms. S-class heroes are usually able to stand alone and have strong strength or certain talents. In terms of benefits, they will receive vibranium suits made by the company and high wages, as well as the opening of personal independent movies to continuously attract fans and attention. Moreover, Gino plans to form the Super 7, and only capable superheroes are worthy of joining it. Whether they are mutants or superheroes transformed by serum, they can join the superhero company created by Gino and become superhero stars, which will naturally attract countless superhumans to join. To put it simply, Gino plans to follow the example of Walt's company next door and add hero levels to firmly bind superheroes. Coupled with the public support and fanatical fans brought by superhero stars, they can become a huge force that affects the world's situation. This is a big game, and getting the first step right is crucial. Gino now has fans all over the United States and even the world, but the vast majority of his fan base is female. This is far from enough for Gino, so he wants Peggy and Natasha to also be injected with hope serum and become superheroes, ruthlessly harvesting the wallets and eyeballs of the otakus, and making them loyal fans of Wilson Company. Gino explained roughly to Natasha. The smart woman quickly understood Gino's huge plan. The woman couldn't help but admired, this plan is great. Peggy on the side also nodded repeatedly after hearing this, but she was obviously thinking more and hesitated. However, Congress and the Pentagon, those high-level officials and politicians may not agree to the legalization bill for superheroes. Peggy's worry is not unreasonable. It is very clear to the top politicians of Eagle Sauce that Gino is pissy. The idea of those guys is usually if it disgusts you, it won't make you comfortable. Gino nodded slightly, tapped his fingers on the table, and sneered. Peggy is right, so now we need to wait for an opportunity. An opportunity to legitimize superheroes. While thinking about it, Gino also frowned in some distress. It's not easy to find this opportunity, or find a way to find some superpowered criminals to promote this plan. At the same time as Gino was thinking, a busy street in Washington at night. This street has some famous high-end restaurants, and gentlemen dressed in suits and leather shoes go in and out with their female companions. Across from the restaurant is a branch of Washington Mutual Bank. This bank was first established in 1889 and is an old bank. Because of its credit protection, many people choose to send their savings to this bank. As night falls, it's time for the bank to close. Two pot-bellied security guards pulled down the anti-theft iron door expressionlessly. After locking it 6 times, they handed the keys to their colleagues who were changing shifts and invited them to find a bar for a drink. After the two left, a sturdy figure slowly walked out of the dark alley. The street light flickered on his face. The man expressionlessly took out a black hood from his pocket and put it on his head. He pulled it to cover his cheeks, revealing only a pair of green eyes. Taking a deep breath, the man slowly walked towards the side door of the bank. Standing under the window, the man looked at the huge anti-theft iron window. He stretched out his hand and pulled hard. The iron window, which could withstand the pull of 3 strong men, let out a sour whine and was easily torn off by the man. The man hunched over and jumped into the bank hall with a slight leap. This guy seemed to be familiar with this bank. He walked around the lobby and arrived at the safe where the US dollars were stored. Faced with a safe made of ferritic stainless steel, the man did not choose to smash it open with his fists. The door of this huge safe is hundreds of meters thick and cannot be broken open with brute force alone. The man took the safe key out of his pocket. After several days of squatting, the man had already figured out the operating rules of this bank and the identity of the safe holder. Therefore, before arriving, the man snatched the safe key from the owner, put the key into the lock cylinder and twisted it gently. Crack. The huge safe opened in response. The man pushed the safe open, looked at the neatly arranged knives inside, and silently opened the nylon bag. After all 3 nylon bags were filled, the man quietly slipped out of the vault and turned away through the broken window. Hoo-hoo. At the moment of escaping, the man's heartbeat quickened and he kept running wildly. After hurriedly coming to the prepared car and throwing all the nylon bags in, the man stepped on the accelerator and drove the car into the night. The old car was driving on the road. After turning 6 or 7 streets, it stopped steadily in front of a motel in the suburbs. Sitting in the car, the roar of the car engine could be heard in his ears. The man silently pulled out the keys and took off his hood. The corner of his eye fell on the nylon bag in the rearview mirror. A retired soldier named George rubbed his cheek in disbelief. Did I succeed? His heart was beating violently and his hands were shaking uncontrollably. The man suppressed his excitement, picked up a stack of nylon bags, pushed open the hotel room door, and shouted into the room, "Ted, good news, we have money." However, there was silence in the house. There was a faint smell of blood and feces and urine in the air. George seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed drastically, and he rushed towards the house. Pushing open the old wooden door, a figure fell into a pool of blood. There was an obvious knife mark on the wrist, proving that the other party cut his wrist with a knife and committed suicide before his death. George couldn't believe what he was seeing, and the huge gap made him laugh maniacally. "Ted, why did you want to commit suicide? It was only a little bit close. I got the money. He rushed towards his best friend like crazy, shaking the cold dead body, as if he wanted to get the answer from this body. The night was getting dark, and the only response to the man was the chirping of cicadas outside the window. End of this chapter. Ted is dead. In the dark room, George sat alone on the smelly mattress until dawn, with Ted's suicide note in his hand. The content of the suicide note was very simple, asking George to start his life again in a different place, and hoping that George could help more people in need. Today's newspaper. The waiter pushed a brand new newspaper under the door. George stood up and took back the newspaper. Today's newspaper was as usual, with most of its pages devoted to the topic of Gino. Nowadays, Gino has become the traffic password of major entertainment industries. Just write about Gino and you can gain attention. It's so weird. George glanced casually and suddenly saw an interview with a soldier. The other party said that during the Battle of Belias, the god on Earth once said, "You are the real heroes." This passage seemed to contain a unique magic, and George kept repeating it. Yes, the people are the real heroes? We are the masters. George looked at the body of his best friend with feverish eyes, a flash of determination in his eyes. Ted, I will carry on your last wish. Rehabilitate more disabled soldiers. This was the same time George had his enlightenment. In the underground base of Tianjian Bureau, Natasha and Peggy were already standing in the experimental base. The two instruments were quietly placed on both sides of the room, and the lines were connected. Gino looked at the two girls quietly. Don't let me down, you must succeed. Long before the experiment, Gino had dismissed the surrounding scientists. So there are only 3 people in this experiment, Gino, Peggy, and Natasha. Peggy and Natasha were a little nervous at the moment, but they still nodded and stepped into the instrument. Gino pulled the switch. The same procedure as Steve's experiment, along with the serum injection, the two women also suffered tremendous pain. Sweat wetted their hair and stuck to their foreheads. When the equipment stopped running, the two women looked like they had been fished out of the water, soaked all over. What ability has been awakened? Gino walked towards the two of them. Natasha frowned slightly, then clenched her fists and activated her ability. The woman's figure gradually turned transparent, as if she disappeared out of thin air, leaving only a piece of clothing floating in the air. Invisibility? It's quite suitable for assassination. Gino raised his eyebrows and looked at Natasha in the invisible state. The woman's face looked a little ugly at this moment, and she muttered dissatisfiedly, "Damn it, what kind of ability is this? Is it possible that you have to wear all your clothes when performing tasks?" Natasha spoke with some gritted teeth. Some were pissed off. This is too perverted. Natasha couldn't accept this situation, even if no one would see it. She couldn't accept it in her heart. Seeing Natasha break through the defense, Gino couldn't help but smile and reassured, "This is not a problem. I remember that Wakanda has a suitable invisibility suit. When the time comes, let them design a suit for you that matches your abilities. It won't be a big problem. Other than that, what else has changed?" Natasha lifted her invisibility and reappeared in their sight. She raised her arms hesitantly. "I feel like my skin has become hard." Gino raised his eyebrows. "Invisibility plus skin enhancement? Stand still, let me try it for you." Gino's eyes lit up red, and he controlled the temperature to hit Natasha's arm. The woman was startled at first, but quickly calmed down and cooperated with the experiment. As Gino slowly increased his power, Natasha felt the stinging pain coming from her arm and finally asked to stop. Gino turned off his heat vision, and Natasha quickly asked about the situation. Gino nodded slightly. "Yes, the defense is pretty good. Congratulations, you are now able to withstand bullets and shells." After roughly understanding Natasha's abilities, Gino turned to ask Peggy. At this moment, Peggy's white shirt was wet with sweat, revealing her perfect curves. The woman crossed her arms and glared at Gino with dissatisfaction, and then said, "I feel like I don't have much ability, but my strength has become stronger." In this regard, Peggy was a little disappointed. Even Natasha had gained the ability to become invisible, but she didn't seem to have changed much. Gino turned on the clairvoyance, observed Peggy's tight muscles, and shook his head in denial. "That's not necessarily the case, Peggy. Try to attack me." The woman frowned. "Are you sure?" "Of course." Gino smiled nonchalantly. "Do you think you can hurt me?" "It is good." Peggy gritted her teeth and then punched Gino. The huge force caused her fist to turn into an afterimage. Even Peggy did not expect that her punch would be so fast. "Yes, your speed and strength have been greatly enhanced." Gino raised his head and caught Peggy's fist. The force of this punch was equivalent to the impact of a car. Bang! Gino raised his leg and kicked Peggy again. The right foot kicked Peggy in the abdomen, which only made the woman take a few steps back. Peggy rubbed her sore belly. Her British ladylike demeanor was now forgotten, and she roared and attacked Gino again. Bang bang bang. Gino easily blocked the incoming punch and said with a smile, "The defense is not bad either." Gino estimated that Peggy's current physical fitness could easily match Queen Maeve of the next universe, as she was excellent in terms of speed, strength, and defense. "Okay, that's it." Gino grabbed Peggy's arm and gently pulled the woman into his arms. He then looked at Natasha, who was watching the battle, and chuckled, "We have more important things now. Things to do." Gino led the two women to the office on the 8th floor, turned around and said with a smile, "For example, in some aspects, accurate values have not yet been obtained. It has to be said that after being strengthened by the Hope Serum, the two women's combat effectiveness has been significantly enhanced. Until nightfall, Gino put on the vibranium suit, opened the window and flew towards Wakanda. Soon, after passing through a bunch of lagging Nego tribesmen, Gino saw the familiar blue barrier again. Before Gino could knock on the door to break through the defensive shield, T'Chaka came out of the light shield with a bunch of guards to welcome Gino. Admiral Gino, welcome to Wakanda. T'Chaka had an eager smile on his face, but there was still a hint of worry on his brow, and he asked tentatively, I wonder if there is anything we in Wakanda can do to help Admiral Gino. Please speak up and let us help you. It seems that as long as Gino doesn't say it, Wakanda doesn't regard them as friends. Looking at T'Chaka wearing the Black Panther suit, it has to be said that these people can talk. Gino smiled slightly and explained his purpose, it's not a big deal. I just plan to entrust Wakanda to help me build 2 pieces of equipment. I need an invisible vibranium suit that can be freely adjusted in size, as well as a round shield and a sharp vibranium sword. Gino got what he wanted from Wakanda. Thousands of years of research have allowed Wakanda's Nikas to become proficient in the use of vibranium, and they soon created the equipment Gino wanted. Then a group of people, led by T'Chaka, bid farewell to Gino. Carrying the suitcase, Gino flew back to Washington again. After thinking for a while, Gino planned to go to Howard to ask how the last entrusted matter went. You know, when he was young, Howard had a personality similar to that of a mule. He would not run away unless whipped, so he had to be whipped every now and then to make him work. Gino floated in the night sky in Washington, with his clairvoyance fully activated, and quickly discovered Howard's traces. This romantic man was currently lying in a presidential suite, sleeping soundly with several girls in his arms. Gino slowly floated towards the window of the building, then curled his fingers and tapped the glass lightly. Dong dong dong. The rapid and dull sound echoed in the hotel, and the sound woke Howard up. The man rubbed his eyes, listened to the noise outside the window, couldn't help but tighten his body vigilantly, and tiptoed towards the window. Until he approached the window and saw the handsome face while resting on the glass, Howard couldn't help but rolled his eyes, opened the window and said angrily, Why are you here? Gino glanced at Howard with his hands behind his back. The old boy looked even more haggard after not seeing him for a few days. I came to you to ask how the positioning tracker I asked you to build is going. Gino is a person who doesn't like to drag things out, and Kong is like a troublemaker. The right way is to send him to the west as soon as possible. When it came to this, Howard rubbed his nose in embarrassment. Well, I'm still working on this, but it will take some time to come up with the finished product. Gino was not surprised by Howard's perfunctory treatment. With a sigh, Gino took out a serum and waved it in front of Howard's eyes. Let's do this, Howard. I'm not an unreasonable person. Although we are friends, I can't let you work for free. You build the location tracker as soon as possible, and I will give you this serum. Serum. Howard frowned, then waved his hand and said, No, I don't need serum. As a physicist, Howard had always disdained biology. Oh, really? This is the latest Hope serum developed by Tianjian Bureau. It can not only make people strong and energetic, but also give people powerful superpowers. You don't need it, but your future children may need it. Listening to Gino's words, Howard's aura of preferring death to surrender immediately dissipated. He quickly took the serum from Gino's hand. Looking at the lavender-colored serum, Howard was a little surprised. Is it an upgraded version of the Super Soldier serum? Yes, it's an upgraded serum created by Dr. Erskine. Gino patted Howard on the shoulder and took away the serum under Mustache's reluctant eyes. If you want to get this serum, work harder, Howard. Howard may not necessarily use this serum on himself, but there is a high probability that he will leave it to his future son Tony. Don't doubt it, the way the men of the Stark family express their love is so overbearing, and if you want to keep the best, keep them. If Howard wants this serum, he must help build a locator that can track Kong, so that he can fall into Gino's trap and form a perfect closed loop. Where is Kong, the little blue man that Gino was talking about now? The answer is simple. After the Red Skull bumped into Gino and the GG ending occurred, the bald Nico did not choose to evacuate Gino's timeline, but instead started a new round of plans. At this moment in the Maoxiong territory, Kong was sitting in a house with burning charcoal and bearskins hanging on the walls, enjoying the hospitality of the owner of the house. There were several weird-looking guys sitting on the sofa in the corner of the house. There was a man who looked like a demon with a long demon tail, a blonde woman, and a man with a square face. So, you said you are from the future. The man sitting in the master's chair wore a funny helmet on his head, but the well-informed Kong knew the purpose of that thing, which was used to block the interference of psychics. How should I trust you? The man named Sebastian Xiao crossed his arms and stared at the man in front of him playfully. He was thinking about the true identity of the other party. The other party claimed to be a person from the future. This was simply crazy. Kong smiled lightly, showing a confident smile. These natives always look arrogant. Kong shook his head, sneered, pointed at Xiao and said, Haha, your name is Sebastian Xiao. He was formerly known as Klaus Schmidt in Germany, and developed a kid there who could control magnetism. And you formed a mutant club a long time ago, intending to use the power of mutants to unify the world, right? After Kong exposed his true identity, Xiao's eyes flashed with murderous intent. This guy, whether he is from the future or not, knows so much about himself, he must be a threat. So, Xiao glanced at the people sitting on the sofa in the corner with his peripheral vision. The three of them immediately stood up and approached Kong with unkind expressions. Oh ho ho, please don't get excited. Everyone, maybe we should sit down and talk. Kong lightly snapped his fingers, and the next second, a beam of light fell from the sky, as tall as a hill. Bucky, who had a strong figure, stood silently behind Kong. The atmosphere instantly became tense, and the wood in the corner made a crackling sound under the flames. It turns out that Red Skull's humanoid weapon is here with you, Xiao suddenly realized, and then a look of fear flashed in his eyes. Looking at the blonde woman among the three men, she shook her head slightly, indicating that she could not control Kong using her psychic abilities. Xiao smiled slightly, showed a gentle smile, and pressed his hands gently. He, Mr. Kong is right. We are all civilized people and should communicate in a civilized manner. Red Devil, Riptide, everyone, please sit down. It's just a misunderstanding. As a result, the atmosphere became harmonious again, as if nothing before had happened. Kong leaned forward and said with a smile, Mr. Xiao, do you want to know your future? My future? It's interesting, let's talk about it. Haha. Kong held his chin with his hand and stared at Xiao playfully. Your future is very simple. When you were trying to unify the world, you encountered Geno Wilson and died under his fist. Xiao's heart tightened, and he began to think about the authenticity of Kang's words. He really wanted to unify the world through mutants, so it was only a matter of time before he became a rival with Geno. Therefore, what Kong said is not wrong. After calming down, Xiao asked coldly, so, you came to me just to tell me that you will die at the hands of Geno in the future. Thanks to the retro service boss for the 100-point reward. Thank you, boss. He. In the Siberian wilderness, inside a hut. The two old coins looked at each other and then gave false smiles. As if he had laughed enough, Kong took the lead and interrupted the useless laughter. Of course not, Mr. Xiao, I am an excellent partner. Xiao's cheek twitched on the side. Are you an excellent partner? That means the Red Skull is dead, otherwise he would definitely come out and scold you for being such a cheat. You know, the Red Skull originally planned to bomb the whole world, but Kong deceived him into confronting Geno. As a result, he died tragically on the bomber, and even his head became a collection in the Skyward Sword Bureau lobby. I know that Mr. Xiao's ideal is to unify the world. However, if you want to unify the world, you cannot get around Geno Wilson. So I want to cooperate with you to kill that guy. Kill Geno. Xiao tilted his head, and after a brief silence in the hut, a series of laughter broke out. Ha, I'm not laughing at you, Mr. Kong, do you mean to kill a god on Earth? Xiao now felt that Kong was crazy. Who gave him the confidence to kill Geno? If Geno was really that weak, he would not have fled to Siberia after the fall of Hydra, for fear of being discovered and hanged by Geno. After all, after studying Geno's life, Xiao found that anyone who went against Geno would eventually be killed. Kill the latter and hang them as souvenirs in the Tianjian Bureau. Sebastian Xiao didn't want his head to become one of the collections inside one day. I'm not joking, Mr. Xiao. Kong smiled faintly, as if he had already guessed Xiao's reaction. He snapped his fingers, and a transparent screen popped up in the air, displaying a mighty and domineering metal robot. Please give me the honor to introduce to you the war weapon that has wiped out countless mutants in the future world, the Sentinel Robot. Sentinel Robot. Yes, Sentry Robot. Kong smiled confidently. This weapon can automatically identify the abilities of mutants and take corresponding restraint measures. Not only that, it can also learn to replicate the abilities of mutants. Xiao glanced at the introduction on the blue screen. He cared more about another thing than the robot. You mean, Geno Wilson is a mutant? Kong on the side nodded confidently. Of course, Geno is a mutant. The reason why he is so sure is that Kong found the answer from Steve and other super soldiers in the US military. They were all injected with the serum, and others only had enhanced strength and became stronger than ordinary people. And the abilities that Geno gained gave Kong the feeling that the hidden mutant genes were activated, making him so powerful. Therefore, Kong planned to use the Sentry Robot to evolve tactics to restrain Geno, and also recruited Xiao as an ally to provide assists. Xiao and the blonde woman on the sofa in the corner looked at each other, then smiled and said, Mr. Kong is right, but please give me some time to think about it. Kong nodded and left. After Kong left, Xiao Wang asked the woman in the corner, Emma, what do you think? The woman named Emma slowly stood up and sat where Kong had been sitting before. She gently turned her hands, and her soft arms turned into diamonds. The woman chuckled, since the other party is a mutant, maybe we can try to win over him. Xiao nodded in agreement and said, the enemy of me and that future person is Geno now. Wait until we kill Geno. Xiao's eyes flashed with murderous intent. Kill that Kong when the time comes and take away his sentry robot. Emma, take the Red Devil and Riptide and go to Washington to see if you can recruit Geno. Remember, we must use the name of We Are the Same Kind to enhance his sense of identity. The woman smiled indifferently and rubbed her hair charmingly. No problem. Emma has absolute confidence in her appearance and eloquence. Tianjian Bureau Underground Training Base. Geno woke up Peggy and Natasha and asked the two girls to have a training session with him. As the superheroine he plans to launch, Geno has high expectations for the two girls. At the very least, their strength must be up to standard and they cannot become just a vase decoration. Drink. Peggy held a shield and slammed into Geno. At the same time, the invisible Natasha hiding in the dark also launched an offensive, clamping her legs tightly on Geno's thigh, trying to pull him down. Boom. The strong vibranium shield hit Geno. Peggy gritted her teeth and tried her best, but she couldn't move it at all. That's it. I thought you would be able to use your brains, but you don't even understand basic tactics. I'm so disappointed. A reckless attack against the enemy? No coordination with each other. If you are thrown onto the battlefield and face those with superpowers, you may not even be able to survive for 1 minute. Gino pulled lightly, throwing Natasha out like a sandbag, and then punched the shield violently. The huge force made the vibranium shield make a sharp sound, and the woman flew back like a cannonball, hitting the shield. He left a trace of a human figure on the cement wall behind him. This is not an alarmist statement by Gino. The fighting methods of the two girls who gained superpowers for the first time are too immature, and he must let them grow up as soon as possible. So this can be regarded as his purpose in arranging this competition. Cough cough. Embarrassingly breaking free from the wall. Peggy coughed and struggled to stand up, her little face turning red as the blood surged. However, the super serum amplified the woman's courage and stubbornness. She shook her head and said coldly, "Come again." Peggy was aroused by Gino's words. Her strong character did not allow her to be said to have accomplished nothing, and she had to prove herself. With that said, Peggy picked up the shield and sword and rushed towards Gino again. "Natasha, disrupt his view." Peggy shouted into the air, but she believed she heard her. For the sake of fairness, Gino did not turn on the X-ray to peek at Natasha's position. He only felt a strong wind hanging in front of his eyes, and the other party seemed to be planning to attack his eyes. "It's cruel." Gino chuckled. It seemed that his words had stimulated the two girls, and they even thought of the trick to insert their eyes. But this is the right thing to do. Gino turned his head slightly to dodge, and taking advantage of Gino's dodge, Peggy stepped on the cement wall and kept accelerating. She briefly escaped from the gravity image, roared and jumped into the air, and struck Gino's forehead hard with her long sword. Clang! The vibranium sword landed heavily on the body of steel, but it only made a crisp sound. After the first attack failed, Peggy controlled her legs and stepped on Gino's chest to use the force to fly backwards, widening the distance. Seeing Gino standing intact, Peggy shook her head with a bitter look on her face. "It's unimaginable. Is this really the kind of defense a person can have?" In the corner, Natasha also exited the invisible state, shook the dust off her gold suit, and felt a little discouraged. "How can we win?" Peggy sighed. "You know, I can easily smash a concrete wall with a casual blow, but I can't hurt Gino at all. It's interesting this time. Normally, a person with superpowers would be dead if they faced you." Gino smiled with satisfaction, looked at the two lost girls, and comforted them. "No need to feel lost. The guy who can break my head hasn't been born yet." Regarding Gino's Versailles-style comfort, the two women chose to remain silent. "This is so shocking." Gino didn't care much about the feelings of the two women. He hugged Peggy and Natasha and said seriously, "Now, you are one step away from debuting and becoming superheroes." The two girls looked at Gino curiously, wanting to know which step it was. "Then give yourself a loud code name." Gino chuckled, and the three of them walked out of the laboratory. Gino gave them an example. "For example, Steve. He was transformed by the Hope Serum in our bureau yesterday, and I got a good one for him." Title: Steve is now called Shockboy. This name is very down-to-earth and impressive. Natasha rolled her eyes, put her arm around Gino's shoulders and said, "It's like they call you a native of the motherland, and some people call you Superman, right? Clever." Gino smiled and pinched his female companion's little nose, causing Natasha to glance at Peggy proudly. Peggy curled her lips and ignored Natasha's provocation. Instead, she lowered her head and thought about her code name. But after much thought, Peggy, who had been doing secretarial work before, still couldn't think of a nice code name. She couldn't help but raise her head and look at Gino, trying to get Gino's advice. "Gino, can you help me choose a title?" The longer Peggy spends time with Gino, the more powerful she feels, as if he knows everything. Gino saw his female companion's thoughts and suggested in a wicked way, "What do you think of the title Captain America?" Gino remembered that Marvel once released an issue of the What If series of anime. One episode was about Peggy replacing Steve by injecting a super serum and becoming Captain America. What's even more ridiculous is that Vision, whose body was taken over by Thanos and Ultron, was cut in half with a laser kill. Generally speaking, the Marvel combat power system can be roughly divided into 1. Surface level. These heroes generally occupy a place on the planet, such as Captain America and Black Panther. 2. Cosmic level. The representative of this type of hero is Captain Marvel in a normal state, which can destroy a planet. 3. Heavenly Father level, such as God King Odin in normal state. 4. A single universe level powerhouse capable of destroying a galaxy. 5. Multiverse level. Most of these existences involve the existence of cosmic concepts, such as the concept of God eternity that appeared in the Thor movie. 6. Almighty universe level, almost omnipotent, representing a strong person similar to the existence of a strong person in the Life Tribunal. 7. An exceptional existence, a powerful person beyond the omnipotent universe. 8. It can be understood as the supreme existence OAA incarnated by Marvel writers. Gino estimated that his current level was roughly the cosmic level. With the blessing of the Man of Steel, he could still destroy a planet. Captain America. When Peggy heard this title, she shook her head decisively and said, "No, this name sounds too just." Peggy rolled her eyes at Gino. "Besides, I am British, so my codename should be Captain Britain." As she spoke, she seemed to have a strange feeling. Peggy repeated the title Captain Britain several times in a low voice, and her tone gradually became firmer. I have decided that the title will be Captain Britain. Seeing that Peggy had her own title, Natasha was also a little envious and quickly pestered Gino. Gino, think of a title for me too. Gino raised his eyebrows and asked tentatively, what about Black Widow? Black Widow? A title that can only be inherited by previous champions of the Red House. It's ferocious and deadly. It's a good title. Natasha obviously thought that this title represented the highest honor of the Red House, and the woman was very satisfied with this title. The three of them walked to the elevator talking and laughing. Gino, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Gino looked up and saw that Steve, wearing a blue and white uniform, was standing next to the elevator. When Gino arrived, Steve couldn't help but smile. Gino showed a cheerful smile and patted Steve on the shoulder. What's the matter? Our electric shock boy, what's the matter with me? That's right, I came to you this time to say goodbye to you. Steve rubbed his nose, a little embarrassed. Going to find Bucky, right? Gino smiled. I understand. Immediately, Gino turned around and walked into Dr. Zola's office, and quickly threw a mobile phone that looked like a brick to Steve. This is a communication device created by Dr. Zola using the energy of the cosmic cube. This thing is a real piece of black technology. It uses the energy of a cosmic Rubik's cube and can communicate across borders regardless of distance. In order to make it easier for Steve to contact him, Gino asked Zora to build a phone very early. Dora Zola lived up to Gino's expectations and quickly built a pair of contact phones. Steve held the big brother in his hand and asked doubtfully, what do you mean? Gino smiled cheerfully, haha, remember to call me when you find Bucky and I will help you. Of course this is bullshit. Gino just ran away to kill Kong who caused trouble. Only a dead Nico is a good Nico. If I didn't have a cotton field, haha, that's it. Steve looked grateful. Gino, thank you, you are a good person. Haha, electric shock boy, I believe you can find Bucky. Come on, I look forward to your good news. Gino poured Steve a bowl of chicken soup for the soul, and Gino felt that Steve's expression of gratitude was well deserved. To be honest, I was really nice to Steve. Not only did I give Steve a vibranium shield, but I also strengthened Steve's strength, although there was also a relationship of interest involved. However, Gino felt that as the old saying goes, a gentleman's actions do not matter his heart. Isn't Steve doing well now? At least it would be better than lying in the glacier for 70 years. Maybe the other party will be able to solve Bucky's matter after he solves it. I can find another girlfriend and have a little Steve. The four of them walked out of the Tianjian bureau. After bidding farewell to Steve with a smile, Gino led the two girls around the first-floor office area. The Tianjian bureau agents who came and went were busy recording various situations. After the end of World War II, Yingjiang's focus gradually began to tilt toward the woolly bear standing in Siberia. An agent handed over a document. Sir, this is the latest intelligence. Gino flipped through the documents hastily. A bank in Washington, D.C., was robbed. The Washington police have launched an investigation, but there are currently no clues. Laudu recently visited a golf course in Washington to secretly meet his lover. Admiral Jack secretly met with his subordinate William Stryker at 1 o'clock in the morning. Every piece of high-level intelligence from the United States is recorded in the files. Regarding the first and second pieces of information, Gino was not surprised. This was a characteristic of free America, so just get used to it. Gino focused on the third piece of information. Looking at the third piece of information, I couldn't help but raise my eyebrows. Old Jack still doesn't give up. Gino sneered. Didn't he just crush this guy's collarbone? As for being so vindictive? The situation is getting smaller. Old Jack got inside a motel. Dim room. From time to time, a few beams of light shine into the room outside the window, and the dust fills the room. Several sturdy veterans stood at attention and looked at the man standing in the middle. With a tall body and a perfect figure, the man named George swept his eyes across everyone. Congratulations on your recovery, my comrades. These people were all George's former comrades in arms. They suffered serious injuries on the battlefield and were forced to leave the battlefield. Many of them had a very bad life after retiring. Several of them became homeless because their wives and children remarried and their houses were lost. But with George's help, everyone who took the superhero serum recovered. And these big-headed soldiers also vowed to follow George's cause and restore more soldiers to health. Feeling the grateful expressions in everyone's eyes, George felt his heart filled with happiness. Right now our business is just getting started. George clenched his fists. There are more comrades who need our help. The veterans looked at each other. Boss, tell me what should be done, and we will listen to you. This group of big-headed soldiers has no culture. If George hadn't led them to inject the super soldier serum, they might have continued to live a miserable life. In their opinion, George saved them, and all they could pay was loyalty and working their lives for George. George held his chin and said coldly, Five-star General Gino Wilson once said, I am not a hero, the soldiers who fight for the country are the real heroes. If we want to save our comrades, we need more super serum. A veteran immediately suggested, we can rob that warehouse. The veterans' words resonated with others, and they all echoed, yes, those guys have the serum that can make people recover and are not willing to use it on us. Instead, they have to spend an expensive price to buy it. Everyone looked at the silent George, waiting for the leader to make a decision. George shook his head slowly. Now is not the time, everyone. That warehouse is guarded by at least 20 super soldiers. If you want to take action, we simply are not enough. What we need to do now is get more money. The eyes of the other veterans lit up, and then they asked, are you still robbing a bank? Following George, they have robbed several banks these days. George still shook his head. He had his own plan. The man knocked on the table. No, we won't rob the bank this time. We will kidnap a rich man. Whoever is the richest person in Washington, we will kidnap. With that said, George picked up the newspaper and pointed to the man on the cover of the newspaper. A soldier scratched his head. Well, I remember this guy seems to be the largest arms dealer in Washington, Howard Stark. It is said that he is a friend of the God on Earth. Why don't we change our target? If we anger the God on Earth, he will rush in and crush us all to death. No, this is the fastest way to make money. George shook his head. Besides, as long as the villa is monitored to prevent anyone from snitching on us, we can avoid being discovered. Everyone was silent. That was indeed the reason. Okay, but where are we going to find the playboy? George smiled confidently. I have figured out that playboy's movements a long time ago. He would go to his villa every night with some female companions, and we would ambush him there. The Howard family's villa is located in the suburbs. Soon, George and his group drove to Howard's villa. The car was parked 1,000 meters away from Howard's estate. Until nightfall, the group took advantage of the cover of darkness and began to take action. Let's go. A group of people quietly crossed the 2-meter-high iron fence and easily sneaked into the Howard family estate. As a rich man, Howard naturally knows that he should hire bodyguards to protect his safety. But no matter how powerful the bodyguard is, he has only the physical fitness of an ordinary person, and is no match for the enhanced George and others. Soon, George and his men got rid of the manor guards and broke into the second floor of the villa. A group of people quickly found the target of the operation. Howard was sleeping soundly on a big bed. That's him, tie him up. Poor Howard was picked up by several strong men before he knew what was happening. What happened? Howard woke up suddenly and saw that his bed was surrounded by muscular men wearing black masks, and he subconsciously wanted to cover his butt. A dull laugh came from under the mask of George, the leader. I'm glad to inform you, Mr. Howard, that you have been kidnapped. After saying that, a strong man stepped forward and raised his hand to strike Howard's neck. The man rolled his eyes and fainted. A group of people carried the unconscious Howard back the same way, until the old butler Jarvis, who was responsible for purchasing food, returned home and found that Howard had disappeared, leaving only a note on the bedside table, asking the old butler to prepare a ransom and go to a fixed location to redeem the person, and was not allowed to call the police. Faced with the news that Howard had been kidnapped, Jarvis glanced around, and the phone lines were cut and destroyed, cutting off channels to the outside world. When the old housekeeper saw this, he walked towards the basement with a calm expression. The current situation must not call the police. There will definitely be accomplices of the kidnappers around to monitor every move in the villa. If the police come, there is no guarantee that the kidnappers will break up the case. Fortunately, Gino came to Howard at that time. In order to facilitate contact, he gave Howard a phone made of the energy of the cosmic Rubik's Cube, which can directly reach the office of the director of the Skysword Bureau. The old butler dialed the number from memory. Along with several busy signals, Gino's voice came. What's wrong? Howard, is the positioning device I want ready? The old butler smiled bitterly and said, Admiral Gino, I am Mr. Howard's butler Jarvis. The old man got straight to the point and said, the head of the family was kidnapped not long ago and is missing. On the other side of the phone, Gino was leaning on the bedside, raising his eyebrows slightly. Howard was kidnapped. Gino sat up straight, thinking in his heart, who could kidnap Howard? Could it be that Kong sneaked into New York? But if the other party really dares to come, Master Guyi should tell him. Jarvis, tell me what happened. Howard is a talented person, and Gino is counting on him to make more technological suits for himself in the future, but he cannot be abducted by others. Jarvis slowly explained. Admiral Gino, the group of people left a note asking me to bring enough ransom and put the money in a park. Gino was relieved after hearing Jarvis's answer. It turns out I was just asking for money. With a sneer in his heart, Gino stood up slowly. They even dare to arrest the people I'm covering. These robbers are so brave. Since Howard had just been kidnapped, it meant that these robbers' had not gone very far at all. If he rushed there now, he might be able to block that group of people. What happened? Peggy and Natasha looked at Gino curiously. Howard was caught. Gino responded casually. The corner of his eye swept over the two women, and he couldn't help but think. Peggy, Natasha, put on your equipment, I'll take you on a mission. Since I plan to cultivate the two of them, from now on, only fragile flowers will be grown in the greenhouse. Do the task. Peggy were a little excited. After all, this was their first mission as superheroes. Soon, the two changed into uniforms and stood in front of Gino. Peggy's battle uniform is based on the ancient Roman war skirt, and the armor made of vibranium makes the woman look very heroic. Natasha wears a black tights to modify her figure, and a vibranium belt around her waist allows her to carry more weapons and equipment. Let's go. Gino hugged the two of them, then opened the window and flew towards Howard's villa. Floating high in the sky above Howard's villa, Gino held his two daughters in his arms and glanced at the ground beneath his feet. After a while, Gino grinned. I found you. With his supervision, Gino clearly saw a group of strong men hiding in an abandoned cabin in Olympus Park, Washington. From this position, he could observe the entire park and adapt accordingly. Poor Howard was tied to a chair by the kidnappers, and even his mouth was blocked. He could only scan the surrounding kidnappers with a pair of eyes. Gino landed with the two girls, and the three of them stood at a hidden corner. Listen, that group of kidnappers is located in the western cabin of the Olympic Park. There are 10 of them. 2 of them are responsible for guarding Howard, and several others are on guard outside the cabin. Peggy nodded seriously, while Natasha looked a little eager to give it a try. Gino patted the two girls' butts and said with a smile, "You guys try to cooperate to rescue Howard." The two women looked at each other, then immediately turned their heads. Natasha pouted, "I don't need to cooperate with her, I can save Howard by myself." In her opinion, it was not easy to sneak in and kill a few kidnappers because of her invisibility. Poor Natasha didn't know that Gino didn't tell her that these people were super soldiers, and their physical fitness was much stronger than ordinary people. Peggy sneered, clenching the shield and vibranium sword in her hand. "I don't need it either." Although the two can sometimes cooperate, more often than not, they are in tit-for-tat opposition to each other. Both sides seemed to regard this rescue operation as a competition to prove that they were the strongest. Gino shrugged and patiently persuaded, "Are you sure? If you don't have the strength to crush your opponent, cooperation may be the best option." "Of course. I'm sure." "Very good, very energetic. I look forward to your performance." Gino squinted his eyes and smiled without saying anything else, waiting for the two of them to take action. Peggy and Natasha were already separated before they even left the alley. The two of them learned the information from Gino at the same time. Peggy analyzed as she rushed towards the park. "If you want to avoid being discovered at the cabin on the west side of Washington Park, you have to attack from behind." Soon, Peggy walked around to the back of the west hut and looked up at the 3-meter-high wall. "Call." The woman took a deep breath, bent her legs slightly and jumped hard, easily crossing the wall and entering the park. She held her breath and looked around. "I saw a few sounds coming from the abandoned hut, and the faint whimpering of a man could be heard." Natasha on the other side was much more relaxed. She entered the invisible state. Natasha avoided the guards all the way, then gently opened the door and walked in. Just as Peggy was about to take action, she saw the door of the cabin blow open slightly. The two strong men in the room were slightly stunned. Before they could react, one of them felt a pain in his abdomen, and he suddenly covered his abdomen and screamed. Natasha's fist obviously did not stun the man, and he shouted a warning. "There's something nearby." "This idiot." Peggy held her forehead helplessly. The kidnappers around her were also alerted by the screams and rushed towards this direction. People found Peggy and exclaimed, There are people there. Catch her." The lurking plan failed. Peggy exhaled a breath, pulled out her sword, held onto her shield, and faced the oncoming enemy. At this moment, the whole room was in chaos. The two strong men were fighting with the invisible Natasha, but every punch seemed to hit the air. Outside the house, Peggy stabbed several people with her sword, then kicked one person over. Seeing that the kidnapper leader George was exposed, he didn't care so much and ordered, "Shoot. Shoot these people." So, someone immediately turned the gun and pointed it at Howard in the house and pulled the trigger. The whistling bullets poured out, and the overwhelming warheads hit the house, making Howard's eyes widen in fright. Whoosh! Just when Howard thought he was going to see his dead father, a figure fell from the sky, smashed the wooden house, and stood in front of Howard like a mountain. Bang bang bang. The bullet hit the vibranium suit, causing a cloud of sparks, and the shriveled warhead rolled down the wooden board. The kidnappers looked at the majestic figure in horror and opened their mouths to exclaim, "Ancestor, a citizen of the motherland. Superman, Superman is here." At this moment, the hearts of these kidnappers have sunk to the bottom of the lake, and they are dead. Ignore the trash fish. Gino held his hands expressionlessly, tilting his head slightly to look at Natasha, who was hiding in the corner. "Is this your plan? If I hadn't come early, Howard would have died." Natasha was a little embarrassed and lowered her head in shame. "I'm disappointed in you guys." Sighing, Gino once again set his sights on the two strong men and stretched out a finger. "I'll give you a chance to tell you why you kidnapped Howard." The two looked at each other, and Gino's response was only silence. "Don't want to say it? Then don't say it." Gino smiled and shook his head, expressing his disappointment at these people's lack of cooperation. The next second, Gino appeared in front of the two of them, pinched one person's neck with his big hand, turned his wrist and gave it a slight twist. Crack! The strong neck was instantly broken, and the man's neck was twisted like a tangled knot. He fell to the ground dead with his eyes open. Oh! Gino reached out and stabbed someone's chest again, crushing the opponent's heart. Another person fell to the floor with wide eyes. In just a second, 2 super soldiers in the room died at the hands of Gino. Gino walked back to Howard and pulled off the cloth blocking the man. Bah! Howard retched a few times, and then looked at Gino with some resentment. "Why did it come so slowly? I almost died." "Go help Peggy," Gino said to Natasha, pointing out the window. "Remember to stay alive." Natasha silently walked out of the house, became invisible again and killed the enemy. With Natasha helping to share the pressure, the battle ended quickly, leaving only a man whose legs were broken by Peggy's shield. The two of them walked into the house holding the man with blood on his face. Gino stared at the man whose face was covered with blood and asked indifferently, "Tell me why you kidnapped Howard." The man looked at the corpses everywhere and said in a low voice, "Of course it's for money." Howard cursed and stood up, complaining, "Damn it, if you want money, tell me why you tied me up in a place like this and blocked my mouth with a smelly towel." Gino glanced at Howard, motioned the man to shut up, and then asked, "What do you need money for?" Perhaps all his comrades were dead, so the man was disheartened and said, "I need money to buy serum so that the disabled comrades can return to normal." As he spoke, George roared with red eyes, "Those bastards in the Pentagon are not human beings. They would rather throw the super serum in the warehouse than give it to wounded soldiers. Instead, they sell it for a fee." Listening to the man's hysterical complaints, Gino raised his eyebrows. "Well, smuggling of serum is something that the American military can do. Park cabin. You are discharged from the army so miserably." Howard rubbed his blue wrist, a little surprised. He really didn't expect those guys at the Pentagon to be so wicked. Gino was not surprised, just get used to it. Gino turned to look at Howard. "What are you going to do with this kidnapper? Can I help you kill him?" As he spoke, Gino's eyes lit up red, as if he would melt George's head with heat vision in the next second. "No, don't kill anyone." Howard showed pity and shook his head. "Find a place to lock him up. He is a good man who can go through life and death for his comrades. Maybe I should set up a disability foundation to help those poor people." George, who was kneeling on the ground, looked up suddenly. "You really want to do this?" "Of course, I have plenty of money." George was overjoyed and quickly thanked. "Thank you, you are a good person." George felt it was worthwhile to be able to exchange his own life for hope for other comrades. Howard frowned and shook his head, and replied in an arrogant tone, "Haha, I am an arms dealer, not a good person." Howard's reaction was not what Gino had expected. The men of the Stark family basically behaved like this, being duplicitous and arrogant. Or seeing the miserable appearance of these super soldiers, even if they were kidnapped, Howard still planned to show some kindness to help them. "In this case, I will take him away." Gino held George in his arms and then looked at Peggy and Natasha. "I'm very disappointed in you. I'll walk back by myself." The two of them treated the rescue mission as a child's play, so they should be punished. They were asked to walk back first, and then they were given military training. After that, Gino carried George and flew into the sky to leave. Thousands of meters in the air, the icy wind blew on George, making even the super soldier's body tremble. As Gino flew towards the Heavenly Sword Bureau, his eyes swept over the man, and after thinking for a moment he asked, "Will you be willing to give you a chance to become stronger?" Gino held him by the collar, and the strong wind blew by his ears. George even thought he heard the wrong words and was a little confused. What? Make me stronger, but why? Although he didn't know Gino well, after getting along for a short time, George felt that Gino was a kind-hearted person who killed people without even blinking an eye. But it was his group who made the first mistake, so George didn't have much resentment in his heart for Gino's killing of his comrades. Instead, he hated those bastards in the Pentagon even more. If the Pentagon had not abandoned them, these comrades would not have died. Didn't answer George's question. Gino and the man landed at the door of Tianjian Bureau, dragging George with his broken leg towards the underground base. What he did was actually very simple. He had planned to secretly support a group of superpowered criminals to cause turmoil in Washington, so that he could better promote his superhero legalization bill. Gino felt that George was quite suitable. Full of hatred for the US military, such a guy is more suitable to become a useful chess piece. Carrying George to the experimental base. That's the experimental cabin. George recognized the experimental cabin in the laboratory and remembered that the US military also had such a device. "Okay, let's talk." Gino let go of George and let the man lean against the cold wall, staring down at George. "I'll give you a chance to become stronger." George smiled bitterly and shook his head. "So, what do you want me to do for you?" He is not a child, and he also knows that there is no free lunch in the world, especially for people like Gino. If he had not been of value, he might have died in the park cabin long ago. Gino grinned and said with his hands behind his back, "I can make you stronger, and in exchange, you need to do something for me." Gino stood up and looked into the distance. Leave the city in chaos. This is Gino's plan, to create conditions if there are no conditions. When those enhanced superhumans cause trouble in the city and even threaten the safety of politicians, I will launch the superhero plan. I believe those people will not refuse. Hearing Gino's conditions, George couldn't help but frown. "You mean to do the dirty work for you? I don't do immoral things." Gino stared at George with a playful look. A bank robber would care about morality? When those banks went bankrupt, how many depositors lost their savings and became homeless? Gino's words made the man blush, but before he could react, a big hand grabbed his neck firmly. "Also, you are not worthy of negotiating terms with me." Gino sneered, grabbed the man's neck and lifted him in the air. "You are not dead now, but you are still valuable to me. I hope you know your place, George." Ho ho. His neck seemed to be grasped by an iron hand. George was breathing hard. Even with his super strong physique, he couldn't bear the pain of suffocation. Gino watched indifferently as the man's face gradually turned livid, then he gently let go of George and said expressionlessly, "Now, tell me your answer." George was paralyzed in the corner and stared at him like a drowning traveler. He was gasping for air and staring at Gino with frightened eyes. He couldn't help but feel fear in his heart. At this moment, he finally recognized Gino's violent nature behind the peaceful appearance in the newspaper. Although I wanted to shout out the words, I don't want to. The words seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds on my lips and I couldn't say them out. The desire for life finally made George give in. He lowered his head and asked feebly, I am willing to accept your arrangement, Admiral Gino. Gino smiled slightly. Very good, this is a wise choice, George. The man snapped his fingers, and behind him, Dr. Zola brought the hope serum. Gino fingered George. Dr. Zola, inject him with the hope serum. Soon, George, who had a broken leg, was carried into the experimental cabin. Following the injection of serum, George returned to normal a few minutes later and stared at his healed legs in surprise. Gino crossed his arms and said calmly, what superpower did you get? George was a little surprised. Could it be that the serum Gino injected into him could activate superpowers? No wonder I felt like there was something extra in my body. George clenched his fists and took a deep breath. Let me try. The next second, George's figure suddenly disappeared and reappeared, already standing outside the laboratory. Teleport ability? It's a good feature. Gino raised his eyebrows, stared at George outside the room, and commented, it's very suitable for stealing things. Whoosh. George once again controlled the teleportation ability and returned to the laboratory. At this moment, George sounded excited like a child, I can teleport. He activated his power again and instantly appeared outside the laboratory, but the next second, an arm gently rested on George's shoulder, making the man's eyes widen in horror. He could appear 100 meters away in just 1 second, but even so, Gino easily held his shoulder down. Gino smiled. George, now that you can teleport, take this experimental cabin and develop more super soldiers, okay? Looking at Gino smiling, his tone was indescribably cold, which made George shudder. He knew that this was Gino's warning to him. Don't think that you can get rid of him by gaining the ability to teleport. The other person is completely have the strength to pinch yourself to death. George left and disappeared into Tianjian Bureau with Gino's expectations. Soon after, Peggy and Natasha also returned to the underground base. You know, I'm very disappointed with your performance. Gino looked into the distance with his hands behind his back. The two girls looked at Gino's back, but it was Natasha who said with shame, it's my fault, because my pride led to the mission fail. I am willing to accept punishment. Listening to Natasha's apology, Peggy gritted her teeth, also took a step forward, and said coldly, I am also at fault for this matter. The two chose to share responsibilities, which made Gino very happy. At least the two had a good attitude. Gino carried the two of them on his back and sighed softly, you are not able to use your abilities skillfully now. Maybe I should take some time to train you. Gino thought for a moment, turned around and said his plan, from today on, you will no longer be responsible for the affairs of the Tianjian Bureau. You will spend every day training to control your own superpowers. Since you want the two of them to become stronger, you need to give them a strong sparring opponent, but currently there is no one in Tianjian Bureau who can beat Peggy and Natasha. Therefore, Gino had no choice but to go and be their sparring partner. At the same time, I will also supervise your training. Gino looked at the two of them, do you think you can persist? The two looked at each other, and Peggy pursed her lips and said, but someone has to take on my work. Maybe you should recruit another secretary. The Tianjian Bureau is very busy with work, and Gino is basically too lazy to take care of those small things. He usually leaves it to Peggy, and since she has to train, the woman naturally doesn't have time to deal with so many documents. Gino nodded. Peggy was indeed right. Then, publish a recruitment document and recruit a female secretary. I have the ability to listen to malicious voices, and I don't have to worry about enemies sneaking in. So, in the next few days, Gino took the two girls to start devil training. With a strong partner as a sparring partner, the two improved their strength control and coordination by leaps and bounds. They were able to last for 2 minutes instead of 1 minute at the beginning. Oh. Gino threw Peggy to the floor with a back throw, then raised his leg and kicked Natasha over. Okay, that's it for today's training. You did a great job. Gino ripped the motor cord off his body. The two girls were tortured miserably by Gino during this period. In order to prevent the two girls from going to the battlefield and embarrassing themselves in the future, Gino took the training seriously. The punches and kicks were all light. Sometimes, Peggy, who was positioned as a human shield, had bruises on her cheeks. So the two girls now hate Gino so much that they often go to the laboratory to steal some weird and powerful props. For example, there are invisible landmines made by the Cosmic Cube, and electric energy guns made by the Cosmic Cube. All I can say is that he tried his best to defeat Gino. Failed again. Peggy gasped for air, obviously exhausted. An agent report came from outside the house. Sir, the interview meeting is about to begin. That's the end of today's special training. You guys have a good rest. Gino smiled and waved goodbye, ignoring the resentful looks in the two women's eyes and leaving the training room. When he arrived at the office on the 8th floor, the corridor was already filled with a row of long-legged beauties, all wearing expensive dresses. If he hadn't known that this was the Tianjian Bureau, Gino would have even felt that he was at the backstage of a model. Admiral Gino. Oh my god, I'm a fan of yours. When the women saw Gino, they all expressed surprise and spoke excitedly, as if they saw the glory and wealth of this life right before their eyes. But their idea is correct. If they can stay with Gino and avoid 50 years of detours, the benefits of Tianjian Bureau will be very good, and the salary will be high. However, Gino chose to ignore the overtures from these vulgar fans. He was recruiting secretaries to share the work. The interview started soon, and Gino tried a few but was still not satisfied. Next, Gino crossed over the list of interviewees and leaned lazily on his chair. Name: Susan Burns. Gino glanced up at the girl. The man with wavy blonde hair was looking at Gino with a smile and a decent manner. I should admit her. With this thought flashing through his mind, Gino slowly hooked his finger on the woman's form. Not right. Malicious voice warning. Gino looked up at the woman again. Still the same perfect posture and polite smile. However, Gino was keenly aware of the playful look in the woman's eyes. Get out of my head. Gino stood up abruptly, without saying a word. His eyes glowed red, and his scorching gaze instantly rushed towards the woman. The woman across the table didn't react too slowly. In just an instant, her skin turned into bright diamond skin, sparkling under the sunlight. The hot sight with terrifying high temperature hit the woman, causing her to scream in terror, "Red devil, take me away quickly." As the woman screamed, a figure that looked like a devil quietly appeared, grabbed the woman's arm and teleported away. Want to run? Gino sneered, his eyes slightly condensed. The next second, the surrounding tall buildings became transparent. Gino quickly scanned the surroundings and soon found the mutant fleeing with the woman in the east direction. This guy has the appearance of a demon, and he also has a long demon tail. At this moment, he is constantly activating his ability to lead the woman to break through the space and then reappears several hundred meters away from the previous location. Gino looked at the direction in which the two were fleeing with a gloomy expression. Judging from the situation, it seemed that the group wanted to run to the pier and leave by boat. Gino did not focus on the mutants who could teleport. Instead, he focused on the blonde woman protected by the man. The thought that just appeared out of thin air in the brain should be the ability of a psychic. Gino couldn't help but feel a little scared. To be honest, psychic abilities are really abnormal. They can silently change a person's thoughts and even make that person think that they were generated in his own mind. It's like inserting a Trojan horse program into a computer out of thin air, turning the computer into your own puppet. Gino looked up at the ceiling and recalled carefully. During World War II, there were mutants who had the ability to control their minds. One was sleeping in a pyramid, and the other was just a little kid. Eliminating these two options, Gino quickly analyzed the woman's identity. Mutant White Queen. The existence of mutants can be traced back to the apocalypse in ancient Egypt. But in modern times since then, a man named Sebastian Xiao has seized the Hellfire Club, a club organized by a group of wealthy people, and gained a lot of wealth. He then used this wealth to conduct research on mutants, and at the same time attracted a group of mutants to join the club in the name of compatriots for his use. Xiao, why do you risk your life to try to control me? Gino sighed lightly, then his eyes flashed with murderous intent, and he turned to look at the dock in the distance, where a square-faced man was calling his companions to get on the boat and escape. A marina near Washington, D.C. White Queen Emma anxiously urged her companion Riptide, set the boat quickly. We must leave immediately, that guy has discovered us. Riptide silently started the speedboat and drove the boat at a high speed. The speedboat split the waves, and the Red Devil on the boat was the first to speak. What on earth is going on? How did you get discovered by him? The three of them are a team that has been controlled by Sebastian to complete some cleaning tasks. In the past, Emma's ability was omnipotent, and often just getting close to the target person would turn the other person into Emma's puppet. The blonde woman shook her head with a sad face. No, I don't know. That guy's psychic power is extremely powerful, and I can't control him. At first, the plan went smoothly. She used a fake identity to get close to Gino. The woman even fantasized about manipulating Gino to rule the world. But as soon as the two met, Emma just used her psychic ability to test, but was instantly noticed by Gino. She was really frightened. She was just about to be killed by Gino's heat vision. At this moment, she was still in fear of death and could not recover. Suddenly, a deafening sonic boom sounded above the heads of the three people, and a figure quietly stood on the sea, wearing a vibranium battlesuit, with a cloak fluttering in the wind behind him. The silent torrent suddenly screamed, "Motherlander!" Emma looked at Gino who was standing on the sea blocking the road, and quickly urged, "Turn quickly, the speedboat will explode if it hits that guy, and we will all drown by then." Emma knew about Gino's abilities before coming here, and knew that the so-called speedboat was no different from paper in the other's eyes. Riptide violently turned the steering wheel with both hands, turned the ship's bow, and narrowly avoided it at the moment when it was about to hit. Looking at the small boat that looked like a drunk driver driving crookedly on the sea, Gino was not in a hurry to catch up, and flew behind the speedboat with a playful look on his face. The reason why Emma's ability was discovered was that on the one hand, she was able to listen to malicious warnings, and on the other hand, Gino knew who he was. He could not simply understand and trust the blonde without even saying a few words. She became her own secretary. The three people on the boat rushed forward without their lives, and the silent torrent opened up its accelerator, but Gino just followed behind, bringing extreme fear to the three of them. Riptide gritted his teeth, knowing that if he continued like this, his entire army would be wiped out, and no one would be left to be captured by Gino. So the man gritted his teeth, let go of the steering wheel, and ordered the Red Devil behind him. "Red Devil, take Emma away, I'll hold him back." The White Queen was a little surprised and quickly stopped. "No, Riptide, don't go. Instead of everyone dying here, it's better for me to hold him back and give you a chance to live." While the two of them were chatting with each other, Gino listened to every detail of their conversation. He instantly flew over the speedboat and interrupted the two of them. Everyone, I take the liberty of interrupting your conversation. The three of them looked up at Gino. I saw the other party smile softly, showing a sunny smile. I am here today, none of you can run away, you will all die in this sea. You guys leave quickly. R'lyeh gritted his teeth and pushed Emma away. He originally planned to express his feelings to the goddess he had been secretly in love with for many years. But unfortunately, the enemy has already found her, and now she can only fight to buy the goddess time to escape. The White Queen gritted her teeth and looked deeply at the man. Goodbye, Riptide. Red Devil, let's go. The two started the speedboat, and the square-faced man named Riptide opened his hands. Gino watched with interest as Riptide activated his mutant powers. The man is holding a steel pipe in his hand. The air currents dragged him to stand on the sea surface. The man was seen holding the steel pipe tightly and spinning his body on the sea surface. Air currents were set off around him. Soon, these air currents condensed around the man, forming a violent tornado. The huge and violent tornado stirred up waves and turned into a spectacular waterspout, which then blew violently towards Gino. That's it, a tornado. Gino did not dodge, but the terrible waterspout hit his body, but he only felt a little itchy. The violent waterspout couldn't even make Gino take half a step back. Looking at the rapids inside the waterspout, which looked like a ballet dancer spinning continuously to maintain the waterspout, Gino felt a little regretful. If I had told you that you could dance so many circles without getting dizzy, I wouldn't have killed you. When the time comes, lock this guy in an exhibition cabinet and let him dance to his heart's content. Seeing this guy spinning around in circles without getting dizzy, Gino admired him a little. Is it not good to debut as an idol with such good physical fitness? He had to follow Xiao and become a villain. Forget it, stop turning, it makes me dizzy. Gino crossed his arms and locked his eyes on the rapids. The next second, two red beams of light pierced the roaring waterspout, and the high temperature evaporated the seawater, raising waves of white mist. The rapids in the wind and waves made me feel a pain in my chest without even reacting. Two blazing beams of light passed through the chest and hit the sea surface behind the rapids, and gradually extinguished. The man's chest was opened by the beam with a big wound like a bull, and he fell into the sea with his eyes wide open and was swallowed by the waves. Without the support of the rapids, the waterspouts on the sea quickly calmed down. Gino looked up at the direction where the speedboat was escaping in the distance, and locked the position of the two with a smile. Gently picking up the steel pipe floating on the sea, Gino locked his eyes on the speedboat. Let's go. Gino grinned and threw out the steel pipe in his hand. Whoosh. The huge force pushed the steel pipe into a white light, which quickly stabbed the speedboat. In the distance on the sea, a speedboat was roaring across the sea. At this moment, White Queen Emma wanted to step on the accelerator and escape. Although the Red Devil has the ability to move in space, he cannot cross the entire sea. At this moment, the man who looks like a devil is looking at the sea behind him in horror. The waterspout is gone. Emma, maybe Riptide is dead. Just as the two were talking, a white afterimage suddenly hit the cabin. Boom. The speedboat exploded suddenly, and Emma suddenly choked on a mouthful of wet, salty water. But before she could struggle, a big hand strangled the woman's neck and broke free from the sea. Emma looked at Gino, who suddenly appeared in front of her in horror. The two looked at each other, and Gino's eyes lit up red. Do you have any last words? Wait a minute, don't kill me, I can work for you. Emma quickly showed her worth. Poor mutant Riptide, if he saw his goddess like this, she might not fight Gino. Oh, work for me. Gino glanced at Emma's chest. The woman noticed Gino's gaze and quickly lowered her collar and put on a charming smile. That's right, and you can do whatever you want. Haha, that's it. Gino smiled slightly. The next second, a blazing beam of light penetrated the woman's eye sockets. The woman immediately turned her head into a crystal-clear diamond head, but as the heat vision continued to apply, the solid diamond slowly melted, and the White Queen screamed and wailed until the heat vision melted the woman's eye sockets and tore her brain apart, leaving only a pair of focal points. The black eye sockets were bleeding outward. Sorry, I don't need a bitch like you to be my subordinate. Gino chuckled and let go of the woman, watching the body fall into the sea. Perhaps, women and rapids can still meet at the bottom of the sea. End of this chapter. Damn it. On the sea, the Red Devil kept flashing. He no longer knew that this was the first time he had activated his mutant ability. He only felt weak all over. Frequent use of his mutant ability had severely overdrawn his physical strength. At this moment, the demon-looking mutant's eyes were covered with bloodshot eyes, and it seemed that he would die suddenly in the next second. Gino's voice sounded from behind again. Run faster, little devil. Like a cat playing with a mouse, Gino flew behind the Red Devil leisurely. Ah, the man roared and teleported to the sea hundreds of meters away again. The Red Devil is really tired this time. Whoosh whoosh. No, I can't run anymore. The Red Devil floated on the surface of the sea, closing his eyes in despair. Kill me? Gino fell from the sky and floated quietly in front of the Red Devil. When he heard the man wanted to kill him, he couldn't help but grinned. Kill you? No, I won't kill you. Your destination is to enter the Tianjian Bureau laboratory and devote yourself to science. The Red Devil is different from that trash like Riptide. The ability to transfer space is very practical and worth investing in research. In fact, if the White Queen's psychic abilities weren't a threat, Gino wouldn't have killed her. But being able to get a Red Devil mutant as research material is considered a profit. Seeing Gino slowly approaching him, the Red Devil screamed in horror. You, don't come here. He couldn't even tell who was the devil. The thought of being locked up in a dark room and tortured made him want to die right now. At the same time that Relio died and the White Queen was shot in the head, Xiao, who was far away in the ice field, also learned about the death of his men from Kong. I installed life monitors on your men. Kong looked at the livid Xiao with a smile, and did not forget to stimulate. As a result, the life signals of Riptide and White Queen were extinguished. Damn it! Xiao angrily hammered the table, his eyes full of anger. Gino actually killed 2 of his capable men in one swift move. He has never suffered such a big loss. But soon, Xiao thought of the mutant Red Devil and asked, where is the Red Devil? Where is he? I don't know, but he was probably caught by Gino. Kong looked at the angry Xiao and quickly added fuel to the fire and said, so do you believe it now, that God among men will stand in your way? Xiao looked deeply at Kong. Although he knew that this guy was deliberately using him, he didn't intend to use Kang's power. So, Xiao thought for a while and asked, so, Mr. Kong, what can you do to deal with that god on Earth? Since the other party proposed cooperation, he had to check Kang's ability. Haha, I have a powerful biological robot here. Kong Zhe tapped the panel on his wrist, and immediately, a tall biological weapon covered in armor and with a single orange eye on its head quietly appeared in the room. The huge body pierced the ceiling of this room, and just standing here gave Xiao a huge sense of oppression. Kong smiled confidently and crossed his arms. Please allow me to introduce to you the most powerful robot from the 31st century, the nemesis of mutants, the Sentinel robot. They can detect any mutant form and automatically evolve a targeted plan. Xiao felt a little uncomfortable after hearing Kang's introduction. After all, he was also a mutant. But now the common enemy between the two is the god on Earth, so Xiao suppressed the dissatisfaction in his heart and asked instead, what is your plan? Kong smiled confidently, it's very simple. Let's assassinate Laodu and set up a trap for Gino to show up. Then my sentry robot will easily tear him apart. Xiao frowned slightly, thinking a lot with his suspicious nature, but you have such a powerful weapon, why did you take it out now? If you had taken it out earlier, the Red Skull wouldn't have died, right? Xiao's words were like a blow to Kang's heart. He was silent for a moment. It was probably because he was careless and thought Gino was just an ordinary mutant. It wasn't until he saw Gino's strength that Kong hurried back to the 31st century and obtained the Sentinel robot from the future military. Forget it, let's not mention this. Let's still discuss how to set up traps. Xiao shook his head and stopped worrying about these details. He planned to listen to Kang's plan. Moreover, he didn't plan to go in person. At the very least, he had to prepare a substitute to test it out. Let Kong take the lead. Heavenly Sword Bureau. Gino locked the Red Devil in an underground laboratory and gave it to Dr. Erskine and Dr. Erskine to study. Before leaving, Gino did not forget to warn the Red Devil not to try to escape. If the other party dares to escape, he will catch the Red Devil even if he escapes to the end of the world. In fact, this was entirely because Gino was overly worried. The Red Devil was already frightened out of his wits and had no idea of escaping. Moreover, the two Erskines' research on mutants is not as good as Dr. Bolivar, the father of the Sentinels and an expert on mutants. The two scientists were not very interested in the Red Devil, so apart from losing his freedom, the Red Devil lived a good life in the cell. He had food and drink, and he could read newspapers every day to pass the time. After leaving the underground base, Gino received a piece of good news. Just a few days ago, George, who awakened his teleportation ability through Compound No, has already started taking action. The other party targeted a greedy congressman and planned to open up the situation from the other party. Gino took today's newspaper and saw the news reported on the cover of the newspaper. The greedy congressman was brutally quartered and died at home. George and others even left the name of their organization tied in the room. The murder of a congressman certainly attracted the attention of high-level officials, and the FBI was dispatched to follow up the investigation. While Gino was deep in thought, he received a call from Howard. Gino, good news. I reverse-engineered Kang's technology, and now I can locate that guy's location. Oh, so fast? Gino was a little surprised. Howard, who worked hard, was very efficient. Howard's proud laughter came from the other end of the phone. Of course, the men of the Stark family either don't do it, or they do it the best. If you have time, come and get it now. Also, go through the main entrance. My villa has been renovated 4 times. Regarding Howard's complaint, Gino smiled helplessly. After all, it was convenient to fall from the sky. Okay, I'll be there right away. Be sure to welcome me with good wine. Gino hung up the phone, walked to the rooftop outside the office, then flew high into the sky and rushed to Howard's manor. Gino was very fast. As soon as Howard hung up the phone, the voice of the old butler Jarvis came from the lawn of the villa. Admiral Gino, welcome. The master of the house is waiting inside the house. The old housekeeper politely led Gino into the villa. In the villa at the moment, Howard was wearing a luxurious nightgown, with bags under his eyes and dark circles. It looked like he hadn't had a good rest, and he looked listless. Villa living room. You came. I am coming. You shouldn't have come. Okay, stop talking nonsense. Where are the things? Gino interrupted Howard. Howard shrugged, opened the door, and led Gino to the basement. He pointed to the old-fashioned washing machine-style machine in the basement. This is the locator I created using the teleporter you gave me. Howard pinched his chin proudly. As long as you activate this instrument, you can locate Kang's position. However, this thing also has flaws. It can only scan the city where the instrument is located. If you want to locate the entire Earth, it is impossible with current technology. Tisk. Gino frowned slightly, but it was right to think about it. Now is not the future. There are satellites flying overhead and surveillance around the world. It's pretty strong if Howard can create it. Gino shrugged. Let's try it first. Maybe Kang is hiding in Washington. After all, the most dangerous place is the safest. Maybe Kang is hiding somewhere in Washington. Howard pressed the button of the instrument a few times, and soon, the old machine turned and made a tooth-piercing sound of gears clashing. The radar on the instrument flashed, followed by a piercing alarm. Gino and Howard looked at each other and then rushed to the instrument. The two looked at the screen. I saw a green dot flashing on the gray screen to attract attention. That guy is really here. Howard looked like he had seen a ghost and looked at Gino suspiciously. Has the other person opened his mouth? Gino held his chin and looked at the instrument. Unexpectedly, he guessed correctly. Kang was actually in Washington, D.C. We should catch him immediately. Gino looked at Howard. Where is the guy shown above? Howard glanced at the radar, combined with the position in his brain. His tone was horrified. No, that guy is in the White House. What? Is he in the White House? Could it be that that guy is pretending to be President Do? Gino stood up immediately, his expression a little ugly. At this time, the basement door opened. The old butler Jarvis walked into the basement, stood on the stairs and shouted to the two people below. Master, Admiral Gino, you may need to take a look at this. Our president has been kidnapped. The two quickly followed Jarvis to the living room. I saw scenes from the White House flashing on the black and white TV. At this moment, President Laudu was tied to a chair in a shameful posture, and his mouth was shamefully covered with a white cloth, unable to speak. The next second, a figure walked out of the left side of the White House. A middle-aged man wearing a strange helmet, with his hands behind his back, staring at the camera playfully. Gino Wilson, or Superman, or a native of the motherland. No matter what your name is, the fact that you killed one of my subordinates makes me very angry. This is our first meeting. Nice to meet you. As a welcome gift, I planted tons of explosives all over Washington. As long as I press this button, the entire Washington will be blown up. As he spoke, Xiao shook the red remote control button on his hand, leaned down slightly and stared at the camera, expressionlessly saying, "Now let's play a game." Xiao raised his right hand and shook his arm. I give you 1 minute to come to the White House and rescue the president. Otherwise, your free America will lose a president. As he spoke, the man smiled slightly, the picture was interrupted, and the TV screen lit up with snowflakes. Gino and Howard looked at each other, and they both saw something bad in each other's eyes. Gino frowned slightly. It seems Kang and Xiao are getting involved. Howard quickly persuaded, this looks like a trap. They must have prepared a plan to deal with you. Gino nodded slightly. Howard was right. The other party dared to come and challenge him with such arrogance, so he must have made a precise layout and plan. The question before us now is, to go or not to go. Although he doesn't care whether the president dies or not. But Gino is more concerned about Kang's whereabouts. Gino took off the magic floating cloak from his neck, his eyes twinkling. This is a good opportunity. Howard's instrument shows that Kang is in the White House. If this opportunity is missed, who knows when the guy as cunning as a mouse will show up next time. Slowly opening his eyes, Gino made up his mind. Kang's threat is far greater than the threat of mutant Xiao. Kang the Conqueror must die, he said. God cannot save that Nico even if he comes. As for the explosives Xiao buried in the corners of the city, Gino thought for a moment and used the phone in the basement to call Peggy. Peggy, you saw the TV too, right? Peggy on the other end of the phone looked up at the TV in the lobby and said calmly, I see, what do you need us to do? Xiao has buried a lot of explosives everywhere. Now I need you and Natasha to find these explosives and mobilize everyone in the Skyward Sword Bureau to find these explosives. Gino's eyes flashed with ambition. It's a good opportunity to let Americans across the United States know your stage. Gino hung up the phone and stuffed it to Howard. Howard, I'm leaving. Please help me keep an eye on Kang at all times. Gino's mind was made up, and he ignored Howard who wanted to say something. He jumped into the sky and flew towards the White House. Along the way, Gino saw that the ground was already in a mess. The army is constantly mobilizing troops and tanks towards the White House, and people are getting together to discuss the president's kidnapping case. Many people are curious about who is capable of kidnapping the president, and whether Gino will go. Others fled in their cars, planning to leave Washington. Outside the White House, the National Guard had already arrived and was surrounded. Whoosh! Gino fell suddenly. When the soldiers saw Gino coming, they immediately left the road and looked at Gino respectfully. The reputation and performance built during the war made Gino the flag of a free America. Admiral Gino, you are here. Guard Commander Colonel Warren saluted Gino. Tell me about the situation, Colonel. Gino clasped his hands behind his back and looked into the distance. That's it, Admiral Gino. 3 and 10 minutes ago, according to the description of the White House security guard, a blue light fell on the lawn, and then 3 people appeared. A black man, a middle-aged white man, and a demon with 4 arms. As soon as they appeared, the presidential staff and guards took the president to hide in the underground defense facility. However, it seemed that those iron gates did not stop the 3 guys. Our president was arrested. Gino nodded indifferently, his eyes falling on the White House. Through the thick cement walls, Gino could clearly see what was going on inside. In the president's office, poor Laudu was tied to a chair, with a look of horror on his face, and Nikokon was lazily leaning on the sofa. Mutant Xiao sat in the president's seat, holding his head, as if waiting for Gino to appear. Sir, what should we do now? The commander interrupted Gino's thoughts and looked at Gino with admiration. Outside the White House, resting on the thick iron bars, the group looked towards the direction of the White House. The National Guard colonel made his own suggestion. Sir, maybe we can try to drop gas bombs inside to force them out. Gino glanced at the colonel who made the suggestion with a strange expression. This guy must be related to the future commander of Black Hawk Down. Put poisonous gas inside? A man from the future and a mutant who can absorb energy and convert it into strength. These two people look like they can be forced out by poisonous gas? Gino spoke calmly. Your plan is great, but what should our poor president do? The colonel's face froze, he smiled, and closed his mouth. While the two were thinking, a soldier came to report. Sir, Admiral Gino, there is a guy outside the cordon who calls himself Electric Shock Boy asking to come in. Gino raised his eyebrows, and a surprised look flashed across his face. Unexpectedly, Steve didn't leave? Gino opened his mouth and gave instructions. Let him in. Soon, Steve, who was wearing a grey-blue uniform and holding a shield, was led by soldiers to Gino. Gino stared at Steve in surprise. Steve, I thought you left Washington. Steve's face was serious. I was planning to form a superhero team, and I have been busy recruiting members during this time. Don't underestimate Steve's charisma. With his American butt and perfect figure, as well as his righteous tone, Steve can usually attract like-minded people to join his team. I saw the news at the bar, and I thought you might need my power, so I rushed over. Very good, Steve, you came at just the right time. Gino smiled slightly and was about to find an unlucky guy to attract Kang's attention, but unexpectedly Steve showed up. Gino put his arms around Steve's neck. Steve, Bucky is in there now. What I need you to do is simple, find Bucky and fight him. Steve nodded. He understood. It's just charging and fighting, right? He was very familiar with this fighting method, because this was Steve's fighting style, charging, fighting, getting injured, and then charging. And the matter also involves Bucky, and Steve is even more motivated. Don't worry, Gino, I will definitely complete the task. After that, Steve started sprinting faster, jumped over the iron fence, and then ran towards the White House. The automatic sensor placed by Kang in the corner was activated, and two fully automatic machine guns were aimed at Steve. The whistling bullets poured into Steve's direction. Steve didn't move slowly. He rolled on the spot and hid behind a stone pillar, and then threw out the shield in his hand. The shield was seen destroying two machine guns at a tricky angle and then bounced back into Steve's hand. Call. Steve took a deep breath and rushed towards the White House again. While Steve was charging, Kang and Xiao from the president's office also discovered Steve holding a shield. Where did this guy come from? Xiao looked away from Steve's American butt and looked at Kang in confusion. Kang's face was livid, as if he had seen a ghost. This guy's name is Captain America, but in your universe, he's called Shockboy. Looking at Steve's grey-blue uniform, Kang felt desperate at the moment, and even the uniform had changed. Xiao stared at Kang angrily. Send your super soldiers to stop him quickly. Our trap is for Gino, not for this boy with a pert butt. Don't worry, my friend. Kang smiled slightly and then shouted to Bucky outside the door. Long live the Hydra. Standing still, Bucky raised his hands above his head and shouted, Long live Hydra. Kang smiled faintly, pointed at Bucky, and said to Xiao, This is an interesting story. Do you know the relationship between this transformed warrior and the boy with the buttocks? What? They have been good friends since childhood, and now they are going to stage a scene of killing each other. A cruel smile appeared on Kang Hei's face. This really makes me so excited. Kang sneered and gave the order. Kill the enemy with the shield. Bucky accepted the order and walked towards the outside of the White House. He gradually accelerated, getting faster and faster, like a speeding giant tank, and the surrounding earth shook under his footsteps. Boom! Bucky smashed the white stone bricks with his head and slammed into Steve fiercely with a straightforward momentum. Facing the incoming strong man, Steve subconsciously raised his shield. Bucky's arm slammed into the vibranium shield, and the huge force hit the shield with a harsh roar. Steve was also hit by this brute force and kept retreating. He struggled to stabilize his body. Steve once again saw Bucky, his gay friend whom he had longed for. Bucky. Steve held up his shield with a complex look on his face. The familiar old friend's eyes were dull, and he just stared at Steve while breathing heavily, muttering about killing the intruder. Roar. Bucky roared and raised his arms, and the violent cosmic energy gathered in his fists and turned into beating arcs to bombard his opponent. Steve gritted his teeth, opened his arms, and his chest glowed with orange light. The next moment, two rays of light, one blue and one orange, suddenly collided. The explosion caused by the interweaving of energy raised the grass in front of the White House to scorched earth. Thick smoke filled the sky, and Steve rushed toward Bucky with his shield in hand. Sorry, Bucky, I have to knock you down today. Bucky reached out his hands to grab Steve and squeeze him to death. Steve avoided Bucky's attack with a sliding shovel, then jumped onto Bucky's neck, raised the vibranium shield in his hand and hit Bucky on the back of the head. Bang, bang. It was like the sound of iron being struck, and the giant Bucky struggled wildly, with forearms touching the back of his head, trying to pull the bug off his neck. But Steve clung to Bucky like a dogskin plaster and wouldn't let go. No matter what, all he could see was the back of Bucky's head. Steve kept hitting Bucky on the head, causing the skin on his neck to burst open, revealing the hard steel inside. What? Steve's eyes widened. His gay friend's bones were actually replaced with alloy? But before Steve could react, Bucky seized the opportunity, grabbed Steve with 4 big hands, and squeezed him. Die. Bucky's eyes flashed with bloodlust, and his forearms kept squeezing Steve's ribs, trying to crush him to death. Not only that, Bucky's forearms were even filled with electric currents that shocked Steve. What? Steve's whole body twitched, seeing that he was about to be crushed to death by his former best friend. Duan. The strength in his hand suddenly loosened, Steve fell to the dirt, and Bucky's huge body fell, revealing the figure behind him. Gino floated in the air, with a calm expression. He retracted his fists and shrugged at Steve. This head is pretty hard. Looking at Bucky lying on the ground, Steve looked bitter. Gino did what he wanted to do but couldn't do with just one punch. Steve walked towards Bucky, checked his breathing, and confirmed that Bucky was still alive. He couldn't help but breathed a sigh of relief and said gratefully, "Thank you, Gino, you are." "Stop talking about being nice, something is coming this way." Gino interrupted Steve and quietly looked at the sky above his head. Whoosh. I saw 2 huge humanoid creatures falling from a high altitude, appearing in a superhero kneeling posture, and landed heavily on the White House lawn. Their entire bodies are covered with steel, and their heads are covered with a huge orange-red one eye. At this moment, this group of robots stood up slowly. Their height of nearly 6 meters made them look very oppressive. What kind of monsters are these things? Steve looked at the giant robot in horror. Gino crossed his hands and stared at the 4 anthropomorphic weapons in front of him with interest. I didn't expect to see these future robots here. As a senior Marvel fan, Gino has naturally seen this kind of biological machine in the Mutants series. This little thing was the culprit who once wiped out mutants. It also has a majestic title, the Sentinel Robot. Compared with the old and heavy Sentinel machine of the first version, this Sentinel machine of the future 31st century can be described as a real mutant butcher. They can copy each other's abilities by disarming mutants, and become stronger the more mutants they come into contact with. At the same time, these Sentinel machines can also share mutant abilities with each other. Generally, mutants will basically die when they encounter them. After all, ordinary mutants can't fight against a Sentinel robot that has copied the abilities of a group of mutants. Steve frowned slightly. It seemed that Gino knew the origin of these things. Gino had no intention of explaining. Steve didn't need to know so much. At this time, countless blue and white drones with strange shapes flew from all directions of the White House. The drones shot out blue beams and constructed a 3-dimensional image of Kong in midair. The bald black man looked at Gino with a smile on his face. "Admiral Gino, nice to meet you. Now, please enjoy the gift I give you, a great product from the 31st century, the nemesis of mutants, the Sentinel Robot." As he spoke, Kong Zigu shook the wine glass in his hand, took a sip of red wine, and said contentedly, "I can't help but want to watch you with blood splattered everywhere and drink the wine of victory." Gino stared at Kong without changing his expression, and then smiled slightly. "Oh, really? I admit that the sentry robots are indeed very strong against mutants. But..." Gino moved his neck to prepare for the next battle, and said, "Death Baldhead, have you ever considered the question that my abilities are not given by mutant genes?" Kang's expression changed. Gino's words caught him by surprise. "Wait, what do you mean you're not a mutant?" "That's what it means literally." Gino smiled slightly and rushed towards the sentry robot the next second. Boom! The soil under his feet suddenly exploded, leaving a huge crater. Gino punched away the Sentinel machine, known as the Killing Machine. At the same time that Gino's fist touched the Sentinel robot, the chip inside the Sentinel machine also started to work. Analysis of variant genes. The mutant gene fragment cannot be analyzed. The contact target does not possess the mutant gene. Buzz. The heat vision swept across the waist and abdomen of the Sentinel, splitting the sturdy Sentinel machine into 2. The orange light on the top of the huge machine went out, which meant that the Sentinel machine was scrapped and offline. "This is impossible." Kong looked at the severed Sentinel machine in surprise, and turned his attention to Gino again. "This guy is really not a mutant, so where does his ability come from? This is not scientific at all." Before Kong could figure it out. At this moment, Gino was like a god descending to earth, grabbing a sentry machine, exerting force with both hands, and his muscles exploded with powerful force, and brutally pulled out the head of another sentry machine. The Sentinel machine, which Kong regarded as his trump card, was easily destroyed by Gino. "Now, it's time to settle things between us." Gino threw away the sentry machine head, used his legs to rush towards the White House. Breaking through the concrete wall along the way, Gino smashed the wooden door of the president's office and found Kong and Xiao. At this moment, Kang's face was dull, while Xiao's face was frightened. Bionic Man. Gino used his clairvoyance ability to see clearly the internal structural parts. This machine should be Kang's disguise, and his real body might be hiding in a corner and peeking in secret. "However, since you are in the White House, I'm not afraid that I won't be able to find you." Gino sneered, took off the cloak behind him and threw it away. "Cloak, go find Kong." The magic floating cloak shook its collar in a humane manner, as if it was stretching comfortably, and then the cloak pointed sharply into the air, and then turned into a bolt of lightning and rushed towards the clouds. Gino narrowed his eyes slightly and followed the cloak into the air, throwing out a sonic boom and flying high into the sky. The cloak continued to climb, opening the four corners of the cloak, turning into a huge red cloth, wrapping a cloud. The next second, the entire space seemed to be divided. The clouds and air stagnated, and the cloak returned to its size and returned to Gino's back. I saw that the cloud kept flickering and twisting, and then returned to its original state, a huge spaceship. It turns out that the cunning Kong has been using an invisible spacecraft to hide in the air and spy on every move on the ground. Gino's eyes narrowed, but he found that his clairvoyance ability could not see through the situation inside. Can't you see through the structure inside? Gino thought for a moment. Maybe the material of Kang's spaceship was mixed with zinc element. The zinc element can block the perspective. It's no wonder that Kong was hiding in the air but didn't notice him. But now, Gino sneered and slowly floated towards the spaceship. Kong, the little blue man in the spaceship, looked at Gino flying towards the spaceship in horror. Damn it, how did he find out? Kong said in a horrified tone, pushing the spacecraft to accelerate in a panic. The spaceship instantly turned into an afterimage and flew into the distance. But what frightened Kong was that the surrounding scene seemed to be distorted. No matter how fast he made the spacecraft increase, he could never leave this space, as if he was trapped in a maze. At this time, the spacecraft window was lightly clicked, which was particularly loud in this silent space. Kong raised his head in horror. After losing his proud technology and escape ability, this Nico showed his fragility. There is Kong in every timeline, but each Kong is an independent individual. When he dies, he is dead. There is no reincarnation. But now, Kong seemed to be able to hear the fatal bell ringing in his ears. Gino was seen floating gently in front of the spacecraft window, his vibranium suit shining silver in the sunlight. He smiled and stretched out his fingers to tap the glass rhythmically. With a cheerful smile on his face, he stared at Kong, who was trembling with fear. Kong, I'm coming in. When a person loses what he relies on and steps out of the so-called comfort zone, he will become hesitant and fearful. When Kong discovered that the future technology he was proud of had lost its function in this space, the guy became as frightened as everyone else. Bald Nico screamed like a mad dog. What did you do to me? Oh. Gino smashed the glass with one punch. He slowly floated into the cockpit and stared down at Kong. A dead person doesn't need to know so much. As he spoke, Gino's eyes lit up red. Out of humanitarianism, he casually asked, do you have any last words? Wait a minute, you can't kill me. To Gino's surprise, Kong actually had something to say. Actually, I come from the future time and space. Kong looked up at Gino, eager to prove his worth. I can create powerful future technology weapons. At the same time, we also know where the future is headed. There was something flattering on Kang's dark face. You are a smart man. Keeping me will do more good than killing me. Gino just stared at Kong with a faint smile. You are right, but I want to tell you a secret. Gino slowly leaned down and said, actually, I am also from the future. What? Kong tilted his head in confusion. How is this possible? Gino smiled indifferently. Hihi, I lied to you. You'd better die. After saying that, Gino's pupils narrowed slightly, and his fiery gaze shot towards Kong from his eyes. The expression on young Nico's face changed drastically, and the heat vision carrying a terrifying temperature passed through the air between the two of them. The air seemed to be ignited by the heat wave, becoming distorted and illusory. Buzz. The heat vision that could melt everything hit Kang's body. But the next second, the bald purple slutty windbreaker seemed to sense a fatal threat, and a thick purple energy shield enveloped the bald head. The continuous laser hits the purple protective cover and makes a pop sound. The two sides attack and defend, and sparks continue to fall on the iron plate of the spacecraft. Seeing that his protective shield blocked Gino's attack, Kang's originally panicked mood changed from fear to calmness. Bald Nico let out a long sigh of relief and slowly straightened his back. He put his hands behind his back and resumed the arrogant posture of a future person. He stared at Gino in front of him, bald-headed and sneered and said disdainfully, Gino Wilson, I admit that your performance exceeded my expectations. I thought you were powerful. It's the mutant genes that gave it to you. Although the sentry I prepared was defeated by you, I am not without other preparations. As he spoke, Kong threw off his purple robe, revealing a purple armor full of technological futuristic style. The lavender energy engine on his bald chest exuded a faint halo, and lit up from time to time to deliver energy to the surrounding protective shield. He proudly nodded the energy reactor on his chest and said, I paid a lot of money to get this thing from the Future Stark Company. The energy contained in it is enough to support high power consumption for 100 years. The bald head showed a confident expression. He stared at Gino and said, so, if you don't want to be stuck here with me for 100 years, we might as well negotiate a condition and share this world together. Kong said with an enthusiastic expression, think about conquering a world. This is a dream that no one has realized for thousands of years since the birth of mankind, and now, this opportunity is right in front of you. Kong stretched out his index finger, tapped Gino through the protective shield and said, your powerful force coupled with my powerful technology, it is enough to conquer this world and even the entire universe. Kong was about to say something, but was interrupted by Gino. He held his hands, and the sunlight penetrated the glass and hit the vibranium armor, making it look shiny. The young man's beautiful eyes stared at Kang with a playful look. What you said is indeed tempting, but I can do this without you? And a king will not share authority with others. Just imagine that if you really agree to Kang's request, when the two of them really divide the world equally, they will only think about annexing each other's territory. Because human desires are unlimited, if you have something, you want more. Kang said angrily, then just spend it here with me. I have an energy supply system, so I don't need to eat or drink at all. The broken windows let in cold wind and ruffled Gino's cloak. He released his arms, clenched his fists again, slowly raised his arms, and said calmly, I think you misunderstood. Can a turtle shell really last you 100 years? After saying that, Gino punched suddenly, and the terrifying fist tore through the air with a sharp explosion. The ultimate power fell on the purple shield, and even the entire spacecraft whined and trembled under the punch. Kang's originally peaceful expression changed drastically. He looked at the purple reactor on his chest that was constantly flashing. With just one punch, most of the energy in the device on his chest was lost. Gino raised his fist again with an expressionless expression, and said in a joking tone, to be honest, I still need to thank you, because there has never been anything that can make me use all my strength. Ever since I became stronger, I need to be careful no matter what I do, and your protective shield finally allows me to use my full strength. Gino grinned and punched the shield again, as if punching a punch bag. Boom. There was another explosion, and Kang's expression became uncertain as the purple light flashed on his chest. He found that the color of the protective shield in front of him was gradually becoming illusory, as if it might break at any time. How is this possible? Kang looked ugly. The man in front of him only used 2 punches and consumed half of the energy of the protective shield. Kang's mind was in chaos at this moment, and his body couldn't help shaking. The man thought in his heart, if this situation continues, I will die. Boom. Gino punched again, like a ruthless boxer, hammering the shield with each punch. Wait. Gino, let's talk. Kang changed his face again and said anxiously, please give me a chance. I am willing to be your assistant and help you rule the world. As long as you don't kill me, you can say anything. In Kang's view, Gino is actually the same type of person as him, both of whom are ambitious. However, the two have different ways of realizing their ambitions. In order to survive, they are willing to be Gino's dog. However, Gino remained unmoved by Kang's statement, with an indifferent smile on his face and raised his fist again. Boom. Another powerful blow, and the originally solid purple barrier began to flicker. This thing could no longer hold on for long. Seeing that Gino ignored his request at all, Kang's expression gradually became ferocious, and he said viciously, Gino Wilson, you are a devil. You don't belong to this world at all. Why does Kamal Taj allow a devil like you to exist? G's expression remained unchanged. He didn't bother to talk nonsense to the dying person, he just pumped his fist again, raised his fist, and shook his fist. Boom. Another swift blow hit the energy shield. Around the fist, the shield that was struggling to support began to crack, making a clicking sound. The sound was like sharp knives piercing Kang's heart, making him look desperate. Oh, the shield was completely shattered. Gino retracted his fist and hid the smile on his face. He looked at Kang indifferently like the god of death taking his life. Are you finished? This time, you can die. The next second, an iron arm that looked like it was made of steel tightly grabbed the man's neck. Kang struggled wildly and twisted his body, like a drowning traveler, his iron arms suffocating his throat, and his thick red lips gradually turned purple and white due to the constant lack of oxygen. Kang's eyes rolled up, and he stared at Gino with a pair of white eyes. He tried hard to say something, but Gino didn't give him any chance. Time traveler. Gino chuckled and increased the strength of his hand again. Looking at Kang's gradually twisted neck, Gino said expressionlessly, I hope you can find a good place next time. Don't want. Gino increased his strength, and the bones of Kang's throat shattered, making a squeaking sound. Large areas of blood spurted out from his mouth and nose, and the hands that originally held Gino's fingers fell free. Breaking in. The iron hand completely crushed Kang's neck. The man's neck was broken and his head was hanging upside down. At the last second when he lost consciousness, Kang finally heard what Gino had not finished. My timeline. Gino gently let go of the man's neck. Kang's body was like a used rag, and his body fell on the cold iron plate of the spacecraft in an extremely weird posture. Gino threw Kang's body in the corridor of the spaceship like garbage, and then turned his attention to the spacecraft. I have to say that Kang was really a good person. Before he died, he gave himself a spaceship built with future technology. With this thing, taking it back and allowing Zola and the two to study it at will can advance the science and technology of Tianjian Bureau by 100 years. Gino said to the cloak, Cloak, release the mirror space. The cloak swayed slightly, and the next second, the surrounding scenery returned to normal. The flowing white clouds and cold wind hit him, and Gino returned to the real space again. The White House underfoot, a symbol of free America, has long been turned into ruins with billowing smoke. Now, there is still one guy who has not been solved. A cold light flashed in Gino's eyes, his gaze locked on Xiao below, and turned into a bolt of lightning and rushed towards the man, like a cannonball crashing into the dome of the White House. Oh. Without giving Xiao time to react, Gino's ferocious fist punched through Xiao's chest. Looking at the man lying in a pool of blood, Xiao's face twitched and twisted in the next second, and he soon turned into a middle-aged white man with fat on his face. This is not Xiao. Gino narrowed his eyes slightly. The corpse in front of him looked more like a mutant who had transformed into Xiao and followed Kong to the White House. It seems that the leader of the Hellfire Hell Club is far more cunning than imagined. However, the purpose of this trip has been achieved. He successfully killed Kong and eliminated the biggest threat. As for Xiao, Gino's eyes flashed with bloodlust. I hope you can run far away and don't let me find you. Come back to your senses again. Gino stepped over the body and walked into the White House. Laudu, who was tied to a chair with a rope, saw Gino walking in, and his frightened eyes rekindled the light of hope. No. The president struggled in his chair and was visibly agitated. Oh, President Laudu, don't get excited. Gino smiled and untied the rope from Laudu. Thank God, Admiral Gino, thank you for coming. Old Du, who was surviving the disaster, stroked his chest, his face turned pale, and he looked frightened. But soon, anger replaced Laudu's mood. The president looked at the ruins of the White House around him, with a look of sullenness on his face. Those damn superhumans dared to kidnap me. Laudu was very angry. He was the first president in history to be kidnapped by kidnappers who broke into the White House. This means that he has completely become the talk of the American people after dinner. When their names are mentioned, people will only smile and say, oh, it turns out to be the unlucky guy who was kidnapped. Looking at the angry Laudu, Gino's lips curled up into a smile. He really didn't expect Kong to be so awesome. I was originally worried about how to legalize superheroes, but unexpectedly, I was presented with the opportunity. Coupled with the previous murder of a congressman, Gino suddenly had a plan. Interrupting Laudu at the right time, Gino said, with all due respect, Mr. President, this kind of thing may happen more and more in the future. I wonder if you have paid attention to the murder of a congressman in Washington? This case seems to be a crime committed by someone with superpowers. They call themselves a wave intent on overthrowing our free America. Listening to Gino's story, Laudu felt his head grow bigger. He was frightened and frightened. He grasped Gino's armor as if grasping a life-saving straw and asked, Admiral Gino, what should we do? After this kidnapping case. Laudu hated superhuman criminals so much that he gritted his teeth. Now, Laudu relies more on Gino's opinions and ideas. After all, Admiral Gino has proven with his actions that he is a loyal minister of the free United States. Gino shook off the president's hand and sat unceremoniously in the president's seat. He placed his fingers on his chin alternately, stared into the man's eyes and said, Your Excellency, our Skyward Sword Bureau is determined to protect the security of the United States and the Earth. As early as a few months ago, I anticipated this situation and secretly prepared a plan called the Superhero Legalization Plan. Regarding Gino's wanton behavior, Laudu dared not say anything in anger, so he could only respond with an expression uglier than crying, Superhero Plan. Gino nodded and said, Yes, in fact, for superhumans, we can definitely get them on our side by bundling their interests. Think about it, Your Excellency, when you have super soldiers protecting you, will you feel much more peaceful when you sleep? I have to say that Laudu was very moved by Gino's words. However, the president said with some concerns, but Congress will not easily pass this bill. Admiral Gino, maybe you can help lobby those congressmen. Gino heard the voice of Laudu's words. This guy wanted to sit back and enjoy the success, and let him do all the hard work. In such cases, Gino didn't panic, just smiled indifferently, then walked towards Laudu and patted the man's shoulder gently. Gino was clearly smiling, but Laudu felt fear from him, extreme fear. The invisible and terrifying coercion made Laudu couldn't help but tremble. He only heard Gino slowly say, If I need to do everything, then what else does the president need to do? Gino's words were full of naked threats. Laudu couldn't help but trembled, and nodded quickly and agreed, Okay, I will convince Congress to pass this bill. He almost forgot that this being who was called the god of the world by the people was not a good-tempered person. After all, the deaths of old Charlie and old Arthur are still full of doubts, and there are rumors that Gino killed the two admirals. He didn't want to be the third unlucky person. Seeing that Laudu was very sensible, Gino smiled with satisfaction. Very good, I hope Your Excellency the President will not disappoint me. Giving a stick to a sweet date, Gino did not forget to comfort Laudu. In a few days, I will send an elite team to protect your safety. Gino let go of Laudu's shoulders, and then shot straight into the sky under the man's gaze. The challenge starts tomorrow and ends every day. Angry. The bombing of the White House had far-reaching consequences. Now the entire United States is in chaos, and the media are rushing to report the impact of this incident. At the same time, Gino's name has once again spread throughout free America. With the cooperation of Paige and Natasha, plus Sabretooth Tiger and Wolverine, the four of them also rushed to defuse the bomb before Xiao detonated it. However, there were also omissions, such as bombs in some slums that were not defused in time and killed a large number of immigrants. Gino's comment on this was that it didn't matter. Anyway, the people who died were just bastards, so it wouldn't have any impact. At this moment, outside the ruins of the White House, the reporters who rushed in wanted to interview the president, but were blocked by soldiers outside the cordon until the president held a press conference and stated that he would launch a superhero plan. Anyone with superpowers can become a superhero through the selection of Sword Bureau. Whether they are mutants or superhumans, as long as they become a superhero, they will be the heroes of free America. This statement came out of Lao Du's mouth and immediately caused an uproar. For a time, conspiracy theories, hero threat theories and other theories emerged one after another. But this has nothing to do with Gino. Gino is currently on Kang's future plane with Howard. Standing at an altitude of meters, Howard's initial nervousness turned into excitement. At this moment, Howard was like meeting a child who likes Christmas gifts. He couldn't stop touching this future fighter plane. Although Kang's dead expression on the iron plate of the spacecraft was a bit scary, he had also been on the battlefield. Not only was he not afraid of corpses, he was obviously very interested in the energy reactor on Kang's chest. Have you figured out how to drive it? Gino looked at the clouds in the distance with his hands behind his back. Howard shivered. Because of the broken window, cold wind kept pouring in. The man could only hide behind Gino and nodded and said, "That's about it. Shall we drive him back to you?" For this technological genius, it was only a simple study to analyze the driving method of this fighter jet. Gino nodded lightly. Well, drive it back. So, Howard controlled the fighter plane and flew in the direction of Tianjian Bureau. Setting the fighter plane to unmanned, Howard smiled and rubbed his arms. Gino, there's something I don't know whether I should say. Gino frowned and guessed what Howard was thinking. What? Do you want to study this fighter plane? Howard shrugged. Of course, what scientist can say no to a future fighter? Listening to Howard telling him his plan, Gino raised a smile on his lips, stared at Howard and said, "It's not impossible, but I also have a request. Then join the Skyward Sword Bureau. Howard, I can leave you a position as a scientific advisor." Gino has been coveting Howard's scientific research technology for a long time. If Howard can be recruited, it will undoubtedly be a qualitative leap for the science and technology of Tianjian Bureau. And, do you remember the energy grenade I gave you last time? I found the energy source, a cosmic cube. The terrifying power contained in it is beyond your imagination. Hearing Gino's words, Howard couldn't help but swallow his saliva. This condition was simply too tempting. How about it? Do you want to think about it? Gino smiled and hugged Howard's neck. But seeing that Howard was still hesitant, Gino couldn't help but drop another bombshell. Actually, I plan to ask Dr. Erskine and Dr. Zola to build a space battleship for me. Although it is basically impossible with current science and technology, Das Han Renkang sent this era-defining fighter, and everything has become possible. Gino fanned the flames and said, "At that time, perhaps the two of them will be known as the greatest scientists of this century and will be remembered throughout the ages." Gino, don't use provoking methods to provoke me. I won't do this. Howard smiled and shook his head, but even though he said this, Howard's mind was always surrounded by the 5 words "the greatest scientist." In the end, Howard still couldn't resist the temptation of the real fragrance, and waved his hands as if admitting defeat. Damn it, I'm in. As a proud scientist, Howard would never allow his achievements to be lower than those of the 2 German scientists. Gino let go of Howard, smiled and patted Howard on the shoulder. Very good, welcome to the Skyward Sword Bureau, Howard. When the future fighter plane landed on the lawn of Tianjian Bureau, everyone in the bureau was shocked. Dr. Zola and Dr. Erskine also rarely came out of the underground laboratory to observe the fighter jet. Gino led Howard to introduce the 2 of them. Dr. Erskine, Dr. Zola, this is Howard, an interesting physicist. The 2 sides looked at each other, and then snorted awkwardly, seeming to express their contempt for each other. Gino smiled. It seems that those who play physics and those who play biology can't get along. However, Gino was not surprised. Instead, he set his sights on Steve, the electric shock kid not far away. Gino nodded towards Steve. Steve. Gino. Steve scratched his head. Gino smiled. Why, are you here because of Bucky's matter? Steve hesitated for a moment and nodded. Yes, Bucky seems to have been turned into a fool by Hydra. Gino held his chin and gave advice. Well, I don't know much about biotechnology. I can ask Dr. Erskine to help you. But there is another thing now. Gino glanced at Steve. What are you going to do next? Gino put his arm around Steve's shoulders, and the 2 of them walked towards the underground base. What to do? Steve shook his head blankly. I don't know what I should do. The war is over, and Bucky has been found. Maybe next I'll try to help Bucky get back to normal. Oh, that's right, but Steve, the free world needs your power. Gino patted Steve on the shoulder. Now that there are more and more people with superpowers, it is inevitable that some people with superpowers will take risks. Steve looked serious. What do you mean? Return to the Black Robe Picket team. The team needs you to join. This is of course a lie. The reason why Gino asked Steve to join the Black Robe Pickets was entirely to let Steve protect the president. As he spoke, Gino said a long paragraph about being an evil Hydra for the people. After hearing Gino's arrangement, Steve quickly nodded and agreed without thinking. No need to say anything, Gino, I promise you. Now Steve was just confused, and when Gino pointed out the direction for him, Steve immediately became stunned. Very good, I look forward to your performance. Gino smiled and turned to leave. When he returned to his office, Gino saw a table full of documents. In fact, the Tianjian Bureau does not deal with any major matters, and its usual work is just sorting out intelligence analysis documents and the like. However, Peggy and Natasha are training every day, so naturally they need to handle these documents by themselves. Damn it. Gino rubbed his temples. He had to find a suitable assistant to help him as soon as possible. And on the other side, Steve led Erskine to the underground base. At this moment, Bucky, who was 3 meters tall, was squatting in the corner like a childish child, looking down at the cartoons playing on the TV and twirling his thumbs. Dr. Erskine shook his head when he saw Bucky's appearance. His current intelligence is only 3 years old. Kang's transformation burned his brain. To be honest, I can only make him understand some fixed instructions. Steve lowered his head in silence, then tightened his shield. It doesn't matter, as long as you're alive, it's okay. Oh my god, there are already 3 American comic books at the same time as Chicken Legs. They are all authored by big guys. If they don't agree with each other, they will cut the books. A week later, after experiencing the kidnapping case, Laudu was very concerned about his personal safety. He quickly lobbied Congress to pass the superhero bill against all objections. The office on the 8th floor at this moment. Gino leaned lazily on his chair, and across the table stood Peggy, Natasha, Steve, Wolverine, and Victor. Well, I have called you here this time because I have good news. Gino turned the pen in his hand and said calmly, the superhero project has been approved. Congress approved the establishment of a superhero team by our Skyward Sword Bureau to protect the security of Washington. And soon, we'll have a second superhero team in New York. As the director of the Tianjian Bureau, I have to take care of many things. From today on, I will withdraw from the position of captain of the Black Robe Picket team. So I came to you this time to determine who wants to stay in Washington. Gino's eyes swept over everyone. Needless to say, Peggy and Natasha, they naturally followed him, focusing on Victor, Logan, and Steve's ideas. Several people looked at each other, and Logan was the first to say, Boss, Victor, and I will be stationed in Washington. Oh, Gino was a little surprised. Logan actually asked to stay in Washington. This was not in line with this guy's lazy character. Meeting Gino's suspicious gaze, Victor grinned and explained, Boss, he found a rich girlfriend here, and that woman is the same woman we met in the bar before. Now that Logan and that woman are having a heated fight all day long, he won't leave Washington at all. Steve also took a step forward and stood up and said, Gino, I also want to stay in Washington. After all, Bucky is here for treatment and I don't want to leave him. Gino nodded. In that case, Steve, Logan, and Victor, the 3 of you stay in Washington to protect the president's safety. After all, he promised the president, and Gino didn't want to break the promise. Haha, boss, I have no objection to becoming teammates with Steve, but the team must have a captain. Victor was the first to stand up and express his opinion. Logan also nodded in approval. A team must have a clear talker and leader. Otherwise, roughly referring to the future Avengers, the Civil War will break out because there is no strong leader. For example, in the famous Justice League, the most talked about person is Batman, but what about the future Avengers? Iron Man Steve is a mess all his own. Interesting. Gino looked at Victor. Is this little guy trying to cause trouble? So, Victor, tell me your opinion, who can become the captain of the Black Robe Picket team? Just as Victor was about to say something, he was lightly kicked in the calf by his brother Logan. Meeting Gino's half-smiling gaze, Victor's heart trembled. I shouldn't be so talkative in front of the boss. So, Victor quickly spoke up to make amends. Well, of course I don't know who is more suitable. Everything depends on the boss. Heh. Gino withdrew his eyes, and then focused on the 3 of Logan. Who is the captain? The solution to this problem is very simple, just have a fight and you will know. The 3 of Logan nodded. An intra-team battle to determine the captain. No. Gino shook his head slightly. I mean, whoever of you can hold on to my hands for the longest time without falling down will be the captain of the Black Robe team. Looking at the smiling Gino, Logan gave Victor a sympathetic look. Bless yourself. Underground base. Holding the thick iron door open, Natasha looked at Logan and Victor sitting on the ground with bruises on their faces with a smile, and said, You two only lasted 1 second. Hiss. Victor rubbed his cheek. Under the influence of the self-healing factor, the bruises on his face quickly faded. He sighed and said, There is no way, the boss is too strong. I just can't imagine anyone beating him. Peggy on the side stared at her watch. Steve has surpassed the record of both of you. He exceeded it by 3 seconds. Victor grinned, his eyes fell on the iron door inside, and he said curiously, I didn't think that guy had such strength. He was weak before, why is he suddenly so strong? He was transformed by the Hope Serum, Peggy explained. Hope Serum. Victor gritted his teeth, when the boss comes out, I will also be transformed by the Hope Serum. When the time came to count, the iron door opened with a bang, and Steve, who was bruised and swollen, was helped out of the training base by Gino. Steve has lasted the longest in my hands, so he will be the next captain of the Black-Robed Picket team. Gino's eyes swept over several people. Which one of you has an opinion? Several people looked at each other, then shook their heads together and said, No objection. Okay, doctor, take Steve down for treatment. Gino asked the doctor to take Steve away. Gino smiled with satisfaction and said, Very good, I'm very satisfied with your attitude. Everyone followed Gino and left the underground base. As soon as they stepped out of the elevator, Victor and Logan approached Gino and said with a sneer, Boss, we want to become stronger. Victor said, I am really too weak now, and I want to become stronger. After all, losing to Steve made him uncomfortable. Listening to Victor's words, Gino frowned slightly and said, Want to become stronger. Gino thought for a moment, and Victor and Logan followed him and did a lot of dirty work to satisfy their wish. Well, there are two options up here. Gino said to the two of them. Plan A is to inject you with the Hope Serum. But using this kind of blood kinship on mutants only seems to increase mutant abilities. For example, enhancing your self-healing ability. However, I do not recommend choosing option A. Your self-healing ability is strong enough. What you need now is powerful force. Gino stretched out his second finger and said, Plan B, replace your bones with indestructible adamantium alloy. As one of the strongest metals in the Marvel world, adamantium alloy is indestructible. As for the problem of the decline of the self-healing factor, as long as he gives Logan an injection and hopes that the serum will reactivate Logan's self-healing factors, it won't be a problem. Replace all the bones in the body with adamantium alloy. Logan and Victor looked at each other, and they couldn't help but hesitate. It sounded scary. Gino nodded and said, Yes, this process will be painful. Not only is it painful, the alloy that has been burned into liquid must first be poured into the body. This step alone makes life worse than death, let alone replacing the bones of the body, which is an unspeakable torture. So, you decide for yourself whether you want to do this or not. Victor gritted his teeth and made up his mind. Boss, I choose Plan B. I can endure the pain, but I can never tolerate the fact that Steve, whom I hate, is stronger than me. When younger brother Logan saw Victor joining, he quickly nodded and said, I'll join too. The experiment finally succeeded. When Logan was injected with hot adamantium alloy into his body and almost died, he finally survived the experiment with his strong willpower. Victor, the saber-toothed tiger, is in a bit of a bad shape. Halfway through the experiment, the guy almost died, so Gino had no choice but to stop his plan to infuse the saber-toothed tiger with Edelman alloy. In other words, only the upper body of saber-toothed tiger is injected with Edelman alloy, and his lower body is still human bones. After the experiment was successful, the two brothers went crazy for a while, because the severe pain destroyed their consciousness, and they wanted to destroy everything in front of them like a madman. However, under the Iron Fist education of Gino AI, the two men realized their mistakes and regained their sanity. As a benefit to the team members, Gino took out 2 sets of vibranium suits for them to change into. Compared to the ugly shit yellow suits of the X-Men. The color of this suit is darker. Moreover, the patterns of wolves and tigers are engraved on the chests of their suits, which looks very good. Soon, the day came when the superhero project was launched. Everyone at Tianjin Bureau was busy and nervous on this day. People had already set up an open-air venue in front of the Tianjin Construction Bureau building. The furry girls in the red house arranged the tableware nervously. And when the time comes tonight, with the sound of several salutes, the press conference officially began. The first to enter were naturally celebrities and politicians. Howard, a mustachioed man, sat at the front with his female companion looking excited. With his relationship with Gino, he found a good position. Immediately afterwards, there were the reporters from Gino Company, with countless cameras all over the corners. When everyone arrived, several fireworks exploded in the sky, and the next second, a majestic figure fell from the sky, setting off a large gust of wind, causing the crowd to scream in surprise. Motherlander. I don't know which lady called, and the crowd suddenly burst into cheers. Fatherlanders, Motherlanders. Gino grinned and opened his arms to the cheers. Welcome, welcome friends. Welcome. Gino lowered his arm and the venue became quiet. Everyone's eyes were focused on Gino. At this moment, he was the center of attention. Gino walked to the microphone with his hands behind his back and said, I invite you here today to let you witness a historic moment. First of all, thank you Mr. President for your support in successfully passing the Superhero Project Act. Laudu, who was invited, stood up with a smile and waved, and good-natured laughter echoed in the venue. Gino smiled, then changed the subject and said, Before we officially introduce our superheroes, I would like to share with you the reasons for establishing the superhero program. Perhaps everyone still remembers the White House kidnapping case a few days ago. Gino looked sad and said, The reason why this happened is entirely because we in the United States do not have our own superhero team. Even before the White House case, there was a congressman who was murdered by someone with superpowers. Gino had a look of sadness and anger on his face, as if he was also feeling sorry for these people. At that time, I was thinking, if we in the United States had our own superpower team, would these situations be avoided? I, Gino Wilson, have always been a just man, so I proposed a bill to the president. And please allow me to launch our own team of Free America for everyone today. Gino finished speaking, and then, a woman wearing a black suit appeared out of thin air to his left. Natasha had a cool temperament and gently put her right hand on Gino's shoulder. One of the Super 7, the symbol of independent girls, Black Widow. Natasha smiled softly, then disappeared in front of everyone, and then reappeared, causing the crowd to scream. Oh my god, that's invisibility. She can really do it. Oh my gosh, I really want superpowers. Before the shocked crowd could recover, Gino spoke again, with invincible divine power, the vice captain of the Super 7, the British Captain Peggy Carter. A figure slowly walked onto the stage. Peggy, dressed in an ancient Roman war dress and holding a vibranium sword, stood in front of the stage with a heroic appearance. She opened her palms and closed them gently, creating a gust of wind. People were shocked again. At this moment, many politicians were already whispering and discussing whether they could have such strange superpowers. but the surprise that Gino brought to everyone was far from that. He smiled again and clapped his hands. Of course, I also want to welcome the other team I led during the war, the black-robed picket team. Gino continued. First of all, there is our butt boy, Steve the electric shock boy. Steve walked onto the platform, carrying his iconic shield and a shy smile on his face. And Wolverine and Sabretooth. Logan and Victor also took to the platform, and they did not forget to show off their abilities. Logan stretched out his hand slightly and revealed 3 adamantium alloy steel claws that glowed coldly. Gino slowly flew into the air and said in front of everyone's shocked eyes, "Friends, a new era has opened to us. As long as we have a righteous heart, everyone can become a superhero." As soon as the words fell, people were completely excited. It was like a new road opened in front of them, and it seemed that everyone could have powerful power. And, Gino said slowly to the TV screen, "We will launch a never-ending superhero selection program to the world starting today. As long as you have superpowers, you can call our number to sign up for the selection. Also, as long as you have a righteous heart, you can also sign up for the selection and have the opportunity to participate in the experiment of the Hope Serum." Gino pointed to the 2 girls on the left. Girls can join the Super 7 and fight the 2 seniors. As for the boys, you can join the Black Robe Pickets and fight alongside the seniors. Gino's words spread along the radio to thousands of households. Many parents suddenly became interested. They were thinking, if they let their children participate in the draft, could they become a member of the Super 7? If a child can really become a superhero, it can completely change the fate of the family. In an apartment at this moment, a pair of parents looked at Gino on the TV. After hearing Gino say the 6 words "become a superhero," the parents looked at each other, and then turned their attention to Gino huddled in the corner. On the girl. Their daughter Raven. This girl looks very strange. She has blue skin all over her body. She looks like an alien, which is scary. The girl looked at her parents in horror. She thought she was going to be beaten again today. His parents treated her very badly because her blue skin was scary and strange. But unexpectedly, her parents smiled at her for a long time. Raven. Her parents squatted in front of her and even took out delicious cakes from the refrigerator and handed them to the girl. The girl carefully took the cake and ate it. Her father smiled flatteringly. "Baby, do you want to be a superhero?" The girl looked up blankly. Although she was young, she didn't understand anything. The girl focused her eyes on Gino on the TV in the distance. Was it because of this person that he changed his parents' attitude? Friends, happy Mid-Autumn Festival. I wish you all family reunion, good health, all the best, and long live the sweet party. Confused face. Chapter 105 Selecting New Superheroes. Gino's remarks caused an uproar across the United States and even allied countries. This man has become a symbol, and his words and deeds can set off the trend of the times. Not long after Gino announced his superhero plan, other countries also launched their own superhero plans. It's impossible not to launch this plan, otherwise all their talents will go to the United States to join the superhero team founded by Gino. All of a sudden, various places started their own domestic selections, which was extremely lively. And in the large conference room on the 7th floor of the Tianjian Bureau, there was a long row of tables lined up side by side, with Gino sitting at the head seat. On the left was Natasha and Peggy's super team, and on the right was the black-robed picket team led by Steve. Natasha handed Gino the information and clicked the table. There are a total of 200 people who signed up this time. However, after the initial elimination of those guys with weak abilities, there are now 8 people who have entered the final round of interviews. Yeah. Gino glanced at the document lazily, crossed his hands and said, "Let's get started quickly." To be honest, he was also looking forward to what kind of surprises these selected candidates would bring to him. The large door was pushed open, and the first interviewer walked into the venue. This boy looks a bit young, probably around 16 years old. At this moment, he stood shyly in front of the stage, bowing to Gino and others. "Hello interviewers, my name is Chuck." When the saber-toothed tiger on the side saw this scene, he smiled so hard that the corners of his mouth stretched to his ears. He, a big boss, could actually act as an interviewer. This made the saber-toothed tiger feel very novel and interesting. Natasha said into the microphone, "Please show what you can do." So the boy clenched his fists and introduced, "My ability is to turn the hair on the skin into hard steel thorns." Immediately, he closed his eyes and saw countless steel spikes standing on his skin in the next second, looking like a hedgehog from a distance. Looking at the boy's exposed hand, Gino fell into silence. This ability was even stronger than the mutant strength of Jack's team. Hair turns into steel thorns? What can this do? Are you expecting the enemy to hit you? Everyone looked at each other. Natasha cleared her throat and said, "Steve, this young man is a perfect fit for your black-robed pickets." Steve's face froze, and when he was about to say something, he saw Logan and Victor staring at him with murderous eyes, and their meaning was obvious. "We must not let this guy join the black-robed picket team and be embarrassed." Everyone quickly reached a tacit understanding that this mutant's ability could not be said to be useless, only useless. Just when everyone was about to reject this guy, Gino slowly said, "Hedgehog boy, your ability is quite good. I will give you a C-level contract." Several people cast puzzled looks at Gino, who smiled slightly and had no intention of explaining to everyone. "I just expressed an attitude and let everyone know that as long as you have superpowers, you can get a good job in Tianjian Bureau. It's similar to buying bones for 1,000 gold in the East, all you need is an attitude. Although Class C is the trash among the trash, at least it can get a fixed salary of $500 a month, just like raising a mascot. The guy whom Gino called the Hedgehog Boy had a face full of surprise. He couldn't believe his ears. Did he really become a superhero? Although it is the lowest level, C level, it is not bad. After this person left, the next interviewer walked carefully into the venue. Gino's eyes suddenly lit up as he stared at the girl's pure blue skin. Isn't this Mystique? I didn't expect to see her here. At this moment, Mystique Raven timidly looked at everyone, and carefully introduced herself, a native of the motherland, Shockboy. Hello everyone, I am Raven, and my ability is to transform and disguise. Listening to the girl's introduction, Peggy and the others couldn't help but become interested. They leaned slightly to see what this girl was capable of. Raven, right. Gino smiled softly, looked at the little girl in front of him and said, since your ability is to disguise and transform, then you turn into Steve and let me take a look. The girl nodded slightly. Although she was young, she also knew who the real leader of the Tianjian Bureau was. So, Raven slowly closed her eyes. The next second, her height slowly increased, and then, a guy who looked exactly like Steve appeared in front of everyone. Gino's eyes were on transformed Steve's buttocks, and he couldn't help but nod with satisfaction. The transformation is in place and the essence is captured. What is the most important symbol of the captain? Is it a shield? No, it's his American butt. Everyone was also shocked by Raven's ability. Peggy immediately said, we, the Super 7, want this girl. In fact, it's quite pitiful. There are only 2 people in the Super 7. Peggy asked Gino more than once why he couldn't change his name to Super Sentai, but the other party always smiled and said that the name Super 7 was out of feelings. Steve on the side was also a little envious of Mutant Riven's abilities. He hesitated and said, well, you can actually join the Black Robe Picket team. Seeing 2 top teams competing for her, Riven couldn't help but be surprised and happy. The girl subconsciously set her sights on Gino, wanting to seek Gino's opinion. Catching the girl's gaze, Gino smiled and said, it depends on yourself. You can join any team you want. I will give you an A-level contract. Rowen's ability is indeed good. At least she is good at lurking and gathering information. After all, she is much better than the Hedgehog Man before. Raven's big eyes scanned the 2 teams. Finally, she bit her lip and said, I'll join the team of those 2 beautiful sisters. Natasha and Peggy immediately laughed. They glanced at Team Steve next door provocatively, then stood up and said, welcome to the Super 7. Raven sat down behind Peggy and the 2, and Gino knocked on the table, signaling to his subordinates to invite Raven's parents over to discuss the contract. The girl's parents are an ordinary rural couple. They had flattering smiles on their faces when they saw everyone. Gino glanced at Natasha, and the girl took the lead and said, your daughter has been confirmed to be recruited by our Super 7, and she will sign to become a superhero. As guardian, we need you to transfer custody. The 2 were not surprised when they heard this. They just smiled and then asked, how much compensation can we get? Yes, these 2 didn't care about their daughter at all in the first place, they just wanted to know how much they could get in return. A flash of disgust flashed in Natasha's eyes, but she still said patiently, we will pay you a one-time payment of $100 million as a transfer agreement. Although this money may seem like a lot, the benefits brought by a superhero will be hundreds of times the price. The interview ended not long after. For Gino, only one Mystique was recruited in this interview, which was barely usable. The other mutants could not be said to be weak, but rather useless. For example, there is a mutant whose ability is to make his palms warm. What can this ability do? Is it possible to crack an egg on his hand and let him make a cooked egg? The interview didn't go well. Peggy was a little disappointed. Gino chuckled, it's normal. Most people with superpowers don't take the initiative to expose themselves. All we have to do is wait and convince them of our sincerity. After the meeting, Natasha and Peggy took Raven to get a new uniform and let her learn her abilities systematically. Steve also left with the Logan brothers and went to the White House to protect the president's safety. Gino was about to go find Howard to drink a few bottles of high-end red wine, but was stopped by Claire. Sir, you need to see this. Claire turned on the TV with a serious face, handed a document to Gino, and said in a low tone, just 3 hours ago, New York was flooded. Gino raised his eyebrows and looked up at the TV. He saw a terrifying tsunami playing on the black and white TV. Huge waves swept through the city. The cars and trees in the city were all wrapped up in the sea water and ran rampant in the steel forest, giving New York bring huge destruction. Soon, the picture began to shake, and the cameraman could be seen running for his life to avoid the life-threatening flood. Gino stared at the TV and said in a strange tone, this tsunami didn't happen naturally, did it? Claire nodded. Since Peggy and Natasha joined the Superhero 7, her former Black Widow was promoted to assistant secretary under unusual circumstances. Claire followed Gino's words, it really didn't happen naturally. Someone was in the waves. Take a picture. Gino opened the file and saw in the black and white photo, a huge wave smashed the glass of a high-rise building, and a blurry figure could be vaguely seen in the wave. The other person was naked from the waist up, wearing only a pair of shorts, but what caught Gino's attention was the trident he was holding. When he saw the trident, Gino even thought that there was DC's Aquaman in this world, the superhuman shield that talked to fish, but Gino quickly thought of another character. They are also the lords of the ocean, with the power in their hands that symbolizes royal power and can command marine creatures, such as the superhuman Namor, who is a weakened version of King Arthur. I remember that in a certain comic, the other party also flooded New York, but the reason at that time was that Namor, an idiot, mistakenly identified Mustache's submarine force as the American force. Namor flooded New York in anger. After a fight with Steve, he realized that it was all a misunderstanding, so he took the initiative to join the Howling Commandos formed by Steve to fight against Mustache. But now that Mustache has been dead for who knows how long, why did Namor flood New York this time? Gino was even speechless. The poor people of New York could not escape the fate of being submerged no matter how history changed. While Gino was thinking, the front desk called and said that President Laudu was here. Old Du. Gino winked at Claire. Soon, Laudu was led to Gino's office, followed by Steve and the other three. Several people met and smiled and said hello. When Laudu saw that Gino seemed to have taken a reassurance, he quickly said, Admiral Gino, New York is flooded. And according to intelligence, it seems that the enemy has a premeditated attack. Laudu was very nervous. After experiencing the kidnapping incident, the president was like a frightened bird. He wanted to run away at the slightest sign of trouble. He took out something like a projector from his hand, and Gino could tell at a glance that this thing was not a land-based technology. Gino took the projector and clicked it gently. He saw a strange man wearing green shorts with a seashell pattern printed on his pants, holding a trident and staring ahead with angry eyes. This is a video. The other party sounded angry at the moment, slammed the trident and said, Land people, your days of polluting the oceans are over. I am Namor, the king of Atlantis and the lord of the seven seas. The wreck of one of your Langley warships wounded my people. This is a declaration of war. Gino looked strange after listening to Namor's words. The Langley warship was the one that General Arthur was riding on at that time. He didn't expect that after being destroyed by him, it could hit the people on the bottom of the sea. But why did it take so long for this guy to take revenge? Gino couldn't figure it out, so he could only attribute it to Namor looking for something wrong. After all, how intelligent could a guy who could recognize New York as Berlin be? At this moment, in the huge room, Laudu turned pale with fright, as if he had seen a ghost. He said with a trembling tone, See, people under the sea really exist. Facing an unknown country, Laudu only felt that his hair was turning gray, and all the troubles had caught up with him. Gino looked at the panicked Laudu, smiled and patted Laudu on the shoulder and said, Your Excellency, this is indeed a premeditated attack, but don't worry. Gino smiled confidently, showing his white teeth and said, I have everything. Although Gino has no interest in saving the world, Namor is like a troublemaker. Not only does he like to harass heroines and control wives, but he also wants to cause trouble and destroy the world every now and then. However, Gino has always regarded the United States as his own. Namor dared to flood New York today and attack Washington tomorrow. So, he planned to catch Namor and torture him severely, knocking some good things out of the poor guy. After all, as the king of the people under the sea, Namor will never be short of good things. When Laudu heard Gino's assurance, he panicked and said, Is it possible? They are an undersea civilization. We don't know if they have the same destructive weapons as us. Laudu's worry is not unreasonable. After all, no one can guarantee that the Atlanteans have any black technology. Looking at the panicked Laudu, Gino sighed and said, Your Excellency, the people under the sea are certainly very strong. But my Heavenly Sword Bureau is not weak either. Gino clasped his hands behind his back and said, Long ago, I arranged for the scientists under my command to continuously develop advanced and transcending weapons. If he doesn't show his hand to this fool, he will only hold him back. Now, come with me. Gino stood up and walked towards the elevator. Laudu was stunned for a moment, and then followed Gino like a boy carrying a bag. Facing the unknown people under the sea, only Gino's Skyward Sword Bureau can give the poor president a negligible sense of security. Gino took Laudu into the elevator, then pressed the button for the negative floor, entered the password, and the elevator slowly rotated. Gino said with his hands behind his back, What you see next will shock and refresh the world you know. I hope you can be prepared. Gino finished his words. The elevator opened slowly. End of this chapter, when Laudu followed Gino into the underground base. What broke into Laudu's sight were countless experimental rooms. The first room was filled with countless azure weapons, which exuded a bright blue luster. At the same time, several agents were flying crookedly in the air wearing jetpacks made of the cosmic Rubik's Cube. All these terrifying black technology weapons made Laudu tremble with fear. The thought couldn't help but come to his mind. If Gino wanted to rule and unify the United States, who could stop him? The more he thought about it, the more he became afraid, and Laudu's attitude towards Gino became more respectful. Gino looked at all this with a calm expression. Since acquiring the Cosmic Cube, Gino has never stopped letting Dr. Zora develop the Cosmic Cube. Looking at it now, the results are good. An army can be assembled just from the energy weapons made from the Cosmic Cube. At this moment, Laudu was like a country bumpkin who had never seen the world, looking at the scene around him. The huge sentry robots in the corner also attracted Laudu's attention. He remembered that that thing had appeared in the White House. At that time, Gino fought with these robots and destroyed those machines with just a few moves. And this is our Tianjian Bureau's biggest killer. Gino pointed to the distance. A giant vibranium cannon covering an area of 1 kilometer and built by top scientists such as Zola and Howard was quietly lined up in the underground base. It looked like a Star Destroyer cannon in an interstellar battlefield. Laudu opened his mouth and said in surprise, "What kind of energy is used to drive such a huge weapon?" "It's very simple, the cosmic cube." Gino patted the barrel and said, "It can adjust the energy output. The maximum power can destroy the moon above our heads. The cosmic cube is one of the 6 Marvel space gems, and it contains enough energy to destroy a planet." Laudu clenched his fists, and the little old man's face turned red with excitement. At this moment, he was completely relieved and said slowly, "With this, you don't have to worry about the people under the sea." Gino smiled and patted Laudu on the shoulder and said, "So relax, Mr. President, we humans are not weak." Listening to Gino's words, Laudu suddenly felt confident. With this cannon, the undersea people are no longer a threat. He slowly straightened his back, even planning to test the strength of the underwater man. Gino smiled indifferently. Laudu still had a shallow vision. He didn't understand that the purpose of building this giant cannon was not to fight against the threats of people under the sea, but the threats in the universe were the real threats. Are Atlanteans strong? In fact, this is not the case. In addition to being able to live underwater, when they leave the sea, these people are like fish out of water, with their combat strength cut in half. In Gino's mind, the Atlanteans were no threat at all. Nearby is Asgard, a group of warlike Vikings. And in the distance there were Kree, Skrulls, and even Shi'ar. Going even further, there may still be the legendary Star Swallower. These forces are actually potential threats. Gino considers himself not a good person, but he always believes that the Earth is his own, not that of aliens. Any alien who dares to touch this planet will only have one fate, and that is death. Just when Laudu was holding Gino's thigh and thought he was safe, far away somewhere deep in the ocean, in a city located in an undersea basin, a group of blue-skinned humanoid creatures shuttled through the city. It was orderly and harmonious, and it could be seen that everyone had a peaceful smile on their face. They are different from the people on land who have self-destructive tendencies. Most people under the sea are not keen on power struggles. As long as they have something to eat, these people can live a stable life. In the top tower at the center of the city, Namor sat on the top of the tower overlooking his people. He sank into a large throne. Next to the throne was a symbol of Atlantis royal power, Poseidon's trident. He seemed to be waiting for something. Soon, a panicked voice came from behind Namor. "King, I heard that you attacked the landman's city. Why do this? You didn't consult with us at all." Namor stared at the glass window in the distance, which reflected several blue-skinned men in luxurious robes behind him, which was in sharp contrast to his own brown-black skin. This group of people are the Council of Elders of Atlantis. As an ancient country, Atlantis still implements a king council system, and the council is headed by the most prestigious and wealthy old man in Atlantis. Generally speaking, the king and council of Atlantis usually reached an agreement on major decisions. The relationship between this parliament and King Namor is very bad. The reason is simple. Namor is not a pure Atlantean. It can be seen from his brown-black skin and a pair of pointed ears that Namor is a hybrid. He was born to his mother and a human crew member. His story seems to be borrowed from the comic book Next Door, Arthur. But unlike Arthur, Namor grew up in Atlantis and received the education of Atlantis. He hates land people. Since his birth, the senior officials have been very dissatisfied with his identity, and have always felt that the half-human blood in his body has tarnished the pure blood of the Atlantis royal family. And when his mother died and he ascended the throne, the parliament would still protest and reject his various decisions. For this young and mixed-race king, the respect of the elders of the council was only superficial. They did not recognize Namor at all, and this was the reason why Namor flooded New York. He needs to prove himself urgently. "King, your actions of flooding the land will undoubtedly expose our great Atlantis to the eyes of the land people." One of the blue-skinned men gently stroked his beard and said, "I remember that the land people had a powerful superhero named Gino Wilson. It is foolish to provoke such a powerful enemy for us." A group of old men kept preaching to Namor. Listening to the endless complaints of a group of old men, Namor finally couldn't help but roared, "Shut up." The room gradually became calm. Namor stood up, coldly picked up the trident next to the throne, and stared coldly at the people behind him. He sneered and said, "I am the king. And the destruction of the oceans by land dwellers continues to harm our homeland. Also, the superhero you are talking about is just a joke." Namor cockily raised his head and said, "If he dares to appear in front of me, I will end his life with the trident." In Namor's view, the so-called superheroes are just tricks made up by land people to comfort themselves. All this time, Atlantis has been looking down on the people on land. Can a group of monkeys give birth to a superhuman? This is simply impossible. Namor glanced at the many elders, pointed his trident at them and said, "I will kill him now to prove it to you." He wants these old guys to know how great he is. On the other side of the Skyward Sword Bureau, after Gino asked his secretary to see off Laudu, he summoned members of the black-robed picket team and the Super 7 for a meeting. Raven did not participate because she was too young. The others followed Gino and formed a circle around the conference table. Gino was sitting in the main seat, leaning on a comfortable chair and staring at the ceiling with his head raised. Assistant Claire distributed the documents in her hands to everyone. Except for Gino, everyone lowered their heads and flipped through the pages to browse the information. The words above seemed to be alive, and every word contained blood. Steve was the first to express his stance, and his heart was filled with anger. He looked at Gino and said seriously, "We must stop that Ocean King. The turbulent seawater took away tens of thousands of lives in New York City, and caused countless property losses, and all of this was actually done by the Undersea King." Gino laughed in his heart, glanced at Steve, and couldn't help but think of a joke. That is the common concept of the famous superhero: aliens are not human. Many superheroes have a no-kill principle, but these principles usually fail when facing aliens or undersea people, because in their view, aliens are not human beings, so they can kill them as much as they want. What's your opinion? Gino turned to ask the other people. Peggy thought for a moment and said, "But we can't find any trace of Namor. This is an obvious question. Namor is a man from the bottom of the sea. The other party lives in the sea, and the ocean is much larger than the land. Finding traces of Namor is like looking for a needle in a haystack." The two Logan brothers also couldn't come up with very good opinions. The meeting was somewhat silent for a while. At this moment, Natasha said, "How about we go to New York and have a look? Maybe we can find some traces." She said jokingly, "There is a criminal psychology in psychology. Some narcissistic and paranoid criminals like to return to the crime scene after committing a crime to watch other people's reactions to satisfy their morbid desires." As expected of someone from the Red House, Natasha's words sounded convincing. "In that case, everyone, please come with me. By the way, remember to contact our newspaper company in New York and ask them to prepare for the interview." Gino thought that this was another opportunity to gain fame. Steve was a little confused, but how can so many of us get there? This is simple. Gino tugged on his tie, and then the cloak turned into a huge red flying carpet in Steve's shocked eyes. Is this magic? Steve looked at the scene in front of him in disbelief. He felt that the world had become too magical. "Calm down, my friend, just think of it as a piece of technology." Gino shrugged with a meaningless expression and motioned for everyone to step onto the cloak. Then, Gino snapped his fingers and said the location: Cloak, New York. The magic floating cloak weakly shook its corners, and with a whoosh sound, it flew out of the window with everyone. After the cloak left, Gino jumped out of the window with a slight leap, blasting a sonic boom in the air and flying towards New York. Gino quickly caught up with the cloak and saw everyone on the cloak. "Are you okay?" Gino asked everyone with his hands clenched in a flying posture, tilting his head. The whistling air blew past everyone's ears, and because the speed was too fast, everyone couldn't hear what Gino said, but it can be seen from the pale faces of everyone that this flight experience is by no means a wonderful experience. Fortunately, several of them had been transformed by the Hope Serum, and their physical fitness was different from that of ordinary people, so they avoided vomiting on their cloaks. As the group approached New York, they looked down at the area from a high altitude. The original high-rise buildings have long since become dilapidated, and the road is covered with seawater that has not reached people's knees. Many cars are soaked in seawater, as if they have been scrapped. Gino led a group of people to land on the rooftop. The cloak turned into a tie and hung back around Gino's neck. "Come on, let's go down and take a look." Gino led everyone downstairs. Because the seawater flooded New York, employees working in these big companies in New York can legitimately hide at home and fish, but only if they survive the sea disaster and their bosses are not killed by the sea disaster. Everyone followed Gino to the New York Daily Bugle. This newspaper had long been acquired by Gino, and at the moment the manager was standing in the lobby with a group of employees to welcome him. Next comes the familiar part of building momentum, which is to have Gino's Super Sentai interviewed to express their dissatisfaction with the evil underwater people. But Gino is not interested in this kind of thing. He doesn't need reputation, because he is reputation. At this moment, Gino was sitting in the top office overlooking New York. It had to be said that the flooded New York had a unique scenery. Through the concrete walls of the apartment, one could see all kinds of living things, including quarreling couples and hanging company bosses. It can only be said that those who are really ruthless have to look at Namor. The floods in New York did not drown many people, but countless people went bankrupt after the floods. For example, their wives ran away and their jobs disappeared. All Gino could do was to observe silence for these people for half a second. Just as Gino was thinking, there were slight footsteps behind him. Gino said without looking back, "Why don't you go for an interview?" Natasha put her arm around Gino's neck from behind, gently kneaded Gino's cheeks with her little hands and said, "The interview has no meaning at all. It's just about reading some high-sounding lines to the script." Natasha then said with some surprise, "But Steve is quite interesting." Guang Weijing's words come true. Gino turned around and held his female companion in his arms. While rubbing the grapes, he chuckled and said, "That's just the kind of character he has." Natasha pushed Gino's mischievous hand away, turned to look at New York and said, "I want to visit the nearby orphanage." Gino was a little confused, but Natasha noticed Gino's gaze and couldn't help but a flash of loneliness flashed in her eyes and said, "New York is suffering from this situation. I want to do something for the children here. I remember that when I was a child, I lived a life of no fixed abode, and later I was sent to a red house for education." Gino understood Natasha's words. Because he had been caught in the rain, he wanted to hold an umbrella for others. This kindness was precious. But what does this have to do with the people of his motherland? "Okay, Gino, please, come with me." Natasha put her arm around Gino's neck again, took the initiative to put her big hands on the buns and said, "Those children will definitely be happy when they see the people from the motherland coming. It will be very happy. Gino had a strange expression. When he thought of the orphanage, he thought of those children with runny noses. To be honest, he didn't want to go. Natasha saw Gino's reluctance, so the girl rolled her eyes, then opened her teeth lightly, and whispered softly in Gino's ear, "If you are willing to come with me, then I can wear that suit tonight." Hearing Natasha's words, Gino suddenly seemed like a different person. He straightened his chest and said righteously, "As a righteous citizen of the motherland, it is right to visit the poor orphans. After all, strictly speaking, I am an orphan, so I am not just playing in uniform." End of this chapter. Gino and Natasha walked out of the building and walked towards Notre Dame Cathedral in the suburbs of New York. Walking through the streets with stagnant water up to your knees and smelling the damp and salty smell of the sea breeze in the air is quite interesting. The two quickly walked to the entrance of the orphanage. Just as he was about to go in, he heard a muffled thunder explosion in the distance. Gino cast his gaze into the distance, and the building in front of him gradually became illusory and transparent. Gino controlled his sight to zoom in, and quickly locked his gaze on the port. "I saw dark clouds over New York Harbor, countless thunder and lightning roaring with thunder, and accompanied by strong winds, a figure holding a trident jumped out on a dolphin. The man stepped off the dolphin, and he slowly walked on the sea walking towards the pier." Gino looked at the man, who was shirtless and only wearing a pair of green shorts. He was holding a golden trident in his hand. He was looking around as if he was looking for something. There was an arrogant look on his face, as if he didn't care about anything in the world. What happened? Natasha also noticed the troops. She frowned and looked in the direction of the thunder, but it was blocked by tall buildings and the woman could only see the buildings. Gino had a strange expression. He crossed his arms and snorted with a sneer, "Just a joke, we seem to have met the culprit who attacked New York." "What?" Natasha looked surprised, but quickly reacted, looking at Gino's cheek, and asked quickly, "What should we do now?" A team must have a backbone, and everyone in Tianjian Bureau naturally thinks that the backbone is Gino, so Gino will make the decision on any major matter. Of course, this is also the result of Gino's deliberate training. Gino thought for a moment, shook his head, then snapped his fingers, raised his brows and said, "I have an idea." Natasha asked, "What's your idea?" "Follow me." Gino hugged Natasha's slim waist and raised his head gently. The next second, the two of them jumped into the sky, splashing water under their feet and spreading with the waves. Neymar held the trident, held his head high, and looked proudly at the dock that was submerged in the sea. As a king, it is natural to appear in style. I remember when I came here, there would be some vulgar workers loading and unloading goods here. From time to time, some garbage will be thrown into the sea, polluting the marine environment, and now, these people have been killed by themselves. Neymar was extremely satisfied. He felt that his decision to fled New York was absolutely correct. Sniffing the wet and salty smell in the air, Neymar closed his eyes in enjoyment. Of course, he has not forgotten the main reason why he came here, to look for traces of Gino Wilson. That's right, even though Neymar is the self-proclaimed Lord of the Seven Seas, King of Atlantis, and the strongest king, he doesn't even know where Gino is because he despises human culture, let alone find him. Kill him. However, Neymar had legs and a mouth, and he planned to come and ask a landman himself. After flooding New York but waiting for the enemy's revenge, Neymar has already regarded all land people as weaklings, and he can find out the traces by just threatening anyone. Neymar came back to his senses and raised his head. His eyes noticed a young couple operating in a fishing tackle shop not far from the pier. Although it is strange that people are still open after flooding in New York. But don't expect a high IQ from a guy who can recognize New York as Berlin. Besides, Neptune didn't think anyone could hurt him. He held the trident and walked towards the fishing gear shop in a swaggering manner. The distance between the two parties was getting closer and closer, and Neymar could see clearly the appearance of the young couple. Although the man was very handsome, Neymar felt that he was not as handsome as him. His eyes focused on the woman, and he saw that this woman had a delicate face and beautiful long burgundy hair. The most important thing was that the front and back were curved, making her look very charming. Moreover, these two people looked like a couple, which made Neptune even more excited. He likes to destroy other people's feelings. So Neymar quickened his pace. He couldn't wait to see the scene where the woman abandoned her young boyfriend and fell into his arms when he revealed his identity. Soon, Neymar walked to the fishing tackle shop, and the young couple also noticed him. They looked surprised at this shirtless man. However, Neymar mistook this look as admiration. So, he deliberately controlled the beating of a pair of chest muscles, showed a proud expression on his face, snorted a hot breath from his nose, stared directly at Natasha, and said with a fishy mouth, "Beautiful my son, I am the Lord of the Western Sea, the Lord of the Ocean, Neymar Mackenzie." Although he really wanted to get the woman in front of him, Neymar still had some sense and knew that business was more important. He coughed twice and straightened his back to make himself look taller than Gino. The man snorted coldly. He stared into Natasha's green eyes and said, "Let me ask you, do you know Gino Wilson?" Natasha flipped up her hair and chuckled. "Of course, from the president to the people, who in America doesn't know him. I heard that he is handsome, tall, and powerful, and is the dream lover of countless girls." Gino's expression on the side was strange. Although what Natasha said was true, it still felt strange to praise herself like this in front of a mentally retarded person. Gino suppressed a smile and echoed, "That's right, and I heard that he is particularly persistent, and the women who date him cannot forget his terrifying and exuberant energy. Listening to the two words of praise for Gino, Neymar's originally arrogant expression suddenly turned cold. Handsome, and also very durable? Each of these things was like a sharp thorn piercing Neymar's chest, and the man's face became ugly. However, as the king of the sea, Neymar still sneered to express his disdain for Gino. His face was full of arrogance and he said, I heard that he is known as the god on earth. But in my eyes, that guy is a coward. Natasha glanced at Gino, then put her chin on her hands and asked in a posture of admiration, why do you think he is a coward? This shirtless mysterious man. The woman's words made Neymar puff up his chest. He was very satisfied with his figure. The man raised his head and said, it's very simple. I destroyed his home, but this guy didn't say anything. This kind of behavior is like cowering in fear. As he spoke, Neymar raised the trident in his hand and slammed it on the ground, making a dull sound. The arrogant words made Gino frown. He did not agree with Neymar's words. After all, when New York was flooded and Americans died, what did it have to do with me? He didn't care about these people's lives at all. The reason for finding Neymar is also for fame and practical benefits. Gino's plan is simple, capture Neymar, and then follow the example of his predecessors in this moment. Neymar didn't know that the real master was in front of him, and he couldn't wait to reveal his identity to make the woman surrender. So, the god of the world is a joke, and I, Neymar Mackenzie, am the god of the world. Gino looked at Neymar with a calm expression. This guy is really arrogant. Even he doesn't dare to claim to be invincible in this world. After all, the Marvel universe is very deep and there are countless strong people hiding in the dark. You should be honored, woman. Neymar sneered and waved the trident in his hand to stir up a gust of salty sea breeze. He glanced at the young boy and said, you deserve a better man. As he spoke, this guy stroked his long, moist, golden hair coquettishly. And through the fishing gear window, Natasha inside suppressed a smile, bit her red lips with her teeth, and stared at Neymar's ugly hair like a dirty mop. As an agent from the Red Room, Natasha hides her emotions very well. She showed a weak and helpless mood, stared at Neymar timidly and said, but, I love my boyfriend very much. Please don't let me leave him. Listening to the woman's rich voice with a hint of Russian English, Neymar shivered. He closed his eyes in enjoyment and shook his head. This woman was determined. Neymar opened his eyes again and sneered and said, you love your boyfriend very much? This is not easy to handle. Just kill your boyfriend. After saying that, Neymar's eyes flashed with murderous intent. He flipped his elbow and the trident in his hand pierced out like lightning, piercing Gino's eyes. Neymar should be the only one to see such a beautiful woman. It would be best for her ex-boyfriend to be dead. This move was undoubtedly aimed at blinding Gino's eyes. Seeing the trident and Gino's eyes getting closer and closer, Neymar raised a cruel smile on his lips. He seemed to be able to foresee the smell of blood in the air after the opponent's eyes were poked out. Next second, snapped. To Neymar's surprise, whether it was a coincidence or an accident, the young man in front of him held the trident with only one hand. The weapon stopped 10 centimeters away from the young man's cheek, and then could no longer move a millimeter. Neymar looked confused. He was quite confident in his own strength and could easily smash the landman's tank, but now he was easily stopped by a landman. This is impossible. Neymar looked ferocious. He was just a mainlander, he should die honestly, and then his girlfriend would be his. Thinking this, Neymar once again increased the strength on his hands. However, no matter how hard he pushed the trident, he could not make the sharp weapon in his hand move at all. Neymar subconsciously looked at the young man, and saw that the originally frightened young man had changed into a calm expression at some point, and his eyes were looking at Neymar ruthlessly, which made the man shudder. At this moment, no matter how stupid Neymar is, he still understands the weirdness of the person in front of him. Neymar raised his face and stared at Gino, with a gloomy face and said in a hoarse tone, who are you? Listening to Neymar's words, Gino took his time, holding the Poseidon trident. His eyes just fell on Neymar's weapon, and said to himself, this is a good thing, you can take it back to the bureau for study. Seeing that he was being ignored, an angry Neymar shouted angrily, answer me, mortal. Neymar's voice was loud, and along with his roar, Gino felt a fishy and rotten smell coming towards his face, giving him the taste of rotten eggs. The young man held his breath, then raised his other left hand and waved it gently. Call. The huge force set off a gust of wind and swept away the unpleasant gas. Gino breathed a sigh of relief. He held Neymar's weapon and picked his ears. He didn't even look at Neymar. Instead, he looked at Natasha and said, Natasha, tell him, who am I? Natasha's expression also became cold at this moment. The woman's green eyes stared at Neymar indifferently, as if she was looking at a pile of indescribable garbage. She put her arms around Gino's shoulders, and then looked at Neymar with splitting eyes. Gave Gino a big kiss. Licking the saliva from her lips provocatively, Natasha chuckled and said, the person standing in front of you is the coward, and weak god on earth that you call, Gino Wilson. But, Natasha paused, rolled her eyes at Neymar, knocked the trident that was stuck in the air with her little hand, and said, you don't seem to be a match for Admiral Gino. Listening to the two people's cooperative conversation, Neymar felt his head was buzzing at this moment. His mood was at first confused, then turned into extreme shame and annoyance, and then anger. It turned out that from the moment he walked to this fishing gear shop, these two guys watched him perform as if they were watching a joke. The ultimate humiliation was unbearable for Neymar. Ah, he yelled, and then punched Natasha with his other fist. Damn it, Baichi, die. The whistling fist brought strong wind and swung down towards Natasha's cheek. Snapped. Before the fist hit Natasha, an iron hand clasped Neymar's wrist firmly. Before Neptune could react, Kaiju's arm suddenly exerted force, and Neymar's wrist was twisted like a twist, and his flesh and blood burst open. The white bones were exposed, and blood dripped from the broken wrist. Ah, my hand. Neymar covered his wrist in pain. He was about to say something when a fist suddenly hit the man's abdomen. The next second, a huge explosion exploded. Boom. Just for a moment, Neptune felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. The terrifying force seemed to have smashed his internal organs. His whole body was also punched away, and he flew backwards in an instant, like a cannonball flying to the distant New York City. It smashed into the solid concrete wall of a high-rise building, and then fell onto the concrete road, plowing out a gully of hundreds of meters. Gino injected Neymar, who flew out upside down. At this moment, Neptune fell into a big pit with his butt sticking out like a dead dog. Gino hugged his female companion and flew to the pit in the blink of an eye. Snapped. Gino grabbed Neymar's ankles, as if dragging a dead dog out of a deep pit. At this moment, Neymar's whole body was completely miserable and inhuman. His wrist was broken, exposing the white bones piercing the skin, and his body was covered with small scars. Neymar opened his eyes, but he could only keep his eyes open. Every bone in his body was shattered by the terrifying force, and large amounts of blood continued to pour out of his mouth and nose. There was a faint fishy smell in the air at the same time, as if this guy was punched by Gino and became incontinent. Lord of the Seven Seas. Gino stepped on Neymar's purple face with his shoe, leaned down and stared at Neymar. That's it. Neymar struggled to speak, suppressing the taste of blood in his mouth and said, "Please, help me." At this moment, the Lord of the Seven Seas has long lost the pride of the past. He does not want to die. He is the king and there is still a lot of life that he has not enjoyed. Don't worry, I won't let you die. Gino smiled and relaxed his feet and said, "You are an important bargaining chip for me to negotiate with Atlantis. If you die, who will I ask for the ransom?" End of this chapter, but before that, let's settle an account first. Gino knelt down and clasped Neymar's other hand with a smile. "Call me a waste, right?" After saying that, Gino pinched Neymar's thumb and gently broke it. Crack. There was a crisp sound of bone cracking, and Neymar, who fell in the dirt, opened his mouth to cry again. "Shut up. It's so noisy." Gino raised his hand and slapped Neymar twice on the face. His head shook from side to side like a rattle, and his greasy face became swollen at a speed visible to the naked eye. The extreme humiliation and severe pain made the Lord of the Seven Seas just want to die immediately. But the hatred for Gino in his heart still made him choose to give in. He just stared at Gino with a pair of tawny eyes to vent the anger in his heart. "You are noisy like a savage monkey, too noisy." Gino still kept smiling and pinched off Neymar's second finger again. Well, Neymar's temples were exposed with veins and his eyes were rounded, but the fear of Gino still made him grit his teeth tightly, not daring to make a sound even if his teeth were bleeding. "The water flooded New York and destroyed my wealth in New York." Gino smiled and broke off Neymar's third finger. Neymar couldn't bear the pain that was so painful that he couldn't bear it any longer. Tears fell down his face, and the poor man opened his mouth and howled loudly. This arrogant man can no longer endure such torture. As a king, he has always been pampered since he was a child. How could he have experienced such torture? "Please, people of the motherland. Spare me, I was wrong." At this moment, he was filled with regret. Why should he be so smart as to provoke the damned people of the motherland? Looking at Gino through his heavy eyelids, Neymar could only feel his whole body shaking uncontrollably. The landman in front of him was simply a demon. "Don't, the accounts between us haven't been settled yet." Gino interrupted Neymar's plea with a smile. He was not a good person and would not forgive others just because they apologized. Gino stood up and turned Neymar over with his feet so that he could face the sky. "Harassing my girlfriend and trying to be a relationship wrecker, right?" Looking at Neymar's severed finger, Gino thought for a while, then stared at Neymar's chest with a calm expression and said, "But seeing that you are in so much pain, let's change the game." As he spoke, Gino's eyes glowed red and he shot a scorching heat vision at Neymar's chest. The temperature-controlling heat vision pierced his skin, leaving scorched black scars. Ignoring Neymar's screams, Gino turned his head. A large English letter loser was left on Neymar's chest. Looking at the burnt red mark on the man's burnt chest hair, Natasha couldn't help but laugh out loud. Little Green Tea hugged Gino's neck like an admirer and praised, "Wow, this is so creative. I believe it. Every day when I wake up, look in the mirror and see my chest, I can't help but think of you." "No, that's not enough. We have to physically isolate him from his evil thoughts." Gino's eyes fell under Neymar, glanced at Natasha and said, "If I were you, I would leave right now." Natasha raised her eyebrows, and the veteran driver immediately guessed what Gino was thinking, chuckled, and turned towards the building in the distance. Gino turned his head and focused his gaze on Neymar, his eyes glowing red again. Buzz. Because of Neymar, Natasha's plan to go to the orphanage also fell through. When Gino and Natasha pushed the unconscious Neymar back to the Daily Bugle building on a cart, Steve and others looked at Neymar lying on the cart with shocked expressions. Logan looked at Neymar, who looked like a pig's head, in surprise and said, "Boss, is this the Lord of the Seven Seas? The murderer who flooded New York?" No wonder Logan was surprised. Neymar looked so miserable. His fingers were broken off, the letters loser were burned black on his chest, and his green shorts were wet with blood. The unconscious man's brows tightened, as if he was sad that he had lost something. Anyone who looked at it would think it was just a homeless man who had been beaten badly. Natasha interrupted Logan, rolled her eyes and said, "Yes, he is Namor. Captain, and I met this idiot on the beach." And when Namor made rude remarks, Natasha had actually predicted Namor's ending. The female companion was very jealous of Gino, and she would lose her skin even if he didn't die. There is actually no difference between being alive and dead now. After all, Namor has lost the characteristics that men are proud of, and his future life will only be bleak. Gino sat back on the chair, glanced at Steve, and signaled him to wake Namor up. Electroshock boy Steve was not polite to the murderer who flooded New York. The man stepped forward and slapped Namor awake with 2 slaps. The first thing Namor felt when he woke up was pain, extreme pain. There was also a faint smell of blood in the air, but as a king, Namor gritted his teeth and regained his composure to observe his surroundings. He found himself lying on the cold floor, surrounded by some land people, including a short man with a beard and the red-haired woman he had seen before, until his eyes fell on the black-haired young man sitting in the main seat, whose eyes stared at Namor indifferently. Painful memories came to his mind, and Namor let out a woodchuck scream, "Evil, devil." Gino smiled and put a finger in front of his lips. Namor suddenly seemed to be strangled by invisible giant hands, staring at Gino in horror, not daring to make a sound. The air gradually became quiet, and only the sound of everyone's breathing echoed in the conference room. Everyone was looking at Gino, waiting for him to speak. Gino slowly straightened his back and tapped the table with his index finger, making a dull dong-dong sound. The invisible pressure came and Namor couldn't help but tremble. Gino lazily held up his chin and said, "Nemo Mackenzie, right." At this moment, the Lord of the Seven Seas did not have the domineering power of the past at all, and nodded hurriedly. "Very good." Gino grinned and said, "Nice to meet you, Namor. Now tell me, how to contact your tribe to let you go back." Namor was a little surprised and said in disbelief, You want to let me go back?" Gino waved his hand and said, "Don't get me wrong, idiot, I mean to let them redeem you." Gino leaned forward and looked down at Namor. "You are the king of Atlantis, the Lord of the Seven Seas. You must be worth a lot of good things, right?" As the first race created by the Celestials when they came to Earth, the Atlanteans had a lot of good things in their hands. But now that their king was in their own hands, they wanted to extort a fortune and bleed the people at the bottom of the sea. Namor was a little disappointed when he heard Gino's answer, but his desire for freedom still made him answer Gino's question. "There is a communication tool called a magical conch in my pants. If you blow it, you can activate the communication equipment inside." Steve on the side saw this and stepped forward to rifle through Namor's pockets. Soon, Steve pulled out a small, fishy-smelling conch with a strange shape from Namor's blood-stained green pants. "Very good." Gino stood up with a smile. The next step was to find the people under the sea to discuss how much they would need to pay to redeem their king. End of this chapter. Daily Bugle Conference Room. When Steve blew the magical conch on his hand, a trickle of silk flowed out from the mouth of the conch, joining in the air and weaving into a thin water curtain. The water curtain seems to be a huge room, with huge chairs placed from top to bottom, and the scene seems to be covered with a light blue tone. Everyone stared at the water curtain. As the water curtain shook, several stooped blue-skinned humanoids wearing robes walked into the water curtain. They curiously looked at the scene inside the water curtain. When they saw Namor lying on the ground like a dead dog, the blue-skinned people who looked like they were behind the scenes suddenly seemed to be strangled by the neck. Their broad blue noses took a deep breath of sea water, causing large bubbles to splash. The legs cannot stop the hind legs. The two groups looked at each other across the water curtain, and the atmosphere was indescribably silent. Finally, the oldest of the blue men stepped forward, adjusted his mood, and said in a trembling voice, "My king, what happened?" He speaks with a standard British Empire Cockney accent, so why do all aliens speak English? Namor was about to say something, but thinking of the tyrant not far away, he still closed his mouth and did not answer the minister's question. Gino slowly stood up and approached the light curtain with a smile on his face. The two sides looked at each other, and in the next second, Gino said in a calm tone, "Everyone, I am glad to meet you. I am Gino Wilson, and I am also the person your king wants to kill." As he spoke, Gino stepped on Namor's face and said in the eyes of the underwater elders, "Now that your king is in my hands, maybe you should offer a suitable price to redeem it. Go back, by the way, don't fool me with pearls or anything like that." To the people at the bottom of the sea, pearls are like stones on the roadside, worthless at all. Hearing Gino's words, a group of elders looked at me and I looked at you, with strange smiles on their faces. The leader of the elders said with a smile, No, Mr. Gino, we will not do this for this king. Pay the ransom and instead thank you for your help." A group of people looked at each other. The leader of the group, the elder, straightened his back, walked back and forth and said, "Help us get rid of this stupid king." For a long time, the elders of the underwater people felt that Namor was a fool with a big heart and no ambition, but they could not change the emperor due to the issue of royal power. But I didn't expect Namor to be so stupid. He went to challenge the god on Earth and was beaten to death, or even kidnapped. God-given opportunity, these elders immediately unified their position without much hesitation. They no longer want this king. On the contrary, they can take this opportunity to support an obedient king to come to power, so that they, the pampered elders, can hide behind the scenes and remotely control the new king to govern the country. On the contrary, we need you land people to pay compensation for killing our former king. The elder of the undersea people said with an arrogant face, otherwise, we will activate the undersea detonator and flood the United States. Gino's face turned cold. He didn't expect these underwater elders to blackmail him in turn. We give you 6 hours to think about it. A group of underwater elders laughed. One of them stepped forward and gently touched the water curtain. The next second, the water curtain broke into a pool of sea water and sprinkled on the ground. The screen was interrupted, and the conference room was still silent. Steve stared at Namor, who was in a sluggish state with a strange expression on his face, his mouth wide open, but he didn't know what to say. So, this guy was abandoned. I have to say that if I were to use one word to describe Namor, people hate dogs is a very good and appropriate word. Natasha's face looked a little ugly. She glanced at Gino and said, those underwater elders are going to start a war on land. What should we do? Victor also watched the excitement and said without too much fuss, tisk, tisk, tisk. I didn't expect that even none of our own people want to see this poor king. This guy seems to have lost his value. Namor, who was lying on the ground, waved his hands in fear and said, no, don't kill me. I have value. I am the king of Atlantis. He was really afraid that Gino would ruthlessly kill him, but he hadn't lived enough yet and didn't want to die. Ignoring the panicked Namor, Gino lifted his shoes and moved them away from Namor's face. He stood in front of the window with his hands behind his back, looking at the sea in the distance, and said in a calm tone, undersea detonator, what is it? Namor endured the severe pain and replied, an instrument that can control the flow of seawater in a region. It is the ultimate killing weapon that we undersea people obtained by studying the trident. Interesting. Gino turned around and walked to Namor again. Poor Namor could only see Gino's shoes in front of him. The next second, Gino slowly squatted down, looked at Namor with a smile and said, I think our Lord of the Seven Seas has a lot of strength now. Use it. At first, he really planned to blackmail the underwater people, but he didn't expect that these underwater people had such a bad relationship with their king. They even abandoned their king and didn't forget to threaten him. This made Gino very angry, and he also planned to change his strategy. No one would let him return empty-handed. Peggy was the first to hear the voice of Gino's words. She held her chin and stared at Namor with bruises on her nose and face. You mean? Gino nodded, looked into Namor's eyes and said, as a righteous sword bureau, how can we sit back and watch the king of Atlantis be driven out of the sea by his people? We must help him regain his throne. As soon as these words came out, not only lying Namor looked confused, but even Victor and the others looked surprised. Everyone looked at each other and saw surprise in each other's eyes. Help Namor regain the throne? When did the boss become so kind? But before anyone asked why, Gino continued to say, in return, our King Neptune will hand over half of Atlantis' wealth to the Skyward Sword Bureau every year. Everyone was silent. Good guy. I thought the boss had changed his personality, but it turned out he was still the same. After hearing this, Namor quickly shook his head. No. He took a deep breath and felt the smell of blood in his mouth. He could never agree to such humiliating conditions. He was an Atlantean. Haha, I'm not negotiating with you, Namor. Gino stood up and kicked Namor over. The angle was right at Namor's wound, causing the man to scream miserably. A prisoner should have his own consciousness. Besides, are you really willing to let the position of the Mackenzie family be usurped by those Presbyterians? Gino walked towards Namor and whispered like a demon whispering, your kingdom and everything you own will be handed over to the elder who calls you a bastard. Your people will not remember you. They will only remember you as a tyrant whose reputation was smeared by those elders. Although Namor's reputation is not qualified, this does not prevent Gino from using these words to sway Namor's mind. No one will endure the downturn after glory, and what he has to do is to set a fire in Namor's heart. End of this chapter. It must be said that Gino's words were like a sharp thorn poking straight into Namor's lungs, making the man look horribly ugly. The scene Gino mentioned subconsciously appeared in his mind. Then, the more you think about it, the more angry you become. Namor even blamed the group of immortal elders for setting him up for provoking Gino and then being violently beaten. If they hadn't come to the bedroom to berate him, he wouldn't have found Gino and was almost beaten to death. Gino spoke again, and said in a faint tone, think about it, Namor, you think of yourself as an Atlantean, but they never think of you as an Atlantean. This sentence was like the straw that broke the camel's back, completely breaking Namor's psychological defenses. If he was indeed a king beloved by his people, then perhaps he would not betray his country in exchange for help from the people on land. But the problem is that the people of Atlantis discriminate against him, and they discriminate against him, a mixed race with brown and black skin. So, why should he sacrifice his life for these bastards and let those damn elders enjoy the benefits? So, at this moment, Namor lowered his head, and his wet golden hair covered both sides of his cheeks. After a moment of silence, Namor clenched his other relatively healthy fist. The man was dumb and did not dare to look directly. Gino said, how are you going to help me? Although his little brother has been broken, as long as he is still the king, he will always let the undersea scientists come up with ways to restore his injuries. After that, he hid behind the scenes and took revenge on the damn Gino Wilson. Seeing that Namor had finally come to his senses, Gino smiled happily, noting that it was not in vain for him to talk to this idiot so much. It's very simple. Gino clasped Namor's shoulders with both hands and pulled Namor up kindly, as if he was not the one who beat Namor violently before. Gino stared at Namor with a half-smile. His malicious voice had already heard Namor's revenge plan, but Gino still acted like a normal person and said his plan with a smile. I will use the power of the United States to arrange a fight for you. A beheading operation targeting the elders of the underwater people. This plan has a high probability of success. After all, Namor is the king of the undersea people. He knows the location of Atlantis and the activity habits of the elders. As long as you grasp the opportunities and rules, you will always succeed. However, my team members cannot breathe under the sea. Gino patted Namor on the shoulder and said, I believe you underwater people must have equipment that can maintain land people breathing under the sea, right? Hearing Gino's words, the man struggled to open his bruised eyelids, revealing a pair of small eyes with cold light. He said in a cold tone, of course, I know a military base of the underwater people nearby. There are many powerful weapons and equipment there. Now Namor has figured it out. He wants revenge and revenge on those damn elders. People who deal with their own people are the most ruthless, and this applies to Namor as well. So, in the next 30 minutes, Namor told everyone in detail the location of Atlantis and the elders who gathered in the council hall for meetings every day. Gino motioned Natasha to record the information Namor told in detail, while summarizing, to put it simply, we only need a submarine and a few devices that can maintain breathing underwater to perform a decapitation operation. Everyone nodded after hearing this. If the problem of underwater breathing can be solved, then the people under the sea will not be afraid at all. Okay, Victor, Logan, take King Namor down to rest. Gino glanced at the two saber-toothed tigers and winked at them. The two brothers grinned, picked up Namor, one on the left and the other on the right, and left the conference room. After the two saber-toothed tigers carried Namor away, Steve was the first to ask, Gino, that Namor guy may hold a grudge against you. If you let him take back power, he will inevitably not retaliate against the land. Steve's words are not unreasonable. Namor is like Schrodinger's cat at this moment. No one knows whether he will retaliate if he becomes king again. Don't worry, Steve, I've thought of everything you can think of. Gino chuckled. He originally planned to help Namor return to the throne, but deep down in his heart, this guy was thinking about how to retaliate, so he had no choice but to give up this plan. What do you mean? Steve's face condensed, and he seemed to understand. In Steve's eyes, Gino has always been a thoughtful person. Steve couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief when he heard that Gino had a plan in his heart. Just wait, the show will start soon. Gino didn't explain much to Steve. He had already obtained detailed information about the people under the sea from Namor. He turned to Peggy and Natasha and ordered, you go contact the Navy and ask them to prepare a submarine. Naturally, the submarine was prepared to attack the nearest submarine camp. The two women nodded, stood up, pushed the door open and left the conference room. After the two girls left, Gino focused his attention on the map on the table again and said to Steve without looking back, go get a camera. Steve was confused, what are you looking for a camera for? At this time, Natasha also opened the door and returned. She looked at Gino and said, Boss, we have made contact with the Nile Naval Base in New York, which is closest to us. Okay, let's go. Gino just motioned for Steve to do so, and then he took Natasha out of the conference room. After meeting Peggy in the lobby on the first floor, Gino used the magic floating cloak and the three of them quickly rushed to the Nile Naval Base, which is the closest to New York. This naval base is located next to the New York harbor and occupies a huge area. Many Navy soldiers are scattered lazily in every corner of the base. Whoosh! An afterimage suddenly hit the naval command room. The afterimage penetrated the ceiling and kicked up large amounts of dust. The commander of this base felt that his eyes were filled with dust. He quickly put down the hand-cranked phone. Before he understood what happened, he saw a stalwart figure leading two women out of the dust. Gino patted the dust on the vibranium armor and looked at the naval captain with a smile. Hello, soldier. Ancestor, a citizen of the motherland. The naval captain named Rambo looked at Gino's sudden appearance in shock, and then turned to look at the phone on the table. He just hung up the phone with Gino's liaison officer, and the next second the other party appeared here, which was too fast. Colonel Rambo looked at Gino with reverence. He finally understood why so many people in the army admired Gino. This godlike power is enough to make people unable to help but worship. Just the sense of security exuded by the other person standing here is extremely reassuring. Colonel, don't say compliments. Gino walked towards the middle-aged man with a smile, patted his shoulder and said, where is my submarine? The colonel took a deep breath to calm down, nodded quickly and said, please follow me. The colonel led Gino and the others out of the conference room. At this moment, many curious soldiers also saw Gino and his group. It's a native of the motherland. This group of top soldiers showed enthusiasm, and many of them even wanted to go up and ask for an autograph. Unfortunately, the majestic colonel stood with the people of the motherland, and they did not dare to act rashly. The colonel led Gino to a dock port, and parked not far from the port was a huge, pitch-black submarine. End of this chapter. In the harbor near the New York Naval Base, a huge and streamlined jet-black submarine slowly floated on the endless sea. The flag representing the United States was hung on the submarine's control tower. From time to time, waves would rise on the sea surface and hit the iron sheet, making a swish sound. It's really a big guy. Gino stared at the submarine with interest. He handed the grid paper with the coordinates to the colonel and said, I need your soldiers to drive it to this coordinate. Is there any problem? The colonel quickly stood at attention and saluted, indicating that he would definitely complete the mission. He quickly summoned the divers who were resting nearby. When these people saw Gino, the so-called celebrity halo made them even more excited and scared. But everyone still stepped into the submarine under the command of the colonel. Soon, the internal engine of this big guy roared and the boat started to move. Gino and the two women jumped into the submarine from the entrance above the submarine. At his signal, the submarine quickly started and dived towards the deep sea. Gino stood in the rest area of the submarine. He looked at the iron sheet in front of him. Through the iron sheet, he could clearly see the ocean scenery outside. There are colorful coral reefs and seabed basins of different shapes. From time to time, you can see some schools of fish swimming by, looking at the huge black iron fish with curious fish eyes. Gino used his clairvoyance ability to observe the scene outside while thinking about his next plan. Long before, when he proposed to help Namor regain the throne, he heard the malice in Namor's heart. The other party planned to take revenge on him when he returned. And this further strengthened Gino's determination to kill Namor. Namor is a typical pig teammate. He will cheat anyone who is his teammate. Therefore, after extracting all the information from Namor's mind, killing Namor was already a definite plan. The consequences for offending Gino are simple, that is, death. He does not need a lunatic as a tool, the uncertainty is too high. The next plan is also very simple. Capture an undersea man, use some means to make this guy guarantee his absolute loyalty to you, then support the other person to sit on the throne, and then use the other person's leverage to long-term cooperation. Gino, we're here. Colonel Rambo asked if we want to dive. Peggy came to Gino and patted Gino's shoulder gently. Gino said softly, let the submarine dive. The huge submarine broke through the waves and slowly surfaced. Gino flew out of the cabin and looked calmly at the sea bottom below. In his field of vision, several shell-shaped golden houses were located in an undersea basin several hundred meters below, and several undersea people were wandering around and patrolling the vicinity. Natasha and Peggy looked up at Gino floating in the air and said worriedly, Gino, be careful. Although I already know that the man in front of me has created countless miracles, as a female companion, I still can't help but worry. After all, there are already a lot of people behind Gino relying on him. Be careful. Gino smiled, looked at Peggy, and said familiar words for the second time, don't be careful, because I will only succeed. After saying this, Gino took a deep breath and suddenly jumped into the sea, although he could not breathe underwater. However, the transformation brought about by the Man of Steel allows Gino to go deep into the sea for several hours with just one breath. So Gino didn't worry at all about diving into the sea and drowning. He took a deep breath, the cold and biting sea water slapped his skin, and then he plunged into the sea like a fish or bird. The godlike steel body broke through the sea currents. Gino kicked his legs and moved 100 meters closer to the underwater base. As the distance got closer, Gino also saw many blue-skinned undersea people. The sound of the ocean current above his head filled his ears. The blue-skinned undersea people raised their heads one after another. They saw a landman wearing a red cloak. With no expression on his face, he swam this way at an extremely fast speed. These people raised the purple spears in their hands as soon as they saw Gino. After a short period of charging, these spears emit purple light from their tips. The blazing light cut through the water waves and hit the vibranium armor. Gino focused on a few people, then raised his fist and slammed it in the direction of the people on the bottom of the sea. The huge force squeezed the waves, and Gino's fist brought up a burst of seawater, which turned into waves and hit the people on the seabed. The turbulent water waves swatted several people on the seabed like flies on the seabed. They plunged headfirst into the seabed like beach volleyballs. The huge force stirred up dust and sand on the seabed, and the dust and sand were mixed with the light blue blood of the people on the seabed, making it look very strange. Gino picked up the spear floating in the sea without wasting time on a few dead people. He continued to swim towards the shell-shaped seabed base. However, as Gino approached, the undersea people resting in the base also noticed something unusual. 3 undersea men wearing golden armor rushed toward Gino with blue spears, shouting some strange words in their mouths. You guys better shut up. Gino casually threw the vibranium javelin in his hand. In an instant, the purple spear turned into an afterimage and pierced the 2 men's abdomens, nailing the 2 soldiers to the seabed like skewers of candied haws. Light blue blood flowed from their abdomens, which looked extremely weird. Gino turned his attention to another blue-skinned man. After the other man saw the tragic death of his 2 companions, even the hands holding the spear couldn't stop trembling. Why is this damn landman so strong? But before he could react, Gino stepped on the seabed and jumped lightly. He immediately turned into an afterimage and appeared in front of the blue-skinned man, grabbing him by the throat. Gino stared at the other person with cold eyes. Seeing the extreme fear in the eyes of the underwater man and the trembling body, Gino nodded with satisfaction and thought to himself, if you are timid and afraid of death, he is a good candidate. So, Gino raised his fist and punched the undersea man in the abdomen. The huge impact made the blue-skinned man roll his eyes and fainted. Gino carried the blue-skinned man and sneaked into the shell-shaped house. He smashed the roof made of an unknown material with one punch and sneaked into the house. He soon found some advanced undersea technology inside, including an undersea respirator similar to a gas mask. Picking up a box of respirators, Gino carried the unconscious underwater man and swam toward the submarine on the surface. Boom! The steel body broke through the sea with a deafening sound and caused a large splash of water. Gino slowly fell down, his feet stepping on the cold submarine body. The two waiting women immediately stepped forward to help Gino carry away the box. Gino threw the underwater man in his hand into the submarine, which immediately attracted many soldiers to watch. This is the undersea man. The crowd looked at the unconscious underwater man. He had typical fish features on both sides of his face, with a pair of gills that were opening and closing as if he was breathing air. People under the sea actually exist. Oh my god, does that mean there are real mermaids? Gino jumped into the submarine, smiled and pushed away the onlookers and said, "Okay boys, we have got the things. Let's ask Colonel Rambo to start the submarine's return journey." End of the Sea Chapter 115. New York, 6th floor of the Daily Bugle building. In a utility room, Namor, with a bruised nose and swollen face, lay motionless on the ground. If his eyes weren't moving from time to time under his bruised eyelids, uninformed people might have thought that this guy was dead. Victor and Logan were guarding the door, holding beers in their hands and drinking heavily, when crisp footsteps came from not far away. The two brothers were familiar with this sound, because their vibranium suits would make this sound when walking on the concrete floor. The two quickly threw the bottle into the trash can, stood at attention with their legs together, and waited for the owner of the voice to arrive. Soon, a familiar figure appeared at the corner, with a tall and perfect figure, a handsome face and a familiar red cloak. The person who came was none other than Gino Wilson, their immediate boss. Behind Gino were Peggy, who was holding a camera, and Natasha, who was holding a wooden box. Steve was carrying a blue-skinned humanoid creature wearing a golden armor on his shoulders. Steve put his hands on the man's butt to prevent him from falling. Gino came to the two of them. There was a smell of beer in the air, but he didn't pay attention. He just nodded at the door of the storage room and motioned for the two to bring Namor out. The two brothers quickly dragged the immobile Namor out of the storage room. Lying on the cold floor, the bacteria and dust on the floor seeped into Namor's wound, causing burning pain. But these are nothing. The Underwater King was full of expectations and said with a trembling voice, "Have you got those equipments?" No wonder Namor was excited. He seemed to be able to see that the hope of revenge was close at hand. When he returns to the throne, he will launch a massive war against his enemies in mainland China. Even if it means heaps of human lives, he will kill the damn Gino to wash away the shame he suffered during this period. Meeting Namor's expectant gaze, Gino's expression was half smiling. He knelt down and stared into Namor's eyes, and said in a playful tone, "Of course, I found those things, and I even brought you a surprise." As he spoke, Gino snapped his fingers, and Steve put down the underwater man on his shoulders, and then gently pinched the underwater man's middle. After a few seconds, the underwater man stood up suddenly with tears in his eyes. He gasped for air. His blue skin it also turns green due to lack of sea water. The man glanced around in horror, his eyes passing by Natasha and the others one by one. When he saw Gino squatting not far away and the familiar red cloak, the undersea man suddenly trembled with fear. He couldn't stop retreating by using his hands and feet. "Stay here." Natasha kicked the underwater man over, and the other party's peripheral vision also caught sight of an unexpected figure. Although the figure lying on the ground looked very embarrassed, the familiar green shorts, strong figure, and greasy blonde hair all revealed the identity of the other person, Namor Mackenzie, the Undersea King. "Your Majesty the King." The man from the bottom of the sea screamed, kneeling on the ground and kowtowing uncontrollably. His forehead hit the floor with a dong-dong sound. The underwater man kowtowed and said in a puzzled tone, "Great King, why do you appear here?" As he spoke, a guess suddenly came to the mind of the underwater man. He was afraid of peeking at Gino. Could it be that his king was also captured by this cruel landman and became a prisoner? Namor's face looked a little ugly. He didn't expect that damn Gino to bring back an undersea soldier. "You are a king, don't you want to lose face?" But Gino didn't give Namor time to react. He slowly stood up and turned his attention to the blue-skinned undersea man. "Want to be a king?" Gino's words were like thunder that exploded in the hearts of the two underwater people. Namor looked stunned and couldn't believe what he heard. He quickly asked loudly, "Gino Wilson, what are you doing? This is completely different from what we said." Namor was angry, and even more panicked. Could it be that Gino wanted to support another blue-skinned man to sit on the throne? Namor struggled to stand up, but two strong men, Logan and Victor, rushed forward and pressed them down with their hands and feet. He was unable to stand up, and he lay on the ground in an extremely surrendered position. "Haha." Gino looked at Namor with a smile and said, "Nemo, you know what you really think." The young man slowly knelt down and patted Namor's cheek gently and said, "If I let you go back, of course you will retaliate against me. And my purpose in life is never to let my enemies live. So, the best way is to let you die at the hands of your own kind." As he spoke, Gino shook his head as if he was a little moved. He was really kind. Letting his fellow tribesmen kill Namor would satisfy the pride of the Underwater King for the last time. "You bastard." Namor roared ferociously, but the next second, Gino's eyes glowed red, and the hot light poured into Namor's mouth, instantly melting the man's tongue and emitting a burnt smell. "What? Shut your mouth, Namor." Gino turned off his heat vision and turned to look at the submarine man kneeling on the ground with a smile on his face. At this moment, the other party was like a chicken that had caught wind. He was so frightened that he couldn't stop shaking after seeing Gino's cruel behavior. Snapped. Gino took out a vibranium dagger with a cold light from his vibranium belt and threw it to the undersea man. Gino concealed the smile on his face, stared at the other person coldly and said, "Pick up this dagger and kill your king." "No, no, he is the king. I dare not." The undersea man shook his head wildly, as if the dagger on the floor was a poisonous snake spitting out letters. The old authority was like a mountain, weighing on his heart and making him unable to breathe. Not to mention picking up a knife and stabbing the representative of authority, the king of Atlantis. However, the evil landman said indifferently, "Either he dies or you die. My friend, now, you have an opportunity to reach the sky in one step, but you are holding back. Just kill him and I promise, I will help you become the king of Atlantis." Gino's words continued to shake the minds of the people under the sea. Gino continued, "Think about it, this hybrid has ruled your Atlantis for so many years, enjoying beautiful women, wealth, and delicious food that you cannot enjoy. And as long as you kill him, you can get everything from him." The people under the sea couldn't help but recall everything in their minds, from an ordinary person to a king, enjoying the most extreme material enjoyment. By some strange mistake, he reached out and grasped the vibranium dagger on the ground. Gino winked at Peggy, and the camera started recording everything. Seeing that the faces of the people under the sea are getting weirder and weirder, Namor, whose mouth was burned, shook his head crazily in protest. He tried to make the submarine soldier in front of him retreat with his fierce eyes, but the other party slowly picked up the dagger on the ground under his gaze. Ho. The underwater man was breathing frantically in an attempt to calm down his excitement, and his trembling arms proved the inner struggle and excitement of this guy. The Daily Bugle. The midday sun shines through the glass into this conference room. Waves of sunlight shone on the blue-skinned head of the man at the bottom of the sea, flickering in and out of light. He clenched the vibranium dagger in his hand and stared at Neptune Namor, who fell on the ground with wide eyes. The blue-skinned man's voice trembled, and he suppressed the fear and excitement in his heart and said, "I'm sorry, forgive me, King. I want to live, and I want to marry Maria. I want everything you have." He roared, leaped towards the king, and sent the sharp blade into Namor's neck with his right hand. Pfft! The blade cut through the skin and severed Namor's windpipe, causing the king to fall to the ground. Blood flowed out from the blood vessels and wet the floor. At this moment, Namor was like a fish out of water, his whole body twitching violently, and his eyes were full of resentment. Gino in the distance wanted to say something, but his scratched throat was like a leaky trachea making a ho-ho sound. Until more and more blood flowed out, Namor died in the conference room with his eyes wide open. Ho. The blue-skinned man who killed the king himself dropped the dagger in his hand and gasped for air. "Very good, Peggy, have you captured everything?" Gino's demonic words rang in the blue man's ears, and his expression suddenly froze. When he saw the camera pointed at him, he immediately guessed that this might be some kind of recording device to record the atrocities of his regicide. As he thought about it, his face became paler. However, a big hand gently fell on his shoulder, and the evil young man's voice rang in his ears. "Don't worry, my friend, you are a friend of our land people. As long as you obey, I guarantee that we will cooperate happily." The underwater man wanted to say something, but the handle fell into Gino's hands, so he could only shrink and nod in agreement. Just when Gino was about to make his next plan, "Boss, White House cable." Natasha walked out and came back at some point. Her face was a little ugly and she said, "Atlantis seems to have sent a threatening letter to the top management. Now the entire American top management is in chaos." Gino was not surprised at all by this sudden news. He smiled and rubbed his companion's cheek, then pulled Peggy to rub his companion's hair, and said in a playful tone, "Guess how many people will use this matter to attack me? The top executives in the United States are like annoying flies. Whenever there is a slight flaw, these guys will swarm him, not to mention that Gino's reputation and power are at the peak now, which has made many people jealous." Peggy sneered and said, "Others may not know it, but there is definitely old Jack. But don't kill him in public." Peggy quickly advised, "It will have a bad impact." "Of course, I understand." Gino smiled, let go, and walked towards the glass window. Gino turned around and said, "But if he seeks death, I will prepare a surprise for him." After the words fell, Gino's figure flashed and disappeared in front of the window. Everyone only heard an explosion and a thin white line drew across the clouds outside the window. The White House on the other side. In the conference room, the circular office was filled with big shots from all parties. The Navy and Army factions were still clearly divided into two waves, and Laudu, who was sitting in the middle, had a sad look on his face. A group of people were staring at the big screen at the top, which was playing the threatening declaration of the elder of the underwater people. "Your General Gino Wilson killed our king, and the land people must pay reparations to Atlantis." Immediately, a cloud of snowflakes burst out at the end of the video. The moment the scene ended, a quarrel broke out in the conference room. "Damn it, this is a declaration of war against our free America." The militant faction within the military took the lead in protesting. "Throw dirty bombs at them and let them know how powerful our America is. Communication should be established. There may be some misunderstanding." This is the voice of the peace-promoting faction. After all, people have different faces, and the top leaders of the United States also have peace-promoting voices, and there are even neutral ones. "Gentlemen, you may have forgotten one of the most important issues." Old Jack slowly stood up and said with a cold face, "The people under the sea said in the video that it was Admiral Gino who killed their king, which caused the underwater people have grudges against us. In other words, this dispute was entirely caused by Gino, and we should hold him accountable. Even. Old Jack sneered, revealing his true nature, and said clearly, his position should be revoked to avoid such tragedies from happening again. Old Jack's hatred for Gino did not dissipate over time, but intensified. He wished bad luck to Gino all the time. And today, he finally got the chance. He was going to make Gino pay. By the way, he wanted to avenge his dead friends. Both Arthur and George were killed by Gino. After Old Jack finished speaking, the originally noisy room immediately fell into a long silence. Well, Admiral Gino does this kind of thing for everyone's benefit. An admiral said. Yes, the people under the sea are ambitious and will take action against free America sooner or later. Admiral Gino is doing it for everyone's good. To Old Jack's surprise, many generals present were frantically trying to explain to Gino. There is a saying that goes well, when you have strength, you will have friends everywhere. Everyone is not a fool. Help Old Jack deal with the god on earth, unless they are crazy. Just when Old Jack opened his mouth and wanted to say something more, the guard's exclamation sounded outside the White House window. Oh my god. What is that? Before everyone could realize what happened, the White House guards were amazed. They heard a dull sound above their heads. The next second, a cement block broke and smashed the round table. A group of well-dressed and respectable people screamed like frightened monkeys and jumped up to avoid the broken pieces. Stone. A figure slowly drifted down in the smoke. Everyone's eyes widened, and they had vague guesses about the person coming. As the smoke and dust dissipated, Gino slowly appeared in front of everyone wearing a vibranium armor. At this moment, many big guys in the room had expressions so ugly that they seemed to be dripping with water. They were dissatisfied with Gino's behavior of falling from the sky, smashing the ceiling and breaking into the meeting. But people are so realistic. Faced with the absolute supreme force, everyone still chose to remain silent. Gino flicked his cloak and sat where Old Jack was sitting before. Then he stared at everyone with playful eyes and said, "What are the generals doing standing there? Sit down quickly." He spoke naturally, as if he was the owner of this room. Many generals poked secretly at him with their peripheral vision that indicated to President Laudu to say something. But Laudu sat down first with a smile on his face as usual, and even expressed concern for Gino. "Admiral Gino, you have worked hard for a free America." This dog-licking style disappointed many generals, but they, "Admiral Jack, what are you doing standing there?" Gino tilted his head and stared at Old Jack, with a playful tone. "Is it because you are old? You haven't been sitting for a long time. In this case, you might as well write a resignation report to the Pentagon and go home to retire. I will send the boys from the Tianjian Bureau to drive you home." Listening to Gino's humiliating words, Old Jack's face turned red with anger. He stared at Gino with his eyes and swallowed the words that came to his mouth. Or the president acted as a peacemaker and asked, "Admiral Gino, the people under the sea want to declare war on us. What do you think about this?" Gino now seems to be an important figure in free America. Not to mention that the president had just seen the vibranium cannon developed by Gino's Skyward Sword Bureau not long ago. Without joking, the president's eyes were full of expectation at this moment, and he wished he could immediately ask Gino to pull out the vibranium cannon and teach the people under the sea a profound lesson. The admirals of the Navy and Army may be worried, but in the president's eyes, the undersea people are not a threat at all, which is why he supports Gino. After all, how could Filonki lose? What do you think? Gino glanced at everyone, leaned forward and knocked on the table, and said with a serious look on his face, "This is the undersea people's declaration of war on us. And free America never compromises." Gino repeated S.H.I.E.L.D's Nico's slogan, which immediately attracted applause from the main combatants. Admiral Gino is right. What about Atlantis? We in the United States have nuclear weapons. Listening to the noise of these generals, Gino couldn't help but cover his head with a headache. This was why he didn't want to play with the military. No matter what problems they encountered, the reaction of these guys was definitely use nuclear. Use nuclear? If it doesn't work, it must be that nuclear is not used enough. When Old Jack heard Gino's words, he couldn't help but sneered and said mockingly, "Since it is a declaration of war, this dispute was caused by Admiral Gino, and it should be handled by Admiral Gino." Old Jack stared at Gino with a sinister look. No matter how strong this guy was, he couldn't fight against a country, especially a country as terrifying as the undersea people. However, to Old Jack's surprise, Gino just smiled calmly and said, "I am here to tell you that we, the Tianjian Bureau, will never compromise in the face of the provocation of the people under the sea. I will teach the people under the sea a profound lesson, so please rest assured." Gino glanced at the many generals and said, "I just hope that some people will not hinder the Tianjian Bureau." As soon as these words came out, it was like a depth charge was dropped on the calm lake. Everyone looked strange, but many people still cast their peripheral vision at Old Jack standing in the corner. Gino's words were meaningful, like a slap on Old Jack's face. At this time, Old Jack could no longer bear the anger in his heart. The 4-star general clenched his fists and taunted, "Yes, General Gino thinks he can deal with a country. Don't let us suffer the disaster with you. That's good." "Ha." Gino chuckled, and then stood up slowly under everyone's gaze. The atmosphere condensed for a moment, as if someone had thrown hundreds of tons of ice into it. Many of Old Jack's colleagues looked worried, fearing that Gino would be unhappy and use heat vision to melt Old Jack. But Gino didn't do that. Instead, he slowly walked up to old Jack, gently reached out and patted old Jack on the shoulder and said, "What, you're not convinced?" The next second, old Jack's expression changed drastically, and an extremely terrifying force suddenly pressed down. The palm on his shoulder was like an iron block pressing down on his body, preventing him from moving at all. I said, "Are you not convinced, Admiral Jack?" Gino emphasized his tone, with a sunny smile on his face. Old Jack clenched his fists tightly, but no matter how angry he was, he could not change the fact that he was threatened. He finally lowered his head in humiliation and said in a whisper, "I agree with your decision." "Very good." Gino smiled and let go of old Jack, and the terrifying pressure was immediately gone. The man's back was wet with sweat, and he gasped for air. Gino glanced at everyone with his hands behind his back, then chuckled and said, "Next, my Skyward Sword Bureau will accept the threat from Atlantis. You can go home and wait for the good news." After saying this, Gino raised his head slightly, and the next second it disappeared like a cannonball. In front of everyone, he left through the big hole in the ceiling above his head, leaving only a group of ugly-looking senior generals. Gino flew out of the Oval White House, and then flew straight towards the Skyward Sword Bureau. Whoosh! Gino landed lightly at the door of Tianjian Bureau. Gino still cherished his own property. Gino walked into the building, and the agents working on the first floor of the building smiled and greeted Gino. Gino smiled and nodded in agreement. He glanced at the display cabinets on the first floor. The poor Japanese demon was still locked in the display cabinet. From time to time, overworked agents would run to the display cabinet and knock on the glass to provoke the demon. Namer's head will soon be placed next to Kang's for company. Gino withdrew his gaze and pressed the elevator button for floor 6. "Take the elevator to the 6th floor." Gino stepped out of the elevator. The 6th floor of the Skyward Sword Bureau is allocated to the members of its Super Sentai team. Peggy and Natasha both have their own houses here, but they usually do not live on the 6th floor. Instead, they stay on the 7th floor with Gino. Gino walked through the corridor and came to the door numbered 606. He knocked on the door gently and said, "Rowan, are you in there?" There was a sound of brisk footsteps in the house, and soon, the door opened, and a blonde girl wearing a white undershirt stood timidly in front of the door and looked at Gino. "Ancestors, people from the motherland. The girl is a little afraid of strangers." Gino looked at Mystique, who was now pretending to be a popular young actress, her eyes evasive and did not dare to look directly at him. Gino smiled helplessly, and said in a slower tone, "Just call me Gino." Raven obeyed and changed her words, "Okay, Sir Gino." "Yes." Gino nodded with a smile, then bent down and rubbed Raven's little head and said, "Are you interested in going on a mission with me?" "Go on a mission?" Raven's little face was full of excitement. The originally timid girl was uncharacteristically looking at Gino excitedly and raised her little feet. Can I? To be honest, I have been a little depressed recently, and the reason is simple. Although Sister Natasha and Sister Peggy are usually very kind to me, when it comes to emergency tasks, they will not let me participate." Although she knew this was to protect her, Raven still wanted to prove her worth. Her unfortunate childhood experience told her that if she has no value, she will not be valued, and if she is not valued, she can only be abandoned. But now, Gino is willing to give her this opportunity, so the little girl is naturally very excited. "Of course, you are crucial to this operation, Raven." Gino smiled and patted the girl on the head and said, "Let's go to New York to perform the mission." "Yeah." The girl nodded quickly, grabbed Gino's big hand and followed the young man out of the house. New York. When Gino and Raven rushed to the Daily Bugle conference room, the girl's face turned pale and she ran straight to the trash can as soon as she landed. Gino was a little helpless. Why were both of them airsick? His speed is obviously very slow. Fortunately, as a mutant, Raven has good recovery abilities. The girl quickly adjusted herself and sat on the chair in the conference room. At the current round conference table, Gino was sitting in the main seat, and the conference tables on both sides were full of talents. "Now that everyone is here, I will announce the next plan." Gino tapped the table with his fingers. Everyone looked stern and sat upright, as if listening attentively. "First of all, we already know the location of the Siren, the capital of Atlantis." Gino handed a stack of documents to Peggy and motioned for the woman to pass it on. Everyone got the documents and looked through them while listening to Gino's arrangements. Gino took out a box from his side and put it on the table. He slowly said to everyone, "Our plan is very simple. There is equipment here that can support us breathing under the sea. With this equipment, we can raid Atlantis, the royal capital of Sri Lanka. However, the Council of Elders is heavily guarded. I will divide you into 2 groups, A and B. Team A, led by Peggy, took Natasha and went straight to the submarine camp, throwing energy grenades in to create chaos. Team B is led by Steve, bringing along Victor and Logan to create chaos in the city and attract firepower. This plan was made by Gino after careful consideration, and it is also the plan that best suits their respective abilities. For example, Natasha's invisibility ability can easily throw a large C4 made by the cosmic cube into the submarine camp to kill most of the soldiers, preventing them from supporting the capital and wasting Gino's time. The 3 Steves are real human shields. The powerful regeneration abilities of Wolverine and Saber-Tooth Tiger can easily distract the undersea people in the city, creating time for Gino's raid plan. It's not that Gino can't do these things alone, but having someone to cooperate can save a lot of time. After talking about his plan, Gino glanced at everyone, put his chin on his hands and asked lazily, "Does anyone have any opinions?" Everyone shook their heads. The document sent by Gino had recorded in detail the location of the military camps and the streets and alleys of the undersea capital. All I could say was that Namor should be thanked for his help. Without this guy, he would not have been able to obtain such detailed information. But now that Namor is dead, it may not be long before his head will be put in an exhibition cabinet to keep Kong company. In this case, each person has 2 respirators and we are ready to take action. The capital of Atlantis. Sirens. It is said that in the early days when the gods came to create the underwater people in Atlantis, the underwater people race gave birth to a beautiful creature called the siren. However, as the times changed, this beautiful creature gradually became extinct, and the underwater people, in order to in memory of this race, their royal capital was named Siren. But these histories can only be the dessert after the Feast of Power. At the top of the royal capital Siren, a group of undersea nobles wearing golden robes gathered together to discuss the birth of a new king. Damn it, Namor took the trident with him when he left. How can we establish the legitimacy of the new king? A group of undersea nobles scolded the former king Namor as usual and were about to move on to the next topic. Just for a moment. Boom. A violent explosion sounded in everyone's ears. Everyone looked through the glass water window and saw terrifying waves rising from the submarine military camp in the distance. The original location turned into a deep pit on the seabed, and countless seawater followed the depths. The pit poured in backwards. What happened? A group of underwater nobles stared wide-eyed. But before they could finish digesting the news that the king's guards had been sacked, a submarine soldier stumbled into the conference room. His blue skin was full of panic, and he said with a grimace, "Elder Nadia? Our king has been sacked. Attacked. Several landmen broke into 6th Street and are killing our companions like crazy." This series of news is like a heavy blow on the faces of the elders on the sea floor. The faces of these blue-skinned men are filled with confusion at this moment, as if they are saying, "Who am I and where am I? Damn it, don't be in a daze, come with me." The great Elder Nadia reacted quickly. He interrupted everyone's contemplation by stamping his feet angrily, and then led a group of elders angrily to the city to defend against the invaders. The guards watching the gate saluted and watched many elders leave. A few minutes later, the guards were surprised to find that Elder Nadia had left and returned, followed by a blue-skinned underwater man and a land man wearing a silver suit and a red cloak. This. The 2 undersea people stared wide-eyed. Why did the land people appear here? While they were thinking, Elder Nadia led several people towards here. And the most important thing is that the great elder is holding the sacred trident in his hand. This is a symbol of royal power. For a while, people can't help but wonder. Could it be that the great elder has usurped the throne? The 2 of them opened their mouths to ask something, but Elder Nadia just glanced at a few people coldly, and they immediately understood and closed their mouths without saying anything. After all, who doesn't know that in Atlantis, Elder Nadia is the second uncrowned king? In this way, the 2 guards watched and allowed several people to enter the sacred meeting hall. A few people just walked into the hall and closed the stone door. Elder Nadia quickly opened his mouth and let out a breath, with a clear voice, "I was scared to death. Haha, didn't you successfully infiltrate the royal capital?" Gino walked in the empty ocean hall with his hands behind his back. "Frant, turn on the live broadcast equipment in this room." As the Atlantis Government Hall, the conference room is naturally equipped with advanced live broadcast equipment, allowing people across the country to watch the live broadcast. Gino's voice reached the ears of the blue-skinned underwater man. His hands trembled with excitement and he quickly followed Gino's instructions and walked to the 4 corners of the hall. Immediately, several robotic spheres similar to unmanned aerial vehicles flew to high altitudes and shed bright blue light on the 4 people. At the same time, outside the royal capital, people watching TV at home noticed that the screen flashed, and then the great Elder Nadia was holding a trident and staring at the screen with a sad face. Next to him stood a man in golden armor, blue-skinned undersea man. The other person flinched and looked at the screen, but the landman behind him slowly took a step forward. He didn't know what he said in the blue man's ear. The other man immediately straightened his chest and said in standard London English, "Hello, everyone under the sea. I want to tell you some heavy news. Not long ago, our King Namor Mackenzie was unfortunately assassinated. And the murderers are evil undersea people disguised as great elders. They are trying to kill the king and take complete control of Atlantis. Simply, our land friend Mr. Gino Wilson helped us find the real great elder, but his voice has also been poisoned by the evil group and he can't speak." Gino put on an oxygen mask and took a step forward with grief on his face. He put his right hand on his chest and saluted slightly. He said in a low tone, fellow undersea people, I regret to inform you that your king, Mr. Namor, died due to the conspiracy of the elders." Down. In front of the screen, Gino had a calm temperament and a low tone. He stood tall and looked directly at the camera and said, "My fellow undersea people, this is a conspiracy. The elders are trying to subvert the king's regime and make Atlantis their private property. The reason why they murdered King Namor is also very simple. King Namor wanted to exempt himself from the sea tax, but was blocked by the elders. This also became the motive for the elders to kill him. Because most of the taxes you pay fall into the pockets of these elders." These words are not random words from Gino, but the information revealed by Namor before. The principle is simple. The king of Atlantis has the highest authority, but he cannot kill the elders, and the elders are responsible for construction and tax collection. There are many ways here. Namor also secretly sent people to check on the group of elders before he was alive. Those old guys had hundreds of sets of underwater houses in their hands, and they knew with their toes that there was something fishy about them. Gino continued to fan the flames and said, through this method, the elders live in the best seabed room on the seabed and enjoy the service of beautiful undersea girls. Of course they don't intend to let Namor go, but as a friend of the wife of King Namor's father's brother's son, I, Gino Wilson, will naturally not allow the great Atlantis to fall into the hands of the evil elders. Gino puffed out his chest, imitating Steve's posture, and his aura of greatness immediately infected every undersea person in front of the screen. Gino said slowly, before he died, King Namor expressed that he would hand over the Trident throne to the young undersea man next to him. He will inherit Namor's last wish, exempt half of the taxes of the people under the sea, eliminate the evil and greedy elder group, and distribute their wealth to the people under the sea. I have to say that Gino's words are very effective. Do Atlanteans care who their king is? Value. But when a new king can bring them a better life, it no longer seems to matter who the king is. A group of undersea people looked excited. Half of the taxes were exempted, and they could still harvest the stolen goods of the evil elders? There is such a good thing? Gino was not the only one watching the underwater live broadcast. Under the big underwater screen in the center of the city, Elder Nadia was leading a group of underwater elders to gape at Gino talking on the screen. Am I a fake? Nadia rubbed her cheeks in disbelief and looked at Nadia on the screen. There was no difference between the two in terms of look, appearance, or even skin color. As if carved out of a mold. He is fake, I am the real one. Nadia was furious. However, when Gino talked about the corruption of the elders under the sea, these elders jumped like cats whose tails were stepped on, and yelled without any aristocratic demeanor, slander. This is moral slander. The damn land people want to destroy we are Atlantis. Hurry up and mobilize the troops to enter the conference hall and kill the imposter and the damn land man. Nadia took a deep breath and quickly took out her undersea communication equipment to contact the nearest undersea legion. But no matter how I contacted, there were only busy signals and rejections. Nadia contacted several more legion commanders, but without exception no one got through. At this moment, the corners of Nadia's blue face pulled down, revealing a cold expression. It seems that these wallflowers have chosen to wait and see. Nadia looked up at the trident on the screen and couldn't help but secretly hate Namor again. The trident was too intimidating to the people under the sea. At this moment, other underwater elders also asked the question Nadia wanted to ask. What should we do? At this time, a chuckle sounded from the corner of the undersea street. I think I can give you the answer. A red cloak was gently swung. Gino put his hands behind his back, followed by a group of undersea people armed with spear weapons and headed this way. Come. The great elder glanced at the submarine soldiers following Gino, and couldn't help but look gloomy. Those soldiers were the closest First Legion. It seemed that the other party had chosen to bet on the other side and abandoned the group of elders. His gaze passed over the soldier and rested on Gino, whose head was half the height of the others, and he said bitterly, "Land people." Nadia's face turned ugly, and she immediately pulled out the energy pistol from her robe and pulled the trigger at Gino. Bio. The lavender energy ray was not affected by the sea water at all, but instantly hit the vibranium armor on Gino's chest, leaving a burnt black mark. That's it. Gino shrugged, shook his head with a smile, and walked slowly towards the elders step by step. There was a distance of 100 meters, and it only took a few seconds for Gino to arrive in front of everyone. Then Nadia felt a pain in her throat. He stared at Gino with wide eyes in horror as he suddenly stood in front of him. A pair of iron hands gripped his neck tightly. Gino stared at Nadia with a smile on his face and said, "You like to mock me, huh? Oh, you devil." The great elder only had regret in his eyes at this moment. He regretted why he provoked this demon and brought them disaster. It's not too late to leave curses in hell. Gino smiled, and the strength in his hands increased instead of decreasing. His 5 fingers squeezed the elder's throat tightly, and the bones made a clicking sound under the huge force. His body structure was different from that of land people. The elder, who didn't look much different, tilted his head, and a lot of blue liquid flowed from his mouth and nose and floated into the sea. Gino threw the great elder's body away, then turned around and left, killed them all, leaving no one behind. A real man never looks back. Gino only heard the sound of Biubio from the energy of the spear behind him. Along with the screams of many underwater people, this power struggle finally came to an end. Although it has come to an end, the bad guys represented by the Great Elder have been killed, and the people in the sea seem to have returned to their former joy, but there are still many things to deal with next. For example, when the new King Frank comes to power, there are still many people in Atlantis who are dissatisfied with the new king's rule. There are also commanders of the First Legion who help Frank consolidate his power. They also need to pay corresponding rewards, and those who promised the people need to fulfill their promises, etc. Waiting for troubles. But none of this has anything to do with Gino. He is not the father of the underwater people wiping their butts. What he has to do now is to take away his share of the huge reward. When Gino returned to the palace, the new King Frank, holding a trident, was already sitting on the throne at the top of the conference hall. When the young king saw Gino, he immediately showed a flattering smile. "Admiral Gino, you are here. What you asked for is ready." Frank personally handed Gino two storage devices similar to USB flash drives with both hands, and these small things contained thousands of years of scientific and technological development of underwater people. They provided a lot of good treasures to Gino, many of which were cutting-edge technologies. They just packaged them up and gave them to Gino. For example, the manufacturing drawings of energy firearms, the manufacturing drawings of marine respirators, etc. King Frank, I'm glad that we can cooperate well. Gino looked at the new king with a half-smile but said, the people on land and under the sea will always be good friends. The war is over. As the saying goes, history is written by the victors. Although Frank, the undersea man, has just taken office, he can't wait to hold the undersea conference. The so-called undersea conference is to gather the people of the royal capital to the undersea people square for a meeting. Unable to resist the king's hospitality, Gino led his team to stay one night in the underwater world. The technology of the people under the sea can fully discharge seawater into a room and fill it with oxygen, so Gino and Peggy Natasha slept very comfortably that night. When Gino came to the palace restaurant, he saw Steve and Logan quarreling, while Victor was watching the excitement with his hands folded. Logan, that's the underwater princess. How can you talk to her? It was Steve who spoke, and the electric boy looked awkward at the moment. Logan grinned and was about to curse a few words, but saw Gino walking towards him with his female companion, and simply turned his head and ignored Steve. What happened? Gino walked over with his hands behind his back, staring down at Victor and asked. Victor didn't mind seeing the excitement, and the man grinned and said, Boss, Logan was wandering around the underwater palace last night, and he met the former princess of the ocean. The two didn't know how to look at each other, and they fell out. Listening to Victor's explanation, Gino and the others had strange expressions. Although this is considered the private life of the team members, Gino imagined the scene of Logan and the blue-skinned bald man entangled in his heart, and couldn't help but feel a chill. The old boy has such a strong taste. Peggy, on the other hand, sneered to express her opinion of Logan. All I can say is that Logan is really a walking teddy, not picky about food. Thank God, everyone, I finally found you. At this time, King Frank came and greeted several people eagerly. The undersea conference is about to begin. Please come with me. So a few people followed the king out of the palace door and got into the undersea man's car. The car, which looked like a small spaceship, quickly took everyone to the Siren Square, the capital of the undersea king. This is the royal capital square. Frank looked nervously at the crowd of underwater people in the square, while a huge podium was erected above. Frank stepped off the sea car and followed the attendant to the podium with a nervous expression. As the new king, Frank naturally carries a trident in his hand that symbolizes the king's authority. Originally, Gino planned to leave this trident at the Skyward Sword Bureau for research, but now he will lend it to Frank for a while. Frank's speech didn't have any amazing words, and it was so fake and empty that Gino fell asleep after listening to it. However, this time we need the help of one person to fight against the evil elders, and that is the landman, Mr. Gino Wilson. He helped us expose the corrupt face of the evil elders. Now please tell us, Admiral Gino. Peggy quickly poked Gino in the waist. I called you. Oh, I also have a speech session. Gino pinched his chin, not disgusted with Frank's flattery. In that case, let's go up and say a few words. Gino lifted his cloak, and his body broke through the waves, passing over the heads of the people under the sea like a sharp arrow. In just an instant, a tall and strong body wearing a vibranium armor stood there. The podium is in sharp contrast to the thin Frank beside him. The crowd exclaimed. To the people under the sea, the person in front of them had different skin and hair. However, the person wearing a vibranium armor and a red cloak still made many people under the sea think it was very cool. Everyone. Gino took the microphone-like thing handed over by Frank, glanced at everyone, and said with a calm expression, this is what I should do. I also have a title on land, a citizen of the motherland. Gino slowly opened his arms, and then floated in the ocean midair. The magic floating cloak swayed in unison, and the cloak hunted. The colorful lights of the people under the sea hit his back like a god. My motto is, the righteous people of the motherland will not sit back and watch the people of the sea being oppressed. Whether we are people under the sea or people on land, we are all one family. I will not sit back and watch the people at the bottom of the sea suffer. The crowd was silent for a moment, and then cheers flooded the square like a roaring tsunami. Every underwater person has excitement on their face. Look at the pattern of the people on land. What kind of selfless spirit is this? They regard the people under the sea as family. To sum up, in one sentence, Gino, a landman, can handle it. Mr. Motherland, he is the true friend of the underwater people. The days of joyful gatherings are always short-lived. After the Undersea People's Conference, Gino led everyone to leave Atlantis. With the ocean craft presented by the king, several people bypassed New York and controlled the craft to land at a port not far from Washington. It was not only Gino who returned to Skyward Sword Bureau, but also Namer's body. Well, lock him in. Gino tapped the exhibition cabinet not far away with his chin and directed his agents to carry Namer away. The agents carried Namer away, and Gino returned to the 7th floor office. Before my butt gets hot, there is a knock on the office door. Come in. Crack. 3 figures walked into the office noisily. The visitors were none other than Erskine, Zola, and Howard. Gino turned his chair, leaned on the recliner, stared at the 3 of them, and said with a half-smile, is something wrong? In fact, There is no need to think about it. It must be Victor or some loudmouth in Logan who revealed what he had learned in the underwater world, which made the 3 scientists rush to find Gino. Sir Gino. Howard put on a flattering expression. This kind of expression is rare on the proud face of Howard. But today, I heard that Gino had obtained the undersea technology. This guy didn't care about being reserved. Undersea man technology. Thousands of years of development technology is in Gino's hands, which is enough to make any scientist crazy. I know what you are here for. Gino chuckled lightly, and without giving in, he took out the undersea man's storage device from his pocket and threw it to the 3 of them. The USB disc-shaped storage device drew an arc in the air, and the 3 people quickly held it in their hands as if they had found a treasure. It records the marine technology of Atlantis. Their use of sea water is far greater than that of land people. Gino explained to the 3 of them, crack the project as soon as possible to find a project that our Skysword Bureau can use. Gino stood up again, looked out the window with his hands behind his back and said, I want to make Tianjian Bureau stronger. The 3 of them nodded hurriedly and left with the storage device. After the 3 people left, Gino sat back in his seat, took out the contact number from the drawer and made a call. Soon, a male voice came from the other end of the phone. The other person's voice was low and full of respect. Admiral Gino, you are looking for me. Yes. Gino said calmly, his eyes swept across the desk, and he said with a smile, yesterday, Admiral Jack expressed his dissatisfaction with me, and I can't bear to see others dislike me. Gino didn't finish what he said, but the voiceover was already heard on the other end of the phone. He said, your wishes, Admiral.